An imposing spellcaster summons a flock of magical beasts, demonstrating the rare and powerful occupation of a beast tamer who bends creatures to his will. However, a close-up of his shadowed, serious face suggests that taming beasts is not as simple as it seems. The scene shifts to an aerial view of Grayla, a peaceful town nestled near the border. Here, 12-year-old children gather to receive a life-defining job appraisal from the local priest. A 12-year-old boy named Locke stares in wide-eyed shock as he is officially assigned the beast tamer class. His childhood friends instantly surround him, expressing their awe and excitement over his cool new title. 12-year-old magic user EMI cheerfully marvels at the incredible rarity of his occupation. Locke smiles sheepishly, noting that the appraising priest didn't actually know anything about the class. 12-year-old Saintess Kara and 12-year-old gladiator Isaac quickly reassure Locke, proudly declaring their unwavering belief in his potential. Visibly moved by their profound support, Locke beams and warmly thanks his friends. Showing his unwavering camaraderie, Isaac playfully bumps his fist against Locke's chest. Brimming with fiery confidence, Isaac vows to become the strongest gladiator in the entire world. Matching his intense energy, EMI proudly declares her ambition to become the world's best magic user. Kara shyly but firmly resolves to become a saintess capable of healing any wound. Inspired by his companion's fierce ambitions, Locke promises to become the ultimate beast tamer. The four friends bring their fists together in a tight circle, swearing to work hard and forge an S-rank party. They raise their joined hands high into the air, cementing their lifelong pact to conquer the world together. Smiling brightly, Locke reflects that his specific occupation never truly mattered as long as they stayed united. He simply wanted to have fun and stand firmly by his friends' sides no matter what. To that noble end, Locke resolved to become the vital support his friends needed to achieve their grand dreams. 3 years later, heavy rain violently pours over the sprawling royal capital of Kronto. A lone, cloaked figure dashes through the stormy streets toward a glowing multi-story inn. Soaked and exhausted, 15-year-old Locke cracks the door open, panting in utter relief at finally being back. However, he freezes as he overhears a chilling proposition from inside to kick him out of the party. His teammates mockingly dismiss his beast tamer title, complaining that since he hasn't tamed a single monster, his only use is carrying baggage. Isaac harshly criticizes Locke, claiming he only does simple odd jobs that anyone else could easily handle. EMI attempts to defend Locke, gently reminding the hostile group that he has been actively trying to improve his situation. She hesitatingly points out that they are now a well-respected S-rank party, implying they can easily afford to keep him. Kara coldly cuts her off, insisting they absolutely cannot carry a weak, non-combatant teammate forever. EMI falls utterly silent, clearly torn between her childhood loyalty and the cold reality of their party's elite status. Isaac passionately argues that the hero has expressed interest in joining them, presenting an unmissable opportunity for their careers. Kara adds that aligning with the hero will accelerate their dreams and undoubtedly benefit their home village by catching the king's attention. EMI looks away conflicted, while Locke listens in devastated silence just outside the room. Isaac eagerly details their grand plan to meet the hero tomorrow before entering the fearsome dungeon of the Flames of Destruction. Brimming with arrogance, Isaac asserts that with the hero's strength, they will conquer the dungeon and finally say goodbye to Locke. EMI tries to voice one last objection but is immediately ignored by the ambitious duo. Changing the subject entirely, Isaac casually asks Kara if she actually plans to take a dress into the dangerous dungeon tomorrow. Kara laughs off the danger, stating she must bring it to prevent theft and assuming Locke won't mind carrying her extra baggage. Isaac ruthlessly ends the discussion, dismissing Emmy's concerns by suggesting she could just date Locke if she feels so deeply guilty. Standing alone in the shadows, Locke reaches out and quietly pushes the door open. Locke bursts into the hallway, desperately calling out for Isaac to wait. Footsteps echo as Locke insists he still has something important to say. Sweating profusely and clutching his belongings, Locke stares downward in tense silence. He admits that Isaac is right, acknowledging that he has never met a magical beast and that most beast tamers either spend their whole lives searching for one or pursue a different profession entirely. Locke reflects on a beast tamer's actual skills, noting they mainly consist of support magic and equipment enchantments designed to raise their allies' base strength. Despite his combat limitations, Locke tirelessly supported the party by cooking, carrying luggage, scouting, tanking damage, and even handling all cumbersome guild negotiations. Gritting his teeth in frustration, he struggles to articulate his immense unseen contributions. Sitting utterly alone in the dark hallway with his packed bags, Locke miserably realizes that his teammates simply do not understand his worth. The next day, a shining, armor-clad young man named Kid formally introduces himself as the hero, expressing his deep honor at working with an S-rank party from Greyla. Overjoyed by their new recruit, an awestruck teammate whispers to Isaac in absolute disbelief that the hero actually joined them. Isaac silently glances sideways, his expression hardening with a mixture of pride and calculation. As Isaac clicks his tongue in annoyance, Locke stands quietly nearby, heavily burdened by a massive backpack stuffed with the party's gear. Meanwhile, Kid smoothly flatters the female members, declaring himself incredibly blessed to meet such beautiful and combat-skilled ladies. Observing the charismatic newcomer, one of the girls notes his extreme politeness with a hint of hesitation. The lingering suspicion grows as they quietly wonder if Kid is laying the compliments on just a bit too thick. Still carrying the crushing weight of their luggage, Locke watches the unfolding interaction with weary, empty eyes. Suddenly dropping his charming facade, Kid violently snaps at Locke, calling him a servant and demanding he carefully handle items that cost more than his entire life's wages. Witnessing the hero's ugly true colors, the team immediately retracts their earlier praise. EMI quickly steps in to correct Kid, firmly stating that Locke is a party member and not their servant, prompting a dismissive response from the hero. Kid casually points out the absurd luggage, specifically questioning the inclusion of a dress since Locke is carrying everyone's burdens. Isaac sharply cuts the tension, insisting it is perfectly fine for Locke to act as their pack mule and urging the group to finally set off. Stalling their departure, an eager party member asks Kid to reveal more details about his impressive equipment. With a dramatic, metallic ring, Kid triumphantly unsheathes his massive weapon. He proudly brandishes the dragon-slaying blade, boasting that the king personally bestowed it upon him and claiming it possesses the raw power to defeat a dragon. While the others express appropriate awe at the famous, well-crafted blade, Locke squints closely and notices a critical flaw. Startled by his observation, Locke interrupts the boasting to point out a small, dangerous crack developing right on the hilt of the legendary weapon. Deeply insulted, Kid fiercely rebukes Locke, completely denying the crack's existence and ordering him to stop spouting such ridiculous nonsense. Isaac clicks his tongue and mutters an insult, completely dismissing Locke's genuine warning. Smirking cruelly, Isaac tells the hero to ignore the loser and eagerly suggests they head straight for the dungeon. Stepping up to his designated role, Isaac confidently swears he will be the impenetrable shield that protects the entire party from harm. EMI chimes in with fierce determination, promising that their combined magical might will definitely conquer the trials ahead. Kara solemnly completes the combat trinity, assuring the team that they can completely rely on her for flawless healing. The four elite combatants raise their weapons high in a unified, triumphant cheer, entirely excluding Locke from their circle. Standing physically and emotionally apart from the group, Locke watches his childhood friends rally without him. The image flashes back to their innocent youth, when the four original friends excitedly swore to stick together forever. The memory fades back to the harsh present, reflecting in Locke's devastatingly sad and resigned eyes. He quietly reflects on their long journey, knowing in his heart that he always gave his absolute best through every single up and down they faced. Clenching his fists, Locke mourns his simple, shattered dream of just wanting to support his friends as they chased their own grand ambitions. Looking at the fractured silhouettes of his former comrades, he bitterly realizes that he is no longer welcome to support them, even from the distant sidelines. A voice abruptly snaps him out of his reverie as the heavily armed party finally stands before the ominously gaping maw of the Dungeon of Flames of Destruction. Isaac furiously demands to know why Locke is walking so incredibly slowly through the cavern. Ignoring the harsh tone, Locke quietly channels his energy to activate his specialized monster radar. Combining this sensory skill with his map drastically lowers the probability of a dangerous encounter. He deliberately guides them carefully, knowing the fastest route through a dungeon is rarely safest. Growing increasingly impatient, Isaac aggressively snaps and asks if Locke even heard his urgent orders. Startled by the sudden outburst, Locke stammers that he simply cannot walk any faster. Refusing to listen, Isaac furiously commands him to stop making pitiful excuses and walk faster. Kara apologizes to Kid, insisting they only wish to reach the boss as soon as possible. Kid observes fewer monsters around, while Locke silently prays the creatures stay far away. The arrogant hero remarks that a lowly servant remains useful for basic scouting duties. Eager to shift focus, Isaac respectfully asks Kid if he has explored this dungeon before. Kid recounts almost losing his life here exploring with a self-proclaimed, highly skilled adventurer. The hero arrogantly declares he has refused to team up with useless trash ever since. Isaac agrees trash is the worst before abruptly ordering Locke to attack incoming monsters. Locke swiftly engages the sudden monster threat with a precise and decisive strike. Having cleared the immediate path, the burdened beast tamer exhales deeply and prepares for the next. Without gratitude, Isaac furiously screams at Locke for taking too long and failing to move faster. Trembling with rage, the gladiator begs Locke to bring them to the boss immediately. Isaac continues his relentless verbal assault, demanding why Locke simply refuses to understand their objective. Suddenly breaking the tense silence, Kid sharply calls out to Isaac. With utter disgust, the hero reveals Locke hasn't been leading them on the shortest route. Shocked by this revelation, the party turns and demands to know if it is true. Mi questions if Locke intentionally took detours, leaving the anxious beast tamer helplessly stammering. Jumping to conclusions, Isaac angrily accuses Locke of forcing detours as a petty form of revenge. Panic flashes across Locke's face as he frantically stutters and completely denies the horrific accusation. Before the desperate beast tamer can fully explain, a furious party member quickly steps forward. In a shocking display of betrayal, EMI fiercely slaps her childhood friend across the face. Locke's eyes widen in absolute disbelief as the painful shock registers across his stinging cheek. The young magic user glares down at him, her expression clouded by profound disappointment. Condescendingly treating him like a fool, EMI coldly reminds him that this is not a game. With tears threatening to fall, she states she can no longer defend his sabotaging actions. The crushing weight of the situation finally hits Locke, freezing him in horrified realization. His heart shatters upon accepting that even EMI views him exactly like the others do. A painful memory surfaces of Locke explaining his safe routing strategy to avoid dangerous monsters. Drowning in quiet despair, Locke desperately wonders when he managed to lose their absolute trust. Seizing control, Isaac proudly announces they will now take the absolute shortest route to the boss. Brimming with overconfidence, the gladiator foolishly claims they will easily cut down whatever stands in their way. As monsters quickly gather, EMI frantically warns Isaac that their slow pace is attracting swarms. Completely overwhelmed by aggressive beasts, Isaac swings wildly and curses them for wasting time. Watching the chaotic display, Locke tragically questions if he can still call them childhood friends. Smirking cruelly, Isaac decides that someone is definitely getting fired after this miserable expedition. Locke stutters quietly, completely unable to formulate a proper response to the harsh treatment. Panting heavily, the burdened beast tamer continues to push forward through the oppressive cavern. The exhausted party finally arrives before massive, imposing double doors that mark the end of the labyrinth. Staring up at the intimidating entrance, Locke solemnly notes that this is exactly where the dungeon boss resides. Eager to rest, Locke suggests taking a quick break, only to be met with immediate hostility. Locke tries to explain that unloading luggage would help, but Isaac furiously demands to know whose fault it is they are late. Stepping forward, EMI coldly reminds him that his poor routing not only made them late but actively endangered their lives. Isaac ruthlessly mocks the beast tamer as a complete idiot who cannot even read the tense mood of the room. Defeated and exhausted, Locke lowers his gaze and quietly accepts the harsh, ungrateful rebuke. Misinterpreting his quiet resignation, Isaac aggressively steps up and accuses Locke of using a condescending tone. Completely ignoring the tension, the hero smoothly addresses EMI and Kara to ask if they are ready to enter. The two girls nod in silent agreement, their expressions quickly hardening with intense combat readiness. Turning back to Locke, Isaac coldly states that he always hesitated to say this but will finally reveal the truth since Locke is so utterly useless. With a malicious sneer, Isaac officially declares that Locke will be permanently fired once they clear this dungeon. He arrogantly boasts that with Kid on their team, the elite party is destined to go even further without carrying dead weight. Locke stares back in stunned silence as the devastating reality of his immediate expulsion fully sets in. Swallowing his absolute heartbreak, Locke asks if EMI and the others agreed to this betrayal before quietly stating he understands. EMI slowly turns her face away, utterly unable to meet the deeply betrayed eyes of her childhood friend. Locke closes his eyes and fully accepts that his lifelong bonds have been completely shattered. Unbothered by the emotional destruction, Kid cheerfully suggests they finally head inside and conquer the boss. Riled up with dangerous overconfidence, the combatants strike heroic poses and declare themselves the absolute #1 party. The massive stone doors slowly grind open, revealing the dark and ominous chamber hidden within. Torches instantly flare to life along the cavernous walls, illuminating the massive, highly anticipated boss arena. Despite being told to watch from behind Kara, Locke resolves to cast support magic and enhance their equipment for one final time. He focuses his remaining energy, prepared to dutifully execute his role even after being completely discarded by his friends. A terrifying, monstrous shadow begins to materialize from the deep darkness of the sprawling chamber. The party immediately draws their weapons, their eyes widening slightly at the massive beast emerging before them. A colossal, shimmering silver wolf steps fully into the light, radiating an overwhelming aura of pure power. The majestic creature glares down at the foolish intruders, its massive fangs bared in a silent and deadly threat. Lowering his weapon slightly, Isaac confusedly identifies the massive, intimidating boss as a mere grey wolf. A party member notes its silver coat but arrogantly dismisses the threat, stating that even a lowly E-rank adventurer could easily defeat a standard grey wolf. Standing in the rear, Locke instantly recognizes the terrifying truth and correctly identifies the beast as a legendary Fenrir. The panicked beast tamer realizes that even elite S-rank adventurers struggle against such a legendary monster and frantically wonders why it is lurking here. Completely ignorant of the extreme danger, Isaac sighs in sheer disappointment at the supposed grey wolf while assuming it might just leave them alone. Foolishly eager for ultimate glory, Kid raises his cracked sword and shouts for the party to end the beast immediately. Realizing the impending slaughter, Locke screams at the top of his lungs for his former comrades to stop their reckless attack. The arrogant hero completely ignores the warning and charges blindly forward, raising his weapon to strike the motionless legendary beast. In a blinding flash of silver light, the Fenrir moves with godlike speed to intercept the foolish attacker. Kid freezes in utter shock, letting out a confused gasp as the monster's devastating counterattack abruptly begins. Staring in absolute disbelief, the attacker realizes that the powerful strike inflicted zero damage on the beast. The shattered weapon uselessly falls away as the initial assault completely fails. A sudden burst of intense energy echoes through the dark chamber as the monster reacts. The colossal beast fixes the foolish intruders with a wide, predatory glare. Overwhelmed by sheer terror, Kara drops down and trembles uncontrollably while gasping in fear. A panicked teammate loudly curses upon realizing Kara has been completely paralyzed by a severe fear status ailment. Stripped of his courage, the cowardly hero orders an immediate retreat, declaring he absolutely cannot fight without his sword. Staring in sheer disbelief, a teammate furiously demands if he is serious since the battle hasn't even truly started yet. Justifying his cowardly escape, the hero argues that running away is their only viable option now that the growling beast is fully awake. Gritting his teeth in furious frustration, Isaac bitterly curses their horrible situation. The supposedly elite adventurers immediately turn their backs on the massive monster and sprint desperately toward the exit. Screaming in utter panic, the official command is broadcasted for all units to instantly retreat. The heavily burdened party scrambles wildly through the dark corridors to outrun the looming threat. Bitterly mocking the frantic escape, someone remarks that their incredible speed at running away makes them want to throw up. Flustered and defensive, the fleeing coward makes a pathetic excuse by claiming they just happened to be in the front. A cruel voice casually dismisses the cowardly display, ominously assuring the group that there are no worries. With a sinister sneer, the betrayer reveals they have found another convenient way to utilize an idiot like their lagging teammate. A sudden and violent shove sends the unsuspecting party member flying straight toward the pursuing danger. Tucking into a helpless fall, the betrayed adventurer tumbles directly into the monster's deadly path. Plunging into the shadows, the discarded ally is left entirely alone to face the terrifying wrath of the beast. A heavy groan escapes the betrayed adventurer as he struggles against the sudden, agonizing impact. Looming over the fallen youth, the cruel hero coldly declares he will be taking both the spare blade and the king's sword. Shocking Locke, the betrayer maliciously tells him to take the rest of the useless luggage with him on his one-way trip to hell. Turning his back on the doomed beast tamer, Kid smoothly asks Isaac if this brutal sacrifice finally makes him an official member of their elite party. Left completely defenseless on the cold stone floor, Locke stares up in silent horror as his former comrades abandon him to the beast. Isaac smirks with absolute satisfaction and readily confirms the hero's official initiation into their selfish ranks. Utterly abandoned in the darkened chamber, Locke frantically wonders if this nightmare is real and if he is truly about to die. A low, terrifying growl immediately shatters the silence as the legendary Fenrir completely steps out of the shadows. Trembling with raw terror, the helpless beast tamer gazes up at the colossal, shimmering predator towering directly over him. Meanwhile, Imai dashes desperately down the dungeon corridors, prioritizing her own survival over her childhood friend. Tears threatening to spill, the fleeing magic user mentally whispers a pathetic apology to the loyal boy she just betrayed. Breathing heavily, a terrified Kara sprints alongside the rest of the fleeing party without looking back. Showing her true shallow colors, the fleeing saintess selfishly laments the loss of her expensive dress rather than the life of her teammate. The rapid, echoing footsteps of the treacherous adventurers quickly fade into the distant darkness of the winding labyrinth. Left entirely alone in the suffocating silence of the boss room, Locke lowers his head in devastating resignation. A crushing wave of sorrow washes over the boy as he finally realizes just how deeply his supposed friends truly hated him. Closing his eyes to his grim fate, Locke murmurs that he actually does not mind dying in such a miserable, lonely way. His mind drifts back to a warm, sunlit memory where his friends brightly promised they would all grow stronger together. The agonizing flashback continues with EMI cheerfully declaring her absolute belief in Locke and playfully demanding he protect her. A phantom voice warmly thanks him for his unwavering support, insisting their grand team is only whole when he is by their side. The beautiful, hollow memories fade away, leaving the discarded beast tamer staring blankly at the cold reality of his impending doom. A self-deprecating chuckle escapes his lips as he hopelessly questions his own pathetic inability to feel righteous anger. Despite the agonizing betrayal tearing his heart apart, a soft and tragic smile forms on his battered face. He softly admits that even after being violently thrown to the vicious wolves, his gentle heart refuses to harden. Gazing peacefully at the legendary beast, Locke completely surrenders to his fate, absolutely refusing to bear any grudge against the childhood friends who left him to die. The legendary Fenrir looks down in sheer contempt, remarking on the profound cruelty of humans. It continues its dark observation, utterly disgusted that they would let one of their own perish just to save themselves. Stepping closer to the discarded boy, the massive beast promises a swift death devoid of any pain. Locke's eyes widen in absolute shock as the creature's unexpected words fully register in his mind. Finding a sudden ray of hope amidst his despair, Locke frantically asks if the monster can truly speak the human language. The colossal wolf immediately halts its deadly advance, tilting its large head slightly in genuine confusion. Leaning in incredibly close, the Fenrir asks the trembling boy if he can actually understand its spoken words. Locke quickly confirms that he can understand the beast, privately wondering if this miraculous comprehension is a hidden beast tamer skill. The shimmering silver wolf squints its glowing eyes, seemingly intrigued by the boy's unique and incredibly rare ability. Looming over his tiny frame, the Fenrir challenges Locke to a fight and notes it has plenty of free time to kill. Sweating nervously under the intense gaze, Locke stammers a quick refusal and politely begs the legendary monster to just let him go. Dropping its fearsome aura entirely, the giant wolf whines like a bored puppy and loudly complains that it just wants to play. Still terrified of the massive razor-sharp claws, Locke mentally notes that he definitely does not want to die during a rough play session. Thinking quickly on his feet, the young beast tamer begins frantically digging through his abandoned mountain of luggage. He triumphantly pulls a heavy metallic object from the massive bag, rapidly formulating a desperate plan to pacify the legendary predator. Grasping the heavy armor tightly, Locke decides to use Isaac's discarded breastplate as a makeshift throwing toy. The fearsome Fenrir instantly perks its ears up, its attention completely and utterly captivated by the shiny piece of metal. Panting heavily with wide eyes, the legendary beast suddenly resembles an eager, overgrown hound excitedly waiting for a game of fetch. Locke firmly hurls the heavy breastplate across the dark cavern while internally questioning what on earth he is doing. Moving like a brilliant silver blur, the massive Fenrir enthusiastically chases after the clattering piece of armor. Leaping gracefully through the air, the colossal wolf snatches the metallic breastplate right out of the sky with flawless precision. Panting happily as it drops the dented armor at his feet, the beast leaves Locke completely bewildered by the absurdly playful situation. Wagging its massive tail enthusiastically, the Fenrir admits it doesn't quite understand the game but finds the experience extremely fun. Locke forces a massive sigh of relief, incredibly thankful that his childhood experience with taking care of pet dogs is somehow saving his life. Gathering his remaining courage, Locke hesitantly asks the beast about its previous complaint regarding being trapped forever inside the dungeon. The wolf solemnly explains that a powerful magical barrier seals the floor's entrance, one so incredibly strong that even a legendary monster cannot break it. Looking down sadly like a grounded puppy, the Fenrir whimpers softly as Locke nods his head in sympathetic understanding. Sensing a truly unique and miraculous opportunity, Locke gently approaches the massive beast and begins to outline a daring proposition. Looking directly into the monster's glowing golden eyes, the brave boy asks if the Fenrir will join him on a grand adventure in exchange for its freedom. A low, rumbling chuckle slowly escapes the giant wolf's throat as it carefully processes the boy's incredibly bold invitation. Smiling widely at the sheer audacity, The beast praises the boy's courage and completely dismisses the offer as a very good joke. Locke blinks in sheer confusion just before the Fenrir cheerfully admits that it actually isn't against the idea at all. Shocked by the casual and sudden acceptance, Locke asks if it is serious, to which the proud beast fiercely declares that Fenrirs never lie. Suddenly, a mysterious, glowing system notification screen magically materializes in the air directly between the young boy and the legendary wolf. Staring blankly at the floating glowing text, Locke's jaw completely drops as he slowly realizes what is actually happening. The magical system prompt clearly states that the legendary Fenrir wants to become his friend and formally asks for his confirmation. Startled by a sudden ethereal sound, Locke grasps his head as a strange, echoing voice magically rings directly into his mind. He quickly recalls reading an old text about the Beast Tamer class, which mentioned hearing a mysterious voice right before undergoing a profound, life-altering change. Realizing this divine prompt is the legendary catalyst for his class evolution, Locke eagerly accepts the friendship request with his entire heart. A brilliant flash of magical light spectacularly engulfs the dark cavern as the ultimate taming contract is officially sealed between man and legendary beast. A mysterious system voice announces that the Fenrir is now his friend and grants access to a mini-monster garden. Overwhelmed by the echoing voices, Locke admits he barely understands the hidden mechanics of his rare beast tamer profession. Deciding to simply wait and see what happens next, Locke is suddenly startled by a loud and triumphant shout. The massive Fenrir throws its head back and laughs heartily, declaring its body is absolutely brimming with newfound power. Gathering his courage, the young boy formally introduces himself as Locke's sister and politely greets the legendary beast. Leaning down with a surprisingly gentle gaze, the colossal wolf warmly returns the greeting and acknowledges his new master. The mighty creature explains that calling it Fenrir feels entirely awkward since that is merely its legendary species name. Looking expectantly at the young beast tamer, the beast proudly demands that Locke bestow a proper name upon it. Caught completely off guard by the sudden request, Locke desperately racks his brain for a suitable and worthy title. The giant wolf inches closer with shining eyes, eagerly urging the boy to choose a truly cool and fitting moniker. Sweating under the intense pressure of naming a legendary predator, Locke awkwardly mumbles to himself in the dark cavern. He stares thoughtfully at the terrifying but playful beast while slowly piecing together a potential idea in his head. Finally making his deliberate decision, Locke tentatively suggests the simple and upbeat name Lucky to the massive silver wolf. The terrifying monster pauses entirely, carefully repeating the chosen name as if weighing its absolute coolness and supreme power. Breaking the tense silence, the beast nods with deep satisfaction and firmly declares that the name is incredibly cool. Overjoyed by his brand new identity, Lucky bounds energetically around the room while loudly proclaiming his absolute and utter happiness. Locke watches in bewildered amusement as the legendary apex predator happily bounces around the cavern like a playful pup. Mid-bounce, the ecstatic wolf abruptly stops and excitedly points out a mysterious treasure chest that has suddenly materialized. Locke chuckles in realization, understanding that taming the dungeon boss triggered the exact same reward as violently defeating it. Curiosity getting the better of him, the young beast tamer slowly approaches the ornate chest to uncover its secrets. With a heavy creak, the ancient lid pops open and a brilliant, glowing light spills entirely across the chamber. Peering inside the glowing box, Locke quickly discovers a delicate magical bracelet alongside an absolutely massive red collar. Thrilled by the sight of the flashy accessory, Lucky excitedly demands that Locke immediately equip him with the awesome collar. Chuckling at the beast's childish impatience, Locke steps forward and carefully fastens the heavy red collar around its neck. The newly collared Fenrir lets out a joyous cheer and affectionately licks Locke straight across his entirely bewildered face. Simultaneously, the magical system chimes loudly, confirming that the powerful mini-monster garden bracelet has been successfully equipped. The ethereal voice echoes in Locke's mind once more, granting him total freedom to enter and exit the magical garden. Staring blankly at the glowing artifact clamped tightly on his wrist, Locke completely questions the actual nature of this dimension. He slowly raises his arm to inspect the intricate bracelet, mesmerized by the softly glowing gemstone perfectly embedded within. Gazing deeply into the mystical jewel, he genuinely wonders aloud if this tiny stone actually contains the legendary sanctuary. Noticing his master's profound confusion, Lucky confidently steps forward and offers a direct demonstration of the magic bracelet's power. Without any warning, the colossal wolf gently presses its massive snout directly against the softly glowing jewel on Locke's wrist. In a flash of dazzling light, the legendary beast completely vanishes, leaving Locke to frantically shout out in sheer panic. To his absolute shock, Lucky's tiny face magically appears swimming inside the gemstone, cheerfully reassuring Locke that he is perfectly fine. Delighted by the bizarre spatial magic, the tiny wolf face eagerly urges his hesitant master to dive into the garden. Locke stares incredulously at his own wrist, completely dumbfounded by the absurd command to somehow enter a tiny piece of jewelry. Sighing deeply at the sheer madness of his new life, the brave boy nervously braces himself to attempt the impossible. Focusing his intent completely on the glowing artifact, Locke softly murmurs the firm command to enter the hidden magical realm. A blinding surge of energy instantly engulfs his entire body, aggressively pulling him directly into the swirling dimensional void. Opening his eyes, Locke lands gently in a sprawling, sunlit paradise completely filled with vibrant nature and endless blue skies. Stretching comfortably in the sunlit dimension, Lucky lets out a relaxed yawn and admits the peaceful atmosphere makes him want to take a nap. Taking in his new surroundings, Locke observes that while the magical garden doesn't seem incredibly spacious, it holds undeniable potential. He notes the perfect weather and temperature, suggesting they can easily use the small wooden hut as a convenient storehouse for their belongings. Yawning widely, Locke reflects that while some magical items grant access to dimensional storage, he has never seen one that also allows a familiar to enter. Breaking the tranquil silence, the colossal Fenrir turns to his new master and asks what their next course of action will be. Locke hums thoughtfully, assuming that the other elite S-rank adventurers have likely finished their own dungeon expeditions by now. Looking up at his massive companion with a gentle smile, the young beast tamer muses that it would be wonderful to gather other incredible monsters just like Lucky. Intrigued by the prospect of recruiting more monstrous allies, the legendary wolf grins enthusiastically and declares that the plan sounds like a lot of fun. Eager to expand their pack, Lucky confidently assures Locke that there are definitely other trapped beasts who desperately wish to escape their dark dungeons. Acknowledging the grand ambition, Locke agrees but firmly points out the immediate obstacle standing in their way. He gently reminds the excited Fenrir that before they can rescue anyone else, they must figure out how to escape this sealed dungeon floor. Returning swiftly to the gloomy cavern, the brave boy boldly climbs onto the broad, muscular back of the legendary silver wolf. Preparing to showcase his incredible speed, Lucky warns his new master to hold on tight as his powerful muscles tense for action. Gripping the thick silver fur securely, Locke expresses his deep gratitude for the beast's reliable assistance. Astonished by the sheer velocity, Locke marvels that a journey which previously took hours on foot is covered in mere moments atop a Fenrir. Calculating their rapid progress, the young beast tamer happily realizes they will soon reach the magical barrier and the staircase leading to freedom. Scanning his mental map, Locke quickly instructs his mount to veer towards the dark opening looming on the right. Skidding slightly to adjust his path, the giant wolf questions the D2 since the opening straight ahead is clearly the shortest route to their destination. Utilizing his specialized sensory skills, Locke explains that a massive swarm of monsters lies straight ahead and he prefers to avoid entirely pointless battles. Realizing the immense value of his master's strategic foresight, Lucky grins widely and admits he is incredibly glad to have a guy like Locke leading the way. Without any further hesitation, the legendary beast seamlessly shifts direction and plunges into the right-hand corridor. The powerful Fenrir continues tearing through the labyrinthine tunnels, effortlessly carrying the boy safely past the dungeon's hidden dangers. Suddenly spotting something important in the dim light, Locke frantically yells for the speeding beast to halt. Coming to an abrupt, dust-kicking stop, the colossal wolf peers over his shoulder and confusedly asks what caught the boy's attention. Sniffing the damp air, Lucky looks ahead and correctly identifies a large pile of freshly slain monster corpses blocking their path. Dismounting quickly, Locke explains that harvested monster materials fetch a high price in town and some can even be cooked into delicious meals. The mere mention of delicious food instantly makes the giant wolf drool as he eagerly declares his deep desire to try a monster feast. Focusing his magical intent upon the scattered corpses, Locke softly commands his inventory system to store the valuable materials. Watching the heavy carcasses vanish into thin air, Lucky howls in pure amazement and demands to know when Locke learned such an incredible trick. Smiling humbly, the young tamer reveals that while riding earlier, he simply had a strong intuitive feeling that spatial storage was entirely possible for him now. Looking thoughtfully at his hands, Locke marvels at the strange, newfound abilities awakening within him ever since forming the taming contract. Gesturing toward a remaining pile of monster remains, Locke encouragingly invites the massive beast to try the storage magic for himself. Brimming with eager confidence, the legendary Fenrir steps forward and firmly accepts the magical challenge. Channeling his immense power, Lucky shouts the command and aggressively slams his heavy paw directly onto a nearby bug corpse. Instead of magically vanishing, the fragile monster carapace violently shatters into an absolute mess under the sheer, unbridled force of the giant paw. Staring awkwardly at the totally flattened remains, the colossal wolf chuckles sheepishly and apologizes for using way too much strength. Adjusting his heavy-handed approach, Lucky promises to delicately use just the very tip of his sharp claws to avoid damaging the next batch. Tapping lightly against a fresh carcass, the giant wolf proudly repeats the storage command with much better focus. A bright flash of magical light instantly envelops the dead beast, proving that the legendary Fenrir has successfully mastered the spatial skill. Panting happily with a massive grin on his face, Lucky looks back at his master to celebrate their flawlessly executed team effort. Still whimpering slightly over his blunder, the massive wolf listens as Locke reminds him to carefully preserve the valuable monster materials. With the shiny loot finally secured, Locke declares that they should immediately get ready for their next move. Pointing forward, the young beast tamer shifts his complete focus to the actual obstacle currently blocking their escape. The massive beast cautiously presses against the invisible magical wall, making a soft squishing sound. Examining the unyielding wall of magic, Locke observes just how incredibly sturdy the dungeon's final defense truly is. Accepting defeat a bit too quickly, Lucky sighs heavily and dramatically assumes this is as far as his journey can go. The colossal wolf bids a theatrical farewell, sincerely thanking Locke for their incredibly fun but entirely short-lived adventure. Chuckling at the beast's dramatic despair, Locke gently pats the Fenrir and urges him not to give up just yet. Formulating a clever bypass, the young tamer instructs the legendary monster to temporarily retreat into the mini-monster garden. Realizing the brilliant loophole, Lucky grins widely as he finally understands exactly how they plan to bypass the unbreakable barrier. In a sudden flash of magical light, the colossal silver beast completely vanishes into the glowing gemstone on his master's wrist. Steeling his nerves for the ultimate test, Locke firmly whispers his resolve and boldly steps forward. He nervously hesitates for a split second, acutely aware that there is absolutely no guarantee he can safely pass through the barrier. Sweating profusely, Locke questions if this dimensional loophole will actually hold up against the dungeon's incredibly strong magic. To his absolute astonishment, the brave boy slips straight through the magical wall and makes it out with no problems. Standing safely on the other side, Locke immediately activates the glowing artifact to summon his massive companion back to reality. Materializing in a brilliant burst of light, an ecstatic Lucky praises Locke while cheering their phenomenal success. Bounding around like an overexcited puppy, the Fenrir loudly celebrates escaping into the outside world without a single hitch. Watching the legendary predator frolic so happily, Locke smiles and dryly notes how unexpectedly smooth the entire process was. Suddenly calming down, Lucky sits proudly and bows his massive head to express his profound and absolute gratitude. The beast admits he never imagined finding a way out of the dungeon and formally looks forward to their ongoing journey. Reaching out to gently stroke the silver fur, Locke warmly returns the sentiment and sincerely hopes they will continue to get along. Together, the newly forged duo steps entirely away from the suffocating darkness of the underground labyrinth. Brilliant sunlight immediately washes over them as they cross the final threshold into the sprawling, vibrant wilderness. Closing his eyes, the young beast tamer takes a deep and incredibly refreshing breath of the crisp outside air. Staring out over the breathtaking landscape, Locke quietly reflects on exactly how this miraculous sequence of events unfolded. The distant silhouette of the bustling human town beckons them forward from across the vast and grassy plains. Embracing his new beginning, Locke cheerfully declares they should head back to town now that he has officially befriended a Fenrir. The bustling streets rapidly erupt into loud murmurs as the townsfolk suddenly notice a terrifying new presence walking through their peaceful town. Locke strides calmly down the cobblestone road alongside his massive new companion, acutely feeling the intense stares of the gathering crowd. Surrounding onlookers point and whisper in fear, while the young beast tamer quietly admits to himself that this overwhelming reaction is entirely expected. Panic quickly spreads through the plaza as armed guards mistakenly assume a giant grey wolf is preparing to attack the Adventurers Guild. Waving his hands frantically to stop the charging guards, Locke desperately begs them to wait and explains that the creature is just his familiar. Despite his urgent pleas, the panicked defenders grip their weapons tightly and completely ignore the young boy's crucial warning. Sweating nervously under the mounting tension, Locke completely freezes as he frantically wonders how to defuse this rapidly escalating situation. A calm and entirely familiar voice suddenly cuts through the chaotic shouting with a light-hearted chuckle. Stepping confidently out of the heavy guild doors, guild receptionist Rika smiles warmly and asks what all the sudden commotion is about. Locke immediately calls out to her with a relieved sigh, prompting Rika to cheerfully welcome him back from his long expedition. Her cheerful expression shifts into slight confusion as she notes he was supposedly scheduled to explore the Dungeon of Flames of Destruction with his party today. Suddenly noticing the colossal beast standing right beside him, Rika gasps in utter shock at the sheer and terrifying size of the supposed dog. Locke awkwardly rubs the back of his head and quickly corrects the bewildered receptionist. Gesturing proudly to the massive silver beast, Locke introduces the legendary creature as his newly tamed familiar, Fenrir. Rika's eyes widen in absolute disbelief as she repeats the mythical name of the legendary apex predator. Quickly recovering from her profound shock, she clasps her hands together and warmly congratulates Locke on finally fulfilling his true potential as a beast tamer. The surrounding crowd instantly falls into a stunned silence, completely baffled that a seemingly weak beast tamer managed to tame such a legendary monster. The entire plaza remains completely paralyzed as the heavy realization of Locke's impossible achievement fully sets in. Entirely unfazed by the massive commotion, the giant Fenrir lets out a bored yawn while the onlookers continue to whisper in absolute awe. Smiling professionally once again, Rika politely invites Locke inside the guild to officially register his powerful new familiar. Locke nods gratefully and steps past the parted crowd, leading his massive silver companion straight into the grand guild hall. Sitting behind the official counter, Rika efficiently stamps a glowing document and cheerfully announces that the registration process is fully completed. Bowing his head respectfully, the young tamer sincerely thanks the receptionist for her swift and helpful assistance. Tilting her head in genuine curiosity, Rika casually asks exactly what happened to the other elite members of his renowned party. Locke blinks in slight surprise, immediately realizing that his treacherous former friends haven't actually returned to town yet. Shrugging off the extreme trauma, Locke calmly explains that he was brutally stabbed and entirely abandoned by the hero during their dungeon run. Rika leaps up from her chair in absolute horror, frantically checking the young boy to see if he sustained any fatal injuries from the ambush. Locke reassuringly waves off her concern, explaining that he survived simply because Kid's famous sword completely snapped in half upon impact. Letting out a massive, trembling sigh of relief, the deeply worried receptionist slumps slightly over her wooden desk. Her expression quickly darkens into a serious frown as she grimly notes that a terrifying old rumor about the hero must actually be entirely true. She explains that back when Kid was just rising to prominence, he challenged that exact same fiery dungeon alongside a highly skilled B-rank party. Lowering her voice ominously, Rika reveals that the expedition ended in absolute disaster, with only the hero and one other survivor managing to escape alive. She adds that vicious rumors immediately began circulating that the cowardly hero intentionally used his own loyal teammates as sacrificial decoys. Remembering his own brutal betrayal, Locke grimly agrees that such a cowardly and vile act is entirely within the hero's true character. Frowning deeply at the blatant injustice, Rika gently asks the young tamer exactly why the cruel hero decided to target him specifically. Looking away with a sad, self-deprecating smile, Locke softly admits he was likely chosen because he was always the least useful member of the party. Rika blinks in sheer confusion, completely baffled by the boy's absurdly low self-assessment of his own incredible skills. Leaning firmly across the counter, she vehemently corrects him and insists that Locke was always the absolute most essential pillar holding his party together. Locke's eyes widen in genuine shock as the receptionist completely shatters his long-held insecurities with her steadfast belief in his worth. Still struggling to accept her high praise, Locke awkwardly explains that he was fired because his foolish former friends truly believed anyone else could easily replace his countless contributions. Rika fiercely defends Locke, declaring that his vital presence was the exact reason his party reached S-rank and that dismissing his unique work is a massive misunderstanding. Locke stares in wide-eyed shock as the receptionist grimly reveals that because of this cruel betrayal, the Greyla party will face a harsh demotion below B rank. Still struggling to comprehend the severity, Locke argues that their individual combat prowess is formidable and doubts they could truly fall from their S-rank pedestal. Rika calmly acknowledges their strength but firmly reminds the boy that betraying a comrade violates strict guild rules that simply cannot be ignored. She further explains that failing to return from an S-rank dungeon could heavily indicate a fatal lack of true adventuring ability. Locke's eyes widen in sudden horror as he finally processes the chilling fact that his former party has not yet made it back. A heavy dread settles over the young tamer as he mutters that EMI and the others are still trapped inside the scorching dungeon with Kid. Gripped by a sudden, overwhelming sense of urgency, Locke abruptly turns toward the guild's massive exit doors. Rika urgently calls out his name and steps forward in a desperate attempt to halt his reckless departure. The concerned receptionist warns him that running back to help the very people who discarded him will only result in him being treated terribly once again. Locke pauses mid-step, his expression shadowed with conflicted emotions as he softly admits that her logical warning might be entirely correct. Despite the painful truth of her words, a stubborn and deeply compassionate resolve flickers to life in his eyes. With a sad but determined smile, Locke claims he simply wishes to return their abandoned luggage to them. Rika quietly studies the boy's unwavering expression, instantly recognizing the profound kindness that drives his foolish mission. Dropping her objections entirely, the receptionist sighs softly and admits that she finally understands his noble intentions. Nodding gratefully for her permission, Locke adjusts his heavy gear and immediately strides out of the bustling guild hall. Stepping back into the blinding sunlight, Locke stands silently beside his massive, patiently waiting familiar. Looking down at the determined boy, the legendary Fenrir calmly asks if he is truly departing on this dangerous rescue mission. Locke gives a firm, silent nod, fully committing his heart to the treacherous path ahead. The giant wolf studies his new master closely, silently judging the immense weight of his unyielding resolve. Meeting the beast's glowing golden eyes, Locke gently asks if the colossal wolf will be joining him on this journey. Before confirming his loyalty, Lucky adopts a deeply serious tone and states that he must deliver a harsh warning right now. The ancient predator grimly reminds Locke that since his selfish friends have already betrayed him once, they will surely do it again in the future. Lowering his gaze, Locke acknowledges the painful truth but firmly declares that this will be the absolute last time he ever helps them. Satisfied with the boy's clear boundaries, the massive beast lets out a deep, understanding huff. Watching from the guild's entrance, Rika smiles softly as she prepares to send the incredibly unusual duo off. The giant wolf promises not to go against Locke's final decision since the boy's mind is completely and undeniably made up. Rika cheerfully waves goodbye from the doorway, wishing them a safe journey and hoping to see them again soon. Locke nods confidently, silently thanking the kind receptionist for her unwavering support and guidance. Pointing toward the distant horizon, the young beast tamer calls out to his familiar and boldly orders them to move out. Meanwhile, deep within the scorching depths of the Dungeon of Flames of Destruction's fifth floor, absolute chaos reigns. A furious kid screams at his exhausted party, calling them morons for completely forgetting the route they originally took while navigating without a map. Isaac fiercely bites back, ordering the hero to shut up while angrily pointing out that Kid also failed to remember the way. A desperate party member quietly laments their dire situation, realizing too late that they always heavily relied on Locke to guide them safely. The crushing weight of their foolish betrayal finally settles over the battered and thoroughly exhausted adventurers. Deflecting the blame, Kid arrogantly mocks their sluggish movements and loudly questions if they are truly an S-rank party. Pushed to his absolute breaking point, Isaac furiously tells the hero to stop complaining since they have been fighting non-stop since the 10th floor. The enraged gladiator mocks Kid's heroic persona, viciously pointing out that the supposed legend cannot even properly maintain his own weapon. Insulted by the harsh truth, Kid clicks his tongue in deep annoyance and glares murderously at his rebellious temporary allies. Panting heavily, Isaac frantically wonders why they keep encountering endless hordes of monsters despite supposedly taking a much shorter route. Isaac frantically studies the dungeon map, recalling that the monsters were supposed to grow weaker as they descended into the lower levels. Cursing in sheer frustration, the panicked gladiator admits that the creatures actually seem to be getting significantly stronger. Panting heavily from the relentless combat, the exhausted party decides to take a desperately needed short break. The battered adventurers collapse into the rocky cavern, trying to catch their breath in the suffocating heat. Trying to rally their spirits, Imai insists they just need to survive until the 4th floor where the monsters will surely weaken. Turning to their new recruit, Isaac nervously asks if Kid's spare sword is still in reliable combat condition. Kid viciously snaps back, ordering the gladiator to worry about his own overused weapon instead of bothering him. Gripping his hilt tightly, Isaac slowly draws his blade from its scabbard to inspect the edge. The hero's eyes widen in sudden shock as he demands to know how Isaac's sword is still in such immaculate condition. Isaac proudly shows off the flawless blade, noting that despite being a cheap market weapon, it lacks a single nick or speck of rust. A horrifying realization washes over Kid as he urgently demands to inspect the girl's magical staves as well. Kara and Emi quickly present their pristine weapons to the frantic hero. Staring at the completely undamaged gear, Kid mutters in absolute disbelief as the truth finally clicks into place. Looking at his supposed elite teammates with utter disgust, the hero loudly curses himself for teaming up with a bunch of moronic fools. Enraged by the sudden insult, Isaac furiously yells at Kid and demands he repeat what he just muttered. Kid scoffs in sheer disbelief, openly mocking the party for being entirely oblivious to their own secret weapon. He ruthlessly shatters their pride by revealing they have heavily benefited from their discarded servant's divine protection all this time. The hero dryly remarks that Locke's hidden magical support is the only logical reason they achieved S rank in less than 3 years. A completely clueless teammate dramatically mishears the crucial revelation, blankly asking what Kid means by a magical basket. Isaac furiously defends their honor, aggressively insisting they rose through the ranks purely through their own tireless efforts. Completely ignoring the gladiator's wounded pride, Kid sharply corrects the idiot who misheard the term divine protection. He explains that it is a profound magical skill that passively raises a party's base abilities while entirely preventing weapon degradation. Kid coldly twists the knife, mocking them for completely relying on the boy's massive buffs without ever showing him a single ounce of gratitude. The crushing reality of their colossal mistake slowly begins to suffocate the exhausted adventurers. Showing absolutely no mercy, Kid bluntly summarizes the horrific truth of their current predicament. He ruthlessly states that without Locke's passive support, this supposedly elite squad is effectively as weak as a mediocre C-rank party. Isaac freezes completely in place as the hero's brutal assessment annihilates his entire worldview. Yemai and Kara stare forward in stunned silence, their eyes wide with dawning terror and absolute regret. A suffocating silence falls over the dark cavern as their glorious S-rank illusion shatters into a million pieces. Struggling to process the devastating truth, Isaac stutters weakly as his arrogant confidence completely evaporates. The shattered gladiator questions aloud if his prestigious S-rank status was genuinely entirely built upon Locke's hidden strength. A bitter memory surfaces of a former mentor praising Locke's incredible diligence while instructing Isaac to improve his own lacking skills. Isaac clenches his teeth, agonizing over the painful realization that he was always being overshadowed. Consumed by a crippling inferiority complex, he bitterly remembers how Locke quietly carried them from the background. Overwhelmed by his toxic pride, Isaac fiercely gnashes his teeth in sheer denial over the boy he just abandoned. Driven by blind arrogance, the furious gladiator violently refuses to accept that Locke was the sole reason they ever made it this far. Watching her friend spiral into madness, Imai softly calls out his name with deep and lingering concern. Kid clicks his tongue in deep annoyance, casually dismissing the raging gladiator as an incredibly troublesome liability. Quickly pivoting his attention to survival, the hero barks at Kara and demands to know how many more healing spells she can cast. Trembling under the intense pressure, the exhausted saintess nervously estimates she only has enough mana to heal each person once or twice. Turning his attention to the exhausted mage, the hero coldly demands to know her current combat status. Gripping her staff tightly, Yamai assures him that she can still fight reasonably well as long as she carefully conserves her remaining magic. Processing this critical information, Kid nods curtly and acknowledges her fragile readiness. The tense party stares down the dark corridor, bracing themselves for the imminent threat lurking ahead. Calculating their narrow escape route, the hero declares that they must break through a pack of 5 orange ants to reach the staircase leading to the 4th floor. He grimly warns that fighting head-on is a terrible idea since the insects will summon reinforcements to overwhelm their fatigued group. Pivoting his strategy, Kid barks a sharp order at Kara, demanding the healer cast one final restoration spell on each of them. Dictating the exact formation, he places Isaac at the vanguard to carve a path while the mage stays tightly behind him for magical cover. Finalizing the treacherous lineup, Kid positions Kara next and casually claims the rearguard position for himself. Bowing to his absolute authority, Kara obediently agrees and channels her remaining mana to cast the crucial healing spell. A brilliant and soothing light completely envelops the battered adventurers, rapidly mending their deepest wounds. Feeling his strength return, the hero tightly grips his sword and signals that it is finally time to move. Barking a ruthless command, Kid orders the vanguard to violently cut their way forward without ever looking back. The desperate party surges into the dark tunnel, moving as a single frantic unit to escape the creeping death. Suddenly stepping out of formation, Kid swings his blade in a vicious arc and ruthlessly slashes the unsuspecting healer from behind. A sudden, breathless gasp escapes Kara's lips as the agonizing shock of the violent betrayal aggressively tears through her body. Fresh blood splatters across the cold dungeon floor as the wounded saintess instantly loses all her remaining strength. Unable to support her own weight, Kara weakly collapses onto the hard stone while the rest of the party continues running. Looking down at his bleeding teammate with a cruel smirk, Kid mockingly thanks her for the healing before stating she is no longer needed. The treacherous hero coldly admits his true plan, expressing his profound gratitude that she will now serve as a convenient decoy for their escape. Bleeding out in the suffocating darkness, Kara stares after her fleeing friends and desperately denies the horrific reality of their betrayal. As the terrifying chittering of approaching monsters fills the cavern, she frantically begs her comrades not to abandon her. Tears stream down her terrified face as she cries out for any shred of help from the people she trusted with her life. A final, agonizing scream echoes through the dark tunnel as the vicious orange ants completely swarm their helpless prey. The scene shifts to the 4th floor of the scorching dungeon of flames of destruction. Isaac furiously screams at the hero, demanding to know why he ruthlessly cut Kara down. Kid coldly justifies his betrayal, claiming that sacrificing her was their only chance to survive. The hero cruelly assures them that their dark secret is safe since no one will ever uncover what truly happens deep inside a dungeon. Sweating with horror, Isaac mentally stammers that keeping a secret was never his main concern. Smirking maliciously, Kid reminds the horrified survivors that they are now his willing accomplices in this grisly murder. Isaac and EMI freeze in utter shock as the twisted reality of their complicity fully sets in. The hero ruthlessly points out that abandoning the loyal servant who carried them this far proves their inherently selfish nature. He boldly declares that their history of betrayal is more than enough evidence to paint them as guilty accomplices. Turning his back on the panicked group, Kid complains about teaming up with useless fools and vows never to work with them again. Enraged by the insults, Isaac fiercely charges forward and screams that the hero is nowhere near as strong as he claims. Their blades violently clash, but the exhausted gladiator is easily repelled and left cursing in absolute frustration. Panting heavily, Isaac struggles to catch his breath as his stamina rapidly depletes in the scorching cavern. Desperately swinging at a swarm of blue ants, Isaac realizes these particular monsters were never this difficult to handle before. His physical attacks bounce harmlessly off the creatures, leaving him frantic as he realizes the 4th floor monsters are entirely unaffected by his weakened strikes. The hero's mocking words echo in his mind, reminding him that he entirely relied on Locke's divine protection without ever showing an ounce of gratitude. Isaac curses bitterly as the crushing reality sets in that his true combat power is merely equal to a mediocre C-rank adventurer. A massive blue ant rears back its hideous head and unleashes a terrifying, ear-piercing shriek. EMI screams out in pure terror as the monstrous insect swarm rapidly closes in for the final kill. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of movement violently severs the monster's deadly limb before it can strike the mage. EMI stares with wide, trembling eyes as her unexpected savior finally steps into the dim cavern light. Isaac drops to his knees in utter disbelief, completely unable to comprehend the impossible sight standing directly before him. The shattered gladiator stammers weakly, desperately insisting that the discarded beast tamer was supposed to be dead. Staring down at his treacherous former friends, Locke coldly declares that he has miraculously returned from hell. Realizing his perfect escape plan is ruined, Kid fiercely clicks his tongue and curses under his breath. The legendary Fenrir steps forward with a menacing growl, eagerly asking Locke if they should slaughter the traitors since no one will ever know. Desperate for a true miracle, EMI tearfully begs Locke to delve deeper into the dungeon and save the fallen Kara. Startled by the sudden plea, Locke's eyes widen as he realizes the party's healer was somehow abandoned down on the 5th floor. A dark realization washes over the beast tamer as he asks if they cruelly sacrificed her just like they did to him. Isaac pathetically attempts to justify their cowardly betrayal, claiming they had absolutely no choice but to sacrifice her to ensure their own survival. Glaring with absolute disgust, Locke furiously condemns his former childhood friends as irredeemable scum. The giant wolf scoffs at their ridiculous audacity, completely disgusted that they dare ask for help after committing such vile betrayals. Shaking his massive head, the Fenrir notes with sheer disappointment that the traitors haven't reflected on their selfish actions at all. Locke remains completely silent, standing tall as he processes the profound depths of his former party's depravity. Turning his back on the pathetic survivors, Locke firmly calls out to his familiar and commands him to move out. The massive beast lets out a heavy sigh, deeply moved by his master's incredibly kind and fiercely forgiving heart. Sniffing the heavy luggage, Lucky identifies Kara's pungent perfume clinging to the expensive dress strapped to the rucksack. The legendary predator grumbles in mild annoyance as he pinpoints the exact magical scent needed for their rescue mission. Tapping his paws against the cold stone floor, the giant wolf confidently declares that he has caught the scent and is ready to track her down. The heroic duo rapidly descends deeper into the perilous labyrinth, racing against time to save the betrayed saintess from certain doom. Plunging rapidly into the dark and scorching depths, Locke and his powerful familiar begin their desperate rescue mission. the heroic duo violently crashes onto the ominous 5th floor of the dungeon. A hideous insect monster aggressively hisses from the deep shadows as it prepares a deadly ambush. Moving like a brilliant silver blur, the legendary Fenrir lunges forward to intercept the threat. With a devastating and effortless bite, the giant wolf brutally crushes the monster's hard carapace into pieces. A horrifying wave of skittering noises echoes through the cavern as countless monstrous insects begin to emerge from the walls. Panting heavily, Locke stares in absolute shock and notes the overwhelming number of enemies completely surrounding them. Realizing the grim truth, he deduces that the fresh scent of blood drew the massive swarm out of their hidden nests. Slashing through a lunging bug, Locke realizes that even with his powerful Fenrir, the sheer volume of monsters is staggering. Gripping his weapon tightly, the young beast tamer refuses to back down in the face of impossible odds. Man and beast fight as a perfectly synchronized unit, carving a brutal and bloody path through the endless insect horde. Swinging his blade with fierce determination, Locke feels a surge of true courage now that his loyal familiar is by his side. Breathing heavily in the sudden, eerie silence, Locke surveys the carnage and wonders if they finally cleared the swarm. The giant wolf praises his master, highly impressed by the incredible combat movements Locke displayed during the fierce battle. Locke humbly admits it is his first time fighting with such absolute freedom, confirming the beast's keen observation. Flashing a confident and proud smile, Locke boldly declares that they are now the absolute strongest party. Shifting his focus back to the grim mission, Locke states they urgently need to find the fallen Kara. Sniffing the damp air, Lucky points his massive snout toward the darkness and successfully locates the human's position. Locke's eyes widen in absolute horror as he cautiously steps forward and beholds a devastating sight. The young saintess lies entirely motionless on the cold stone floor, covered in severe wounds and completely unresponsive. Falling to his knees, Locke stares blankly at her battered form as all hope rapidly drains from his eyes. Trembling violently, the devastated boy slowly reaches out toward his childhood friend's lifeless body. Whispering her name in quiet agony, Locke's heart completely shatters at the gruesome reality of her demise. A warm memory beautifully surfaces of a smiling Kara proudly showing off a freshly brewed potion she had just crafted. In the bittersweet flashback, an amazed Locke praises her excellent recovery potion and notes that it will completely surprise the rest of the party. Beaming with bright joy, Kara sweetly thanks Locke and directly credits his helpful support for her incredible success. Returning to the bitter present, Locke chokes back a heavy sob and desperately apologizes for failing to reach her in time. Remembering her kind words, he deeply mourns the tragic loss of the gentle girl who always appreciated his unseen help. Hot tears stream endlessly down the beast tamer's face as the crushing weight of grief completely overwhelms him. Slamming his fist furiously against the hard stone floor, Locke violently curses the cruel fate that stole her life. His shoulders shake uncontrollably as he openly weeps over the broken, blooded body of his former comrade. Sobbing heavily into the darkness, Locke whispers that he was the one who should have always been deeply grateful for her. Suddenly, a faint and ragged coughing sound miraculously breaks through the boy's heavy, mournful sobs. A large, wet tongue abruptly slathers across Kara's pale face as Lucky enthusiastically licks her to check for signs of life. Startled awake by the giant wolf's aggressive affection, Kara lets out a confused yelp and weakly swats at the beast's snout. Locke stares in absolute disbelief as the incredibly alive saintess groggily blinks and asks why he is suddenly there. Still entirely dazed and covered in monster saliva, Kara mutters that she must obviously be dead and waiting in heaven. Believing she is speaking to a ghost, Kara tearfully apologizes for abandoning him and deeply regrets her cowardly past actions. Locke whispers her name in sheer, overwhelming relief, completely ignoring her ridiculous ghostly misunderstanding. Squinting up at the boy, Kara firmly states that there is a much bigger problem they have to face now that they are supposedly both dead. Waking up in a sheer panic, Kara sees the colossal Fenrir and immediately assumes they must somehow defeat the legendary gatekeeper of hell. She stares in absolute terror as the massive silver wolf looms ominously over her fragile, battered body. Overwhelmed by the beast's terrifying presence, the young saintess freezes completely in place as her mind rapidly short-circuits. Her eyes roll back as the sheer shock proves far too much for her exhausted body to handle. Locke sighs as Kara passes out from pure fear, while Lucky dryly corrects her by noting that Cerberus is the actual gatekeeper of hell. Shrugging off the comedic misunderstanding, Locke decides it is finally time for them to return to the human town. He apologetically asks his massive familiar if he can place the unconscious Kara on its broad back just this once. Lucky reluctantly agrees to carry the girl, firmly stating that he usually only lends his back to his true master. Locke warmly thanks his loyal companion while internally chuckling at the legendary predator's incredibly cute display of possessiveness. The duo abruptly stops their advance as a massive, ominous cavern entrance completely catches Locke's attention. A wave of horror washes over the beast tamer as he realizes they have stumbled directly into the orange ant's deadly nest. Ignoring the obvious danger entirely, Lucky drools enthusiastically at the prospect of devouring an entire batch of delicious monster eggs. The gluttonous Fenrir excitedly sprints down the dark tunnel while a panicked Locke desperately chases after him. Bursting into the hidden nesting chamber, the giant wolf cheers in pure delight at the sight of the glowing brood. Locke carefully inspects the glowing orbs, marveling at the bizarre and fascinating appearance of the unhatched insect eggs. Squinting closely at the scattered clutch, he suddenly notices something incredibly strange standing out from the rest. Pointing to a specific egg in the center, the beast tamer observes that it looks entirely different from the rest of the cluster. A grim realization sets in as Locke notices that someone intentionally smashed all the other surrounding eggs to pieces. A sudden, sharp cracking sound violently echoes through the quiet chamber as the sole surviving egg begins to fracture. Locke and Lucky watch in tense silence as brilliant, magical light aggressively pours out from the widening fissures. Locke stutters in absolute shock as 6 tiny figures miraculously emerge from the shattered glowing shell. He stares in sheer disbelief at the newly hatched monsters, completely unprepared for their distinctly humanoid appearance. The tiny, adorable ant girls immediately look up at Locke and joyfully scream for their papa. Completely bewildered by sudden parenthood, Locke stammers in total confusion as the toddler swarm tackles him with eager hugs. Lucky smirks mischievously and accuses his master of deliberately delaying their trip just to find some lovely ladies outside of town. Locke frantically denies the absurd accusation, completely baffled by the giant wolf's absolutely ridiculous logic. The magical system voice suddenly chimes in, formally asking if Locke wishes to befriend the young orange ants. Hearing the ethereal prompt directly in his mind, the beast tamer realizes his unique skill is miraculously activating once again. A heavy wave of guilt washes over him as he remembers violently slaughtering the mature orange ants just moments ago. Refusing to leave the innocent toddlers to die alone, Locke bravely accepts the system's prompt and officially agrees to befriend them. A brilliant burst of magical energy instantly envelops the cavern as the powerful taming contract successfully engages. The ethereal voice officially confirms that the 6 young orange ants are now permanently bonded to him as familiars. Staring at the glittery transformation, Locke marvels out loud at the incredibly rare phenomenon of monsters possessing humanoid forms. To ensure their absolute safety, the system immediately begins transferring the fragile newborns directly into the mini-monster garden. The tiny ant girls dissolve into floating particles of light and safely vanish inside the glowing gemstone on his wrist. Eager to check on his new children, Locke asks Lucky to closely guard the unconscious Kara while he briefly visits the garden. Focusing his intent entirely on the magical artifact, the young beast tamer prepares to initiate the dimensional transfer. A blinding flash of light completely swallows his body as he verbally commands the bracelet to transport him away. Arriving in the peaceful dimension, Locke is instantly greeted by a system menu offering 6 massive environmental upgrades as a reward for his new tames. Staring blankly at the floating options, Locke sighs in sheer disbelief as yet another absurdly powerful feature unlocks before his eyes. Assessing the floating upgrade menu, Locke deduces that expanding the spatial realm will also enlarge the vegetable field. He quickly decides to tap the panel to improve the river, pond, hut, and fruit tree. Reaching out with quiet determination, the young beast tamer firmly taps his selections onto the glowing magical interface. A sudden surge of brilliant magical energy instantly erupts from the very ground beneath his feet. The blinding light rapidly sweeps outward, completely engulfing the serene landscape in its powerful glow. Mountains and streams magically shift and stretch as the entire dimensional space violently expands before his eyes. Gazing across the newly expanded paradise, Locke marvels aloud at just how massive the garden has truly become. His quiet awe is abruptly interrupted when a strange rustling sound completely catches his attention. Looking closely, he spots the newly hatched humanoid ant girls busily organizing a massive pile of monster loot. Recognizing the tiny toddlers, Locke approaches them and asks what they are doing while one cheerfully greets him as Papa. The energetic children proudly explain that they are systematically sorting all the valuable materials from the monsters he previously defeated. Astonished by their unexpected efficiency, Locke praises their amazing work as they confidently declare sorting to be their absolute specialty. Gently patting one of the eager toddlers on the head, Locke confirms she is a good girl while internally stressing that he definitely isn't her father. Basking in her master's warm affection, the tiny ant girl blushes brightly and giggles in pure joy. A soft smile creeps across Locke's face as he quietly admits to himself that being called Papa actually feels kind of nice. Squinting at the affectionate toddler, he notices her unique tiara and wonders if she represents a special, higher breed among the orange ants. The sudden realization of his grim rescue mission hits him, violently snapping him out of his relaxed state. Leaving the loot in their capable hands, Locke bids the cheerful toddlers farewell as he quickly prepares to return to the dungeon. In a flash of shimmering light, the beast tamer teleports back to the dark cavern where his giant familiar eagerly greets him. The colossal Fenrir immediately whimpers in distress, dramatically announcing that terrible trouble has occurred. A cold spike of sheer panic pierces Locke's heart as he frantically asks if something horrific happened to the unconscious Kara. Whining like a deprived puppy, Lucky tearfully complains that all the delicious eggs hatched and he can no longer eat any of them. Staring blankly at the legendary predator's incredibly petty grievance, Locke dryly sympathizes with the ruined meal. Chuckling at the absurd situation that completely relieved his anxiety, Locke promises to buy the wolf a delicious treat later, leaving Lucky howling in absolute delight. A loud exclamation violently shatters the tense atmosphere of the area. Someone desperately screams out, demanding that the aggressors just let him go. A nervous bystander frantically argues that the conflict is strictly about the party and they want no part of it. Another vehemently insists they must get involved because their friends are directly in danger. The speaker hesitates, explaining that Locke explicitly instructed them to wait until his return. Locke suddenly arrives on the scene, prompting a relieved greeting before he questions the chaotic mood. Startled by his sudden appearance, the speaker stammers and struggles to articulate the ongoing argument. They urgently reveal that Kid and Isaac have been blatantly denying every single claim Locke previously made. Spotting their former pack mule, the traitors express immense relief at Locke's timely arrival. The traitorous friends pathetically beg Locke to clear up the guild's supposedly strange accusations against them. Stepping forward, Locke coldly asks if they are referring to their pathetic struggle on the 4th floor despite being S-rank. He immediately escalates the tension by asking if they mean the moment they slashed Kara to use her as bait on the 5th floor. Pausing dramatically, the beast tamer pretends to search his memory for yet another heinous crime. Locke brutally reminds them of the exact moment they stabbed him in the back to escape the Fenrir. Isaac completely loses his temper, violently cursing Locke and screaming that he is spouting absolute nonsense. Stepping forward with a calm facade, Kid coldly instructs the furious gladiator to settle down. The hero smoothly accuses Locke of fabricating bitter lies simply because he was rightfully fired from their elite party. Locke silently marvels at the hero's arrogant pride as Kid haughtily demands hard evidence for these wild claims. Staring him down with a dangerously calm expression, Locke quietly repeats the word evidence. Smirking with absolute confidence, Kid declares that making baseless accusations against an elite party is a grave offense. Leaning heavily on his title, the corrupt hero threatens to report this insolence directly to the king. Kid glares intimidatingly around the room, attempting to force the entire guild into terrified submission. He aggressively demands confirmation, fully expecting his royal authority to completely silence his accusers. Unfazed by the posturing, Locke casually agrees that the hero's logic is perfectly understandable. Raising a single hand, the beast tamer asks for a brief second as he reaches into his belongings. Isaac flinches back in sudden confusion as Locke slowly pulls an object from his pack. Locke dramatically reveals the cleanly snapped upper half of Kid's supposedly legendary dragon-slaying blade. Presenting the shattered steel, Locke coldly states that the blade perfectly matches the stab wounds on his armor. The arrogant hero completely freezes in absolute horror as his undeniable guilt is finally laid bare. Panicking wildly, Kid frantically accuses Locke of stabbing himself just to fabricate the damning evidence. Desperate for any backup, the cornered hero violently turns and yells for Isaac to support his pathetic lie. Sweating profusely, Isaac stares in stunned silence and completely fails to form a coherent defense. Realizing the situation is utterly hopeless, the gladiator curses under his breath in sheer defeat. Ignoring their panicked meltdown, Locke casually interrupts to indicate that he is not finished yet. He drops the final bombshell, ruthlessly demanding to know how they intend to explain Kara's fate. Lemai stammers in utter shock, her mind completely failing to process the mention of the girl they abandoned. The mage gasps and completely breaks down as the fully rescued Kara finally steps into view. Rushing forward, EMI tearfully apologizes for cowardly refusing to reach out and help her friend. Sobbing uncontrollably, the treacherous mage begs her betrayed companion for absolute forgiveness. Unmoved by the pathetic display, Kara stares back in absolute and devastating silence. The accused traitor furiously dismisses Locke's claims, coldly declaring that the woman died simply because she lacked the power to fight back. Locke glares menacingly at his former comrade, dangerously repeating the excuse that her death had nothing to do with them. Cutting straight to the truth, the beast tamer directly accuses them of literally stabbing her in the back to save themselves. Kid smirks with arrogant confidence, demanding evidence while cruelly pointing out that you cannot get proof from a corpse. Letting out a heavy sigh, Locke drops his shoulders and murmurs his absolute exhaustion at dealing with this sheer audacity. Turning entirely away from the hero, Locke leans over a shrouded figure and casually tells the unconscious Kara to wake up. The young beast tamer lightly shakes her shoulder, jokingly asking if this dramatic confrontation isn't incredibly cool. Losing his patience, Locke shakes the girl much harder and loudly orders her to wake up already. Kara instantly shoots upright in a sheer panic, trembling violently as she screams that Locke is terrifying. Still completely dazed from her ordeal, the battered saintess rubs her head and awkwardly murmurs a polite good morning. EMI bursts into loud tears of sheer relief at seeing her alive, while Kara continues to hysterically scream about almost being killed. Locke politely apologizes for interrupting their emotional reunion, gently instructing Kara to look directly across the room. Following his gaze, Kara's eyes widen in absolute horror as she spots the treacherous hero standing nearby. Erupting in unbridled fury, the saintess screams at Kid, calling him a demonic murderer for cutting her down and using her as bait. Sweat pours down Kid's face as he violently curses under his breath, watching his perfect alibi instantly crumble. The surrounding guild erupts into disgusted murmurs as the shocked crowd questions how a supposed hero could commit such a messed-up act. Frantically waving his hands, Kid completely loses his cool and stammers as he desperately tries to deny the damning accusations. Locke stares coldly at the crumbling hero, calmly declaring that the living victims themselves are all the evidence they will ever need. Cornered and entirely exposed, Kid grits his teeth in absolute fury as the crushing reality of his downfall sets in. Stepping forward with official authority, Rika brutally lists the hero's crimes, citing attempted murder, betrayal, and unprovoked attacks on allies. The guild receptionist firmly declares that they must strip him of his prestigious hero title at the absolute very least. Completely unfazed by the dramatic justice, Locke politely thanks Rika for her cooperation and turns around to leave the bustling guild. Desperate to stop his departure, Isaac frantically screams out the beast tamer's name. Locke pauses mid-step, looking over his shoulder as the panicked gladiator begs for his attention. Utterly humiliated and stripped of his pride, Isaac collapses onto his knees right in the middle of the crowded guild hall. Shaking violently, the disgraced warrior grips the wooden floorboards as cold sweat completely drenches his face. Isaac pathetically begs for forgiveness, cowardly claiming he had no choice but to follow Kid while begging Locke to fix his ruined reputation. Clinging desperately to his shattered ego, the gladiator screams that he still wants to remain an elite S-rank adventurer. Staring down at the pathetic display without a shred of pity, Locke quietly calls out the gladiator's name. The beast tamer coldly cuts through the miserable apologies, directly accusing Isaac of knowing about Kid's murderous plan beforehand. Isaac flinches violently, wildly shaking his head and shouting that he has absolutely no idea what Locke is talking about. Refusing to let him escape, Locke perfectly recites the moment Isaac eagerly asked for official party membership right after the vicious betrayal. Locke narrows his eyes with absolute disdain, stating this undeniable fact proves Isaac was fully complicit in trying to kill him all along. Pushed completely into a corner, Isaac screams out of frantic denial, violently rejecting the horrific truth of his own actions. Leaping to his feet in sheer desperation, Isaac furiously boasts about how much he supposedly took care of the useless beast tamer. Blinded by total delusion, the gladiator fiercely screams that he was the sole reason Locke ever reached S-rank status. Rika smoothly interrupts the pathetic tantrum, politely stepping forward to inform Isaac that he has completely misunderstood reality. The receptionist drops a massive reality check, firmly stating that the party only ever reached S-rank strictly because Locke was present to carry them. She ruthlessly shatters the gladiator's remaining pride by revealing his true ability is C-rank at best, naming Locke as the sole S-rank talent. Locke blinks in mild surprise at the incredibly high praise, while Rika cheerfully confirms her devastatingly accurate assessment with a bright smile. Rika smoothly explains that if Locke were to team up with a lowly E-rank adventurer, they would likely achieve the exact same S-rank results. Enraged by the absolute disrespect, Isaac violently slams his hands down and screams at the receptionist to stop playing games. Refusing to accept their massive demotion to B-rank, the furious gladiator accuses Rika of spouting utter nonsense. Driven to the edge by his shattered pride, Isaac aggressively demands a one-on-one duel with Locke to prove his true strength. The desperate warrior strikes a twisted bargain, promising to accept the demotion if he loses but demanding the entire case be dropped if he secures a victory. Caught entirely off guard by the sudden challenge, Locke hesitates until Rika steps in with a reassuring smile. Realizing he hasn't fought alongside a party in quite some time, the beast tamer confidently accepts the gladiator's brutal challenge. Rika officially frames the duel as a formal guild request, offering Locke special rewards if he successfully demonstrates his training abilities alongside an E-rank partner. Locke reflects on the unique situation, noting that this will essentially be his very first official mission since going solo. Bowing his head in gratitude, Locke formally accepts the temporary party arrangement and prepares to showcase his true worth. Pivoting her sharp gaze back to the fuming gladiator, the guild receptionist formally addresses Isaac's side of the upcoming battle. She casually dictates the terms of the trial, declaring that Isaac, EMI, and Kara must all challenge the dungeon together as a three-person squad. Pointing a strict finger at the hero, Rika explicitly bans Kid from participating due to his pending investigation for attempted murder. Kid scoffs at the severe restriction, arrogantly brushing off the dark rumors surrounding his past dungeon expeditions. The hero laughs menacingly, boldly claiming that the guild possesses zero hard evidence for crimes committed so many years ago. A sudden, commanding voice cuts through the tense guild hall, firmly volunteering to provide the necessary testimony. Kid violently flinches, his arrogant smirk instantly vanishing as pure dread washes over his face. A scarred veteran steps out from the crowd, revealing himself as a former member of the legendary A-rank party known as the Jet Black Spear. The scarred adventurer glares daggers at the sweating hero, asking if he forgot their tragic past while Kid frantically denies knowing him. The veteran furiously recounts their doomed expedition in the Dungeon of Extinction, confirming that his own friends were also used as sacrificial bait. A horrific memory flashes before the veteran's eyes, showing a desperate friend screaming for help as the hero cruelly abandoned them. Clenching his fists in agony, the survivor explains how he desperately tried to warn the city upon his solitary return. He bitterly notes that the public entirely dismissed a nameless adventurer's pleas in favor of a beloved hero with deep capital connections. Falling to his knees, the broken man tearfully apologizes to Locke, deeply regretting his inability to expose the monster sooner. Utterly cornered by the undeniable testimony, Kid stammers weakly as the entire guild glares at him with pure hatred. Rika steps forward with absolute authority, coldly declaring that no amount of political connections will save the hero from this overwhelming evidence. Dropping his heroic facade entirely, Kid sneers in disgust and loudly curses himself for ever joining such a pathetic, small fry party. Enraged by the sudden insult, Isaac fiercely turns on his former idol and screams that Kid is nothing but a damnable fraud. Brushing off the gladiator's wrath, Kid arrogantly declares that he has absolutely zero interest in associating with a fake S-rank squad anyway. The cornered criminal slowly reaches into his gear, a dark and desperate plan visibly forming in his eyes. Feigning complete ignorance, Kid violently complains about being apprehended by the guild for ancient crimes he claims to have forgotten. Lucky aggressively barks at the cornered hero, prompting a panicked bystander to scream for the madness to stop. Kicking wildly at the snarling Fenrir, the furious hero orders the damned dog to shut the hell up and back off. Radiating pure, desperate malice, Kid fiercely vows that he absolutely refuses to go down in a pathetic guild hall. Moving with terrifying speed, the desperate criminal abruptly lunges forward and violently grabs the defenseless EMI. Jerking the terrified mage against his chest, Kid tightly grips his weapon to her throat and uses her as a human shield. Reaching out with a trembling hand, Isaac frantically begs the deranged hero to stop so they can somehow salvage their ruined lives. Kid violently screams at the gladiator to get out of his way while the weeping EMI chokes out a desperate plea for mercy. Dragging his hostage backward toward the exit, the disgraced hero roars that he never even wanted to be part of this wretched guild. Raising his hands in a placating gesture, Locke urgently promises to comply with the demands as long as the madman releases EMI immediately. Pressing his weapon against his trembling hostage, Kid viciously orders the entire crowd to move out of his way if they want EMI to live. The terrified onlookers completely freeze as the desperate criminal slowly backs toward the guild's exit with his captive. Sensing the perfect opportunity to intervene, the giant Fenrir violently tenses his powerful muscles and prepares to strike. Shoving the hostage aside to cover his escape, the cowardly hero taunts them to avoid becoming monster food before bidding them a mocking farewell. EMI tumbles helplessly through the air as her treacherous captor makes a desperate dash for the open doors. Isaac frantically screams Emmy's name while reaching out in sheer panic as she plummets toward the hard stone floor. A brilliant silver blur suddenly erupts across the guild hall as the legendary beast intercepts the falling mage with unbelievable speed. The panicked party members rush over to eagerly check if EMI is okay, finding her safely caught while a massive tail wags happily nearby. Wagging his tail with absolute delight, Lucky proudly stands directly over the completely flattened and defeated body of the treacherous hero. The giant wolf looks up at Locke with shining eyes, excitedly boasting that he can easily accomplish anything if he truly puts his mind to it. Cheering triumphantly, the legendary predator proudly explains that he carefully held back his immense strength to ensure the fragile human didn't instantly explode under his heavy paws. Locke sighs in relief and warmly thanks his familiar as they successfully manage to restrain the disgraced hero without causing a fatal mess. The defeated and humiliated kid is roughly hauled away by the guild guards as bystanders shout curses at the disgraced hero. Watching the chaotic scene unfold, the tension in the guild hall begins to slowly dissipate. Turning his attention to his loyal familiar, Locke warmly thanks Lucky for his perfectly timed intervention. The giant silver wolf happily wags his tail, playfully assuring his master that it was absolutely no problem. Shifting his focus back to his former teammates, Locke approaches them with a completely unbothered expression. He drops their heavy bags onto the floor, firmly declaring that he has officially finished delivering their luggage. Frustrated by the humiliating situation, Isaac aggressively clicks his tongue while refusing to meet the beast tamer's eyes. The defeated gladiator glares silently at the floor, entirely overwhelmed by his violently bruised ego. Stepping out from behind the sulking warrior, a deeply remorseful Imai softly calls out her childhood friend's name. Tears well up in the young mage's eyes as she genuinely apologizes for everything they violently put him through. Locke remains perfectly still, listening quietly to her incredibly long overdue confession of guilt. Before EMI can completely finish, Isaac sharply interrupts and angrily orders her to stop crying. Masking his sheer desperation with arrogance, the gladiator loudly boasts that he already knew they were completely outmatched. He graciously offers to put Locke back into the elite party, acting as though this massive concession should be more than enough to fix everything. Hearing the utterly delusional offer, Locke lets out a heavy and completely exhausted sigh. The beast tamer flatly rejects the proposition, firmly stating that he will never party with them ever again. Isaac flinches backward, completely and utterly shocked that his supposed act of mercy was rejected so effortlessly. Stepping firmly to Locke's side, Kara coldly agrees with the beast tamer's definitive decision. The resurrected saintess proudly declares that Locke will be joining her instead since he was the one who was unjustly betrayed. Isaac stares at the healer in absolute bewilderment, struggling to comprehend exactly how he is suddenly losing another essential teammate. Glaring at her former friend with pure disgust, Kara reminds the gladiator that he cowardly abandoned her to die and swears she will never party with such a vile person. Panicking as his entire elite squad completely crumbles, Isaac desperately begins blaming EMI for their disastrous downfall. EMI fiercely shouts back, reminding the hypocritical gladiator that he was the one who constantly called Locke entirely useless. Realizing the absolute futility of their bitter infighting, the exhausted mage finally begs Isaac to just stop arguing. Looking down in absolute shame, EMI openly admits that they all secretly knew Locke was carrying them but were simply too arrogant to acknowledge the undeniable truth. The weeping mage takes full responsibility for their catastrophic downfall, confessing that their current misery is entirely their own fault. Unable to refute her painful honesty, Isaac bitterly clicks his tongue and looks away in sheer defeat. Watching his childhood friend cry, Locke softly murmurs Emmy's name with a hint of lingering sadness. A heavy, suffocating silence descends upon the fractured group as the weight of their permanent separation fully sets in. Awkwardly breaking the heavy tension, Rika tentatively suggests that they finally move on to discussing the terms of the official challenge. Locke quickly apologizes for keeping the guild waiting, politely assuring the receptionist that his past trauma is no longer a touchy subject. Nodding professionally, Rika retrieves the official paperwork and prepares to go over the contest details one more time. She explicitly warns the competitors that the requested items will heavily range from C rank to B rank in overall difficulty. Instantly regaining his unearned arrogance, Isaac scoffs at the low rank and fiercely accuses the guild of vastly underestimating his supposed S-class abilities. The foolish gladiator crosses his arms and loudly guarantees that there is absolutely no way he will ever lose this simple scavenger hunt. Locke calmly reviews the official quest board, silently memorizing the exact magical materials required for absolute victory. The extensive list demands a rainbow-colored dragonfly, fresh green emeralds, orango eggs, and flying dragon claws to be successfully gathered within a single week. Reading anxiously over his shoulder, Imai nervously points out one specific condition and asks Isaac if he is truly prepared to handle it. Misinterpreting her caution, Isaac immediately turns to mock Locke, accusing the beast tamer of chickening out before the contest even officially begins. Unfazed by the cheap taunt, Locke points directly at the stipulation requiring them to prove the difference in power, noting that he graciously gave them a final chance to back down. Isaac aggressively slams his hand on the counter, demanding to know what is wrong with the ridiculous guild request. Rika smiles sweetly and taunts the gladiator, asking if his supposed S-Class party is already planning to run away. Gritting his teeth in sheer frustration, Isaac violently glares at the receptionist while completely unable to formulate a comeback. EMI watches the tense exchange with widening eyes, slowly realizing the true nature behind the guild's selected challenge. The young mage mentally notes that since they dash straight to S-Class within this exact branch, the guild completely possesses all their completed quest data. She realizes the guild deliberately weaponized their specific phobias, perfectly targeting Kara's hatred of orengos, Emi's fear of insect demons, and Isaac's paralyzing dread of green frogs. EMI concludes that this brutal challenge is an official warning from the guild, signaling their absolute zero tolerance for rule-breaking adventurers. Refusing to back down, Isaac furiously tells EMI to shut up and declares they will complete the task while Rika cheerfully anticipates their struggle. The humiliated and terrified S-Class trio violently marches out of the guild hall to face their ultimate nightmare. Turning her attention back to the beast tamer, Rika politely offers to introduce Locke to the E-Class adventurer waiting nearby. Locke nods in agreement and gently instructs Lucky to enjoy his stay in the guild hall since this meeting might take a while. Leading the way, Rika casually asks Locke if he has any absolute deal-breakers or personal hatreds regarding forming a new party. The young tamer admits he despises being betrayed and strongly dislikes people who completely refuse to follow directions. Looking slightly worried about his new temporary partner, Locke asks the receptionist if it is truly fine for her to unilaterally decide these party arrangements. Winking playfully, Rika proudly reveals that despite her cute appearance, she is actually the deputy director's assistant and wields considerable authority. Locke flashes a thumbs up in understanding, completely impressed by the receptionist's surprisingly high-ranking status. As he follows her down the corridor, Locke suddenly realizes that Rika has been the exact same guild receptionist for the past 3 years. He internally notes that while her cute appearance hasn't aged a single day, her high rank implies she is actually quite old. Catching his intense stare, Rika asks what is wrong, prompting a startled Locke to frantically wave his hands and deny thinking anything suspicious. Desperately changing the subject, Locke claims he is just wondering what kind of person this mysterious E-Class adventurer actually is. Rika assures him that the recruit definitely won't betray them, noting that the adventurer is currently in a rather unusual situation. Locke repeats the phrase with deep confusion, completely unsure of what an unusual situation entails. Stopping before the training grounds, the receptionist ominously admits her own skepticism and shockingly requests Locke to give the recruit a good beating. Sweating profusely, Locke mentally repeats the violent request while slowly pushing open the heavy wooden doors to the arena. The heavy doors swing wide open, revealing a sprawling and brightly lit combat training facility. A lone, hooded figure stands entirely motionless in the center of the vast dirt arena. The mysterious adventurer slowly turns to face the newcomers, their features hidden entirely beneath a dark cloak. With a swift motion, the figure pulls back the heavy hood to reveal strikingly sharp features and long, pointed ears. Stepping forward into the light, Rika formally introduces the E-Class adventurer as an elf named Shannon. Locke stares in absolute surprise, completely stunned to discover that his new partner is actually a mythical elf. His eyes immediately lock onto a thick, metallic band clamped tightly around the young elf's slender neck. The beast tamer's expression darkens with concern as he correctly identifies the cruel device as a slave collar. Rika solemnly confirms that Shannon is both a slave and an adventurer, explaining that the guild took her in for a very specific reason. Turning to the receptionist, Locke demands to know exactly what this disturbing arrangement means. Rika drops a chilling bombshell, revealing that all 5 of Shannon's previous masters died under highly suspicious circumstances. She grimly lists the bizarre causes of death, which include natural causes, poisoning, falling off a cliff, and a random demon attack. Because her final master had a direct connection to the guild, Shannon officially became an affiliated asset despite her cursed track record. Locke stares at the quiet elf, internally deducing that such a massive string of lethal accidents cannot simply be bad luck. Glaring coldly at the beast tamer, Shannon speaks up and darkly declares herself to be the Grim Reaper. The cursed elf bluntly orders Locke to refuse this guild request entirely if he actually values his own life. Locke calmly replies that this guild request is strictly a temporary arrangement. Wasting no time, the cursed elf drops into a deadly combat stance and readies her blade. Shannon suddenly lunges forward with terrifying speed to strike the young tamer. Halting her blade inches away, she coldly warns the weak boy to stay entirely away from her cursed life. Locke stands his ground perfectly still, completely unfazed by her sudden burst of lethal aggression. Effortlessly dodging her next swift movement, Locke calmly asks what would happen if he refused to leave. Frustrated by his absurd stubbornness, the elf furiously questions why he simply refuses to understand the danger. Glaring intensely, Shannon demands to know if he genuinely wants to die that badly. Her harsh and deadly facade slowly begins to crack as the overwhelming weight of her trauma surfaces. Tears well in her eyes as she tearfully admits she has entirely given up on life after being reduced to a mere slave. With her voice trembling violently, she insists that he does not have to be a part of her miserable existence. The broken elf cries out in pure agony, screaming that she is absolutely sick of watching people die around her. Locke watches her intense emotional breakdown with a calm, empathetic, and unwavering gaze. Fully understanding her deeply hidden kindness, the beast tamer lowers his defensive stance. Stepping closer to the trembling girl, Locke completely and intentionally drops his guard. He smiles warmly and concludes that there will be absolutely no problem as long as he proves he is stronger than her. Pausing mid-step, his expression softens considerably with genuine and profound compassion. Locke firmly declares that he absolutely cannot abandon someone as incredibly kind-hearted as she is. Flustered and highly defensive, Shannon aggressively tells him to shut up while furiously denying his warm praise. Desperate to push him away, she aggressively readies her deadly blade for a genuine fight. Locke instantly drops into a highly focused combat stance to meet her lethal challenge. Confirming her unwavering resolve, he solemnly asks if she has absolutely no intention of stopping this fight. Shannon glares back with fierce and unyielding determination burning brightly in her eyes. Bracing himself for the incoming assault, Locke prepares for the inevitable and violent clash. The beast tamer confidently promises to make her completely understand his true, overwhelming strength. Shannon launches herself forward, unleashing a lightning-fast and deadly flurry of sword strikes. Locke skillfully dodges every single rapid slash with effortless, flowing precision. Gritting her teeth in deep frustration, the elf aggressively pushes her relentless assault to the absolute limit. Analyzing her fierce movements, Locke notes that her natural elven agility grants her truly incredible speed. He recognizes the sheer discipline behind her strikes, realizing she must have practiced swinging that blade tens of thousands of times. Shannon pivots sharply, aiming a devastating and lightning-fast horizontal slash directly at his torso. Effortlessly evading the heavy attack, Locke calmly observes that perfectly clean muscle movements are entirely predictable. Stepping flawlessly inside her guard, Locke lightly taps her shoulder and confidently declares their bout is over. Shannon's eyes widen in sheer, absolute shock as she realizes how easily he completely bypassed her flawless defenses. Refusing to accept sudden defeat, the desperate elf spins around to launch another wild and heavy attack. Screaming that she will never lose, Shannon violently throws a fierce, perfectly aimed high kick. Easily blocking the heavy strike, Locke mentally praises her incredibly solid and well-practiced martial arts foundation. He bluntly warns her that her current technique simply isn't enough before softly apologizing for the incoming pain. Moving with absolute, blinding speed, Locke delivers a precise and physically disabling counterstrike. Shannon groans in sudden pain and collapses helplessly to the dirt floor as the intense sparring match finally concludes. Shannon refuses to accept defeat, firmly declaring that they are officially done here. She tearfully explains that acknowledging her loss means he will eventually die just like all the others. Locke insists he will not die easily, prompting the desperate elf to furiously scream that he definitely will. Trembling with trauma, she cries out that all her previous masters made that exact same promise right before perishing. Driven by sheer panic, the cursed elf tightly grips her weapon and readies another desperate strike. Fueled by her dark past, Shannon violently charges forward while screaming that she absolutely cannot afford to lose. Locke watches her frantic assault unfold, softly whispering her name with a calm and deeply empathetic expression. He firmly plants his feet in the dirt, completely refusing to back down from the cursed girl's relentless onslaught. Deciding to prove his overwhelming power, Locke confidently declares he will show her exactly why he will survive. He casually warns her not to die of sheer surprise as a powerful magical aura suddenly erupts around him. Channeling his immense taming magic, Locke loudly summons his legendary Fenrir directly to the battlefield. A blinding pillar of light violently shatters the arena floor as the colossal monster begins to materialize. Shannon shrieks in absolute terror as a massive, imposing shadow entirely eclipses the training grounds. The gigantic beast lands with a devastating thud, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. Towering over the tiny elf, the majestic silver wolf unleashes a terrifying and dominant aura. Shannon collapses to her knees in pure disbelief, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of the mythical predator. The giant beast casually asks if he was summoned while the stunned elf struggles to comprehend that a Fenrir is his actual familiar. Locke cheerfully thanks Lucky while the bewildered elf stares up in sheer awe, desperately wondering who this impossible boy truly is. A young boy happily calls out for his older sister to wait for him. Shannon turns with a fond smile, playfully teasing her little brother for stubbornly following her again. She reflects on her peaceful childhood, noting she had a precious younger brother named Seth who was 5 years her junior. Born and raised in the tranquil homeland of the elves, Shannon believed their quiet lives would last forever until everything suddenly changed. Without warning, little Seth completely vanished within the dense, sprawling woods known as the Forest of Affection. Her father urgently instructed her to stay behind and guard the house while the adults organized a massive search party. Despite her parents' strict orders, the agonizing thought of her precious brother remaining in deadly peril consumed her entirely. Unable to simply sit still in agonizing suspense, Shannon bolted straight into the wilderness to find him herself. Sprinting frantically through the thick foliage, she desperately screamed Seth's name into the empty forest. Realizing he was nowhere in the outer woods, a chilling thought struck her as she looked toward the deeper, forbidden zones. Pushing past the heavy brush, Shannon ventured further into the dark and shadowy depths of the ancient woods. Looming eerily through the misty trees stood the legendary, long-abandoned House of the Mage. She recalled that human mags and elves once swore eternal friendship in this very forest where they used to play. Deep within this strictly off-limits zone rested a mysterious mansion where a reclusive mage supposedly resided. Gazing up at the pristine architecture, she marveled that the grand estate remained completely untouched by the ravages of hundreds of years. Deducing that Seth wasn't anywhere else in the forest, Shannon nervously concluded he had to be trapped inside the eerie mansion. Mustering every ounce of her courage, she slowly approached the towering double doors of the silent estate. Pushing the heavy wooden doors open, she stepped cautiously into the vast, shadow-filled entrance hall. Walking through the empty corridors, she felt deeply unsettled by the absolute lack of dust in a supposedly abandoned home. Pausing in the hallway, Shannon stared in profound confusion at the bizarrely immaculate environment surrounding her. A faint, joyful giggling suddenly echoed from deeper within the mansion, instantly snapping her to high alert. Recognizing the familiar laughter, Shannon frantically yelled for her brother and sprinted directly toward the sound. Bursting through a set of ornate doors, she finally located her missing sibling inside a dimly lit chamber. Little Seth lay completely unconscious on the cold floor, surrounded by an eerie, pulsing magical aura. Shannon immediately dropped to her knees, staring in sheer horror at her brother's entirely unresponsive body. Reaching out with trembling hands, she desperately cried his name while gently pulling his limp form into her arms. Checking his vitals, she panicked upon realizing his pulse and breathing were dangerously erratic, urging her to get him home immediately. Lifting Seth securely onto her back, Shannon quickly turned around to flee the cursed room. A sinister, shadowy presence suddenly materialized directly behind the fleeing siblings, radiating pure malice. Glancing back in utter terror, Shannon choked on her words as she beheld a terrifying, formless monster. A massive wave of dark magical energy violently slammed the heavy chamber door shut right in front of her face. Gripping the handle in absolute panic, she frantically rattled the locked door, completely unable to force it open. An otherworldly, echoing voice suddenly slithered into her mind, sadistically asking her to make a horrific choice. The sinister entity demanded to know which one of the two trapped siblings would be allowed to survive. Trembling with absolute terror, Shannon selflessly begged the demonic entity to spare her little brother's life. The terrifying shadow completely engulfed the young elf, violently plunging her entire vision into total darkness. A massive surge of dark magic shattered her senses as she fully succumbed to the monstrous entity's overwhelming power. Shannon's memory abruptly goes entirely blank right after her agonizing, helpless collapse to the floor. Blinking against the soft morning light, the bewildered elf slowly regained consciousness safely in her own comfortable bed. Looking around the peaceful house, she was utterly stunned to see Seth smiling happily as if the entire horrific nightmare never even happened. Staring out the window in absolute dread, Shannon desperately wonders if her traumatic experience was merely a terrible dream. She quickly realizes the grim reality is far from a nightmare as a heavy sadness completely washes over her. Following that fateful day, deeply unsettling and strange occurrences rapidly begin to plague her peaceful life. Innocent creatures in her immediate surroundings suddenly start to drop dead without any logical explanation. The sinister curse escalates with terrifying speed, claiming the lives of progressively larger animals as time goes on. Horrifying piles of lifeless creatures continue to accumulate around the village borders. The final, devastating straw comes when her family's beloved horse abruptly collapses and dies. She desperately tries to warn her parents, but they completely dismiss her frantic fears as a child's overactive imagination. Gripped by sheer terror, the young elf fully accepts that the deadly curse clinging to her is an undeniable threat. Terrified that her own family will be the next victims, Shannon quietly abandons her village in the dead of night. Stepping out of her sheltered home, she quickly discovers that the outside world is unimaginably cruel and unforgiving. Before she can even comprehend her bleak new reality, the naive elf is brutally captured and reduced to a mere slave. Despite her miserable circumstances, she remembers a gentle piece of advice urging her to study and learn about the world. Her very first master proves to be incredibly kind, gently teaching her the basic concepts of currency and survival. He patiently guides the clueless elf, offering her a vital glimmer of hope in a painfully dark reality. Tragically, just 6 months later, her gentle master peacefully passes away in his sleep. Deep down, Shannon knows her dark curse is responsible, even as she desperately tries to deny the horrific truth. Her nightmare worsens when her second master succumbs to a sudden illness, and her third violently falls off a cliff within a week. The cursed streak ruthlessly claims her fourth master via poison and her fifth in a brutal monster attack. Realizing that absolutely everyone she touches is doomed, she eventually becomes widely feared across the land as the Grim Reaper. Weeping heavily into her hands, the broken elf agonizes over the innocent lives her dark presence has violently snuffed out. Hopelessly waiting to be locked away in prison to isolate herself, she is suddenly taken in by the Adventurers Guild. Instead of locking her away, the Pragmatic Guild decides to utilize her unique status as an E-rank adventurer. Reckless adventurers frequently approach the quiet elf, eagerly attempting to recruit the new member into their ranks. Preferring absolute isolation, she always reveals her terrifying cursed history just to scare the recruiters away. When words completely fail, she violently drives them off using sheer brute force to protect them from her deadly aura. Battered and thoroughly terrified, the rejected adventurers flee while screaming that they want absolutely nothing to do with the Reaper. Left completely alone once again, Shannon stands completely numb in the heavy, suffocating silence. Her cycle of violent isolation continues unchallenged until a very specific, stubborn young man abruptly appears. Stepping into her lonely world with a warm smile, Locke Sistel politely introduces himself to the cursed elf. Falling back into her defensive habits, Shannon immediately draws her blade and attempts to violently reject his recruitment. Instead of fleeing in absolute terror, the unwavering beast tamer stands his ground and takes her lethal warnings entirely seriously. Despite being unfairly banished from an elite S-class party, Locke proves to be incredibly strong and deeply kind-hearted. Overwhelmed by his profound compassion, the desperate elf tightens her grip on her sword to force him away. She furiously screams at the boy, demanding to know why he refuses to understand that staying near her guarantees his death. Unfazed by her frantic warning, Locke confidently declares he will physically show her exactly why he will survive. Channeling his immense magical power, Locke boldly summons his legendary Fenrir directly onto the battlefield. A blinding pillar of light violently erupts as the colossal silver wolf materializes right before her eyes. Shannon collapses to her knees, staring in absolute, paralyzed disbelief at the mythical apex predator. Still reeling from the sheer shock, she marvels at the impossible reality of Locke possessing the tremendous ability to tame a legendary Fenrir. Voices from her dark past violently echo in Shannon's mind, cursing her as the Grim Reaper and demanding her immediate death. Believing her death would solve everything, she reflects on how desperately she simply wanted to prevent further tragedy. The cursed elf suddenly realizes this morbid desire was a lie born from constantly suppressing her own true feelings. Trembling under the weight of her revelation, Shannon finally admits to herself that she still desperately wants to live. Gazing at the unwavering beast tamer, she feels a profound sense of hope and decides it might actually be safe to rely on him. Overwhelmed by this massive emotional release, Shannon's vision suddenly blurs as she completely loses consciousness. Locke urgently calls out her name, rushing forward to catch the fainting elf before she hits the ground. Checking her condition, Locke determines she is completely fine and simply exhausted from the intense emotional strain. He looks down at her peaceful sleeping face, silently observing the dramatic shift in her demeanor. The young tamer notes that she looks completely serene, as if a massive and suffocating weight has finally been lifted from her chest. Gently supporting her fragile frame, Locke decides to let the exhausted girl rest for a little while. He carefully places her in a comfortable position on a nearby bench to safely recover her strength. The massive Fenrir quietly approaches from the shadows, softly calling out his master's name. Lucky whimpers apologetically, anxiously wondering if howling with all his might to intimidate the elf was a terrible idea. Locke warmly reassures his loyal familiar, thanking the giant wolf for effectively helping to resolve the tense situation. The legendary predator erupts into happy cheers, profoundly relieved that he isn't actually in trouble. Locke suddenly spots a large bird dangling from Lucky's jaws and curiously asks what he plans to do with the creature. The strange avian monster hangs completely limp in the Fenrir's mouth, letting out a pathetic little squawk. Lucky proudly explains that the fragile bird simply fainted and fell straight out of the sky when he unleashed his terrifying howl. Without warning, a familiar magical interface suddenly materializes right in front of the beast tamer's eyes. The system chimes cheerfully, announcing that the sky bird wishes to become his friend and awaiting his official confirmation. Locke stares at the floating prompt in sheer disbelief, marveling at how ridiculously easy this taming process continues to be. Deciding that having more friends could only be fun, Locke cheerfully accepts the contract as a bright magical light flashes. The system confirms the beast's transport to the monster garden while Locke casually accepts his rapidly growing menagerie. Locke strictly scolds his drooling familiar, firmly reminding the gluttonous wolf that they absolutely do not eat their new friends. A soft, hesitant voice suddenly breaks the quiet atmosphere of the training ground. Shannon slowly opens her eyes and sits up, fully regaining consciousness after her deep and much-needed rest. Locke immediately turns his attention back to the elf, gently asking if she is finally feeling better. The elf stares down at her hands, her expression unreadable as she fully processes the profound changes in her heart. Bowing her head deeply, Shannon frantically apologizes for violently attacking him earlier. Locke dismisses her apology with incredible grace, understanding she was only trying to protect him, which prompts her profound gratitude. Shannon stammers nervously, struggling to find the exact right words as a warm blush creeps across her face. Mustering every ounce of her courage, she humbly admits her inexperience and asks if she can officially join his party. Locke beams with absolute delight, completely thrilled that the stubborn and traumatized elf has finally accepted his help. Extending a warm and welcoming hand, he officially greets her as his newest and highly valued party member. Shannon stares at his offered hand, utterly overwhelmed by the pure, unconditional acceptance she has so desperately craved. With happy tears welling in her eyes, she eagerly grasps his hand and firmly embraces her new beginning. A colossal shadow stealthily looms up directly behind the emotional and completely unsuspecting elf. The giant Fenrir aggressively nuzzles against Shannon to greet her, startling the poor girl entirely out of her wits. Locke frantically scolds the overenthusiastic wolf as Shannon freezes in sheer, absolute panic beneath the legendary predator's massive snout. Overcoming her initial fear, Shannon marvels at the massive size of the Fenrir's paw as she gently rubs it. Giggling warmly, the elf cheerfully greets Lucky while a voice playfully boasts about their ongoing development. Shannon politely introduces herself with a bright smile, completely oblivious to Locke nervously sweating over a sudden grim realization. Shifting the mood entirely, the giant wolf turns to Locke and grimly states that physical contact has confirmed his dark suspicions. Shannon freezes in absolute terror as the mythical beast bluntly reveals that a remarkably powerful curse plagues her body. Locke narrows his eyes with absolute focus, solemnly repeating the dreaded word as the heavy truth settles over the group. The Fenrir explains that this particularly nasty hex is designed to violently drain the vital life force from anyone nearby. Adding to the sheer horror, the legendary predator warns that this parasitic magic will eventually consume the young elf's life as well. Locke clenches his fists as he realizes this dark magic is the sole reason for the elf's tragic and deadly history. Refusing to accept this cruel fate, the young tamer stares down his familiar and desperately asks if the curse can be broken. Lucky dismisses the idea immediately, claiming that such delicate magical unweaving is entirely unsuited for a destructive beast like him. The giant wolf flips the script, confidently declaring that his seemingly inexperienced master possesses the true power to shatter the hex. Sweating nervously, Locke waves his hands and completely denies having any specialized knowledge regarding complex curse removal. Ignoring his master's protests, The colossal beast suddenly leans forward and casually asks to borrow Locke's head for a moment. Locke frantically flails his arms in pure panic as the legendary Fenrir aggressively chomps down on the boy's entire head. A brilliant surge of magical energy instantly floods the arena as pure, ancient knowledge forcefully transfers into the tamer's mind. Gasping in sheer awe, Locke marvels as the exact magical blueprints required to unweave the dark spell violently overwrite his ignorance. Processing the massive influx of data, the beast tamer correctly deduces that the lethal curse acts as the exact inverse of a divine protection. Beaming with absolute delight, Locke eagerly praises his familiar's incredible versatility while the giant wolf smirks with overwhelming pride. Basking in the high praise, Lucky nods confidently and urges his master to immediately test his newly acquired magical skills. Just as Locke prepares to cast the counterspell, a sudden and commanding voice strictly orders the young tamer to stop. Turning toward the unexpected interruption, Locke's eyes widen as he instantly recognizes the heavily armored guild chief approaching them. The imposing leader stops before them, coldly declaring his absolute authority to forbid the removal of the elf's deadly curse. Completely blindsided by the sudden betrayal of logic, Locke stares blankly at the guild chief and softly mutters in pure confusion. Locke angrily demands to know what the guild chief means by forbidding him from breaking Shannon's deadly curse. Guild Chief Titus calmly explains that Shannon is currently property of the guild and serves as official personnel. Titus strictly points out that guild regulations explicitly forbid amateurs from performing volatile spellbreaking on their staff. Locke frantically argues that there is absolutely no time for rules since the curse will soon claim the young elf's life. Titus stares down the young tamer, noting that Locke is acting surprisingly out of character and losing his usual composure. The chief warns that letting raw emotions completely dictate his actions will only make him end up just like the foolish Isaac. Stung by the harsh but accurate comparison, Locke lowers his head and quietly apologizes for his sudden outburst. Titus softens his expression, gently suggesting that Locke is simply exhausted after dealing with so many chaotic events today. Letting out a heavy sigh, the drained beast tamer humbly admits that he might actually be a little tired. Processing the chief's specific wording, Locke suddenly pauses as a clever realization sparks in his mind. The boy looks up with renewed determination, asking if removing the curse would be entirely legal if Shannon was no longer guild staff. Titus smirks with profound amusement, deeply impressed by how quickly Locke managed to cool his head and find the loophole. The seasoned guild chief lets out a hearty, booming laugh that completely shatters the tense atmosphere of the training ground. Flashing a sharp and serious gaze, Titus decides to drop the formalities entirely and get straight to the real point. He bluntly asks the stunned beast tamer if he is willing to officially purchase Shannon directly from the guild. Locke and Shannon both gasp in sheer surprise as the unexpected proposition completely catches them off guard. Titus confirms that buying her freedom would strip her of her staff status, perfectly allowing Locke to break the deadly curse without violating guild laws. The chief crosses his arms and stares at the boy, patiently waiting for Locke to process the life-changing offer. Locke hesitates, scratching his cheek as he nervously admits he doesn't quite know how to respond to such a massive decision. A brief, contemplative silence settles over the group as Titus prepares to explain his true underlying motives. The guild chief asks Locke a philosophical question, challenging the boy to define the true overarching purpose of the Adventurers Guild. Locke thinks for a moment before suggesting that the guild primarily exists to help adventurers make a decent living. Titus nods slightly, acknowledging the practical truth in Locke's answer while preparing to reveal his own deeper philosophy. Placing a hand over his heart, the imposing leader proudly declares that his ultimate goal is to actually make adventurers happy. Locke stares up at the chief in quiet awe, deeply moved by the man's surprisingly compassionate and noble vision. Titus confesses that under normal circumstances, a traitor like Isaac would face immediate expulsion or a permanent lifelong ban. The seasoned leader sadly admits that simply throwing the treacherous party out onto the streets wouldn't actually fix their deeply flawed characters. Acknowledging his own naivety, Titus explains that he designed their punishment specifically to force them to take a hard, fresh look at themselves. Locke listens in absolute silence, finally understanding the profound wisdom and hidden mercy behind the guild's seemingly petty scavenger hunt. Turning his full attention back to Locke, Titus expresses his deep gratitude for the boy who tirelessly supported those ungrateful fools through all their hardships. The imposing guild chief smiles warmly, sincerely stating that he simply wants the selfless beast tamer to finally find his own happiness. Locke's eyes widen as the sheer weight of the chief's unconditional kindness completely washes over him. Gesturing toward the quiet elf, Titus notes that despite suffering through unimaginable hardships, Shannon remains an incredibly sweet girl who deeply cares for others. He gently points out that Locke and Shannon share a striking similarity in how they always put others before themselves. Titus confidently predicts that their shared history of painful sacrifices will ultimately make them perfect, deeply understanding partners. Shrugging his heavy shoulders, the chief casually adds that he certainly won't force Locke into accepting the arrangement if he refuses. However, Titus earnestly admits he would be genuinely overjoyed if Locke could save the cursed elf while allowing Shannon to support him in return. Overwhelmed by the completely unexpected validation, Locke grips his chest as tears of profound relief begin to well up in his eyes. He reflects on how he always believed his silent, agonizing struggles went entirely unnoticed by the rest of the world. A warm, grateful smile breaks across Locke's face as he realizes there were actually kind people watching over him the entire time. Standing quietly before the group, Locke waits patiently for the young elf to gather her shattered courage. Turning to the trembling girl, Locke gently asks Shannon what she truly wants to do with her future. Lowering her gaze in deep shame, Shannon sorrowfully admits that a mere slave lacks the luxury to make personal decisions. Clenching her fists with a sudden spark of newfound determination, the elf looks up and softly whispers a defiant counter. Overcoming her lingering trauma, Shannon earnestly declares that she wants to accompany him as long as it won't bring harm to his party. Hearing her incredibly brave choice, a bright and deeply reassuring smile instantly spreads across the beast tamer's face. Turning confidently toward the imposing guild chief, Locke officially agrees to take full responsibility for Shannon. Nodding in absolute and silent approval, Titus smiles warmly at the young boy's noble and selfless decision. When Locke nervously asks about the massive slave purchase price, Titus casually dismisses his mounting financial concerns. The chief smoothly reveals that the purchase fee coincidentally matches the exact reward payout for their upcoming scavenger hunt. Sweating nervously at the blatantly orchestrated setup, Locke dryly notes the supposed coincidence with a highly strained chuckle. Shifting his focus entirely back to the immediate threat, Locke firmly states that they must immediately shatter the deadly curse. Stepping deliberately toward the nervous elf, the focused beast tamer readies his newly acquired magical knowledge. Extending his glowing hand outward, Locke loudly announces the official start of the perilous spellbreaking ritual. Bracing herself for the unknown magic, Shannon squeezes her eyes tightly shut and bravely accepts his dangerous help. Brilliant, ancient magical runes instantly materialize in the thin air and violently swirl around the focused tamer. Reaching fearlessly through the chaotic magical energy, Locke presses his hand firmly against the epicenter of the dark hex. Narrowing his eyes with absolute, unwavering concentration, the boy channels a massive surge of purifying power into her chest. A terrifying, demonic shadow abruptly erupts from the elf's body as Locke identifies the physically manifested curse. Radiating pure and suffocating malice, the formless dark entity aggressively lashes out to defend its stolen host. Gritting his teeth against the overwhelming pressure, Locke realizes the sinister curse is actively trying to infect his own body. Refusing to yield an inch, Locke violently forces his magic deeper and unleashes a blinding shockwave of pure energy. The dark, demonic manifestation shrieks in absolute agony as it violently shatters into countless harmless fragments. Stripped entirely of its dark power, the heavy iron slave collar cleanly snaps in half and drops uselessly to the stone floor. Wiping the heavy sweat from his brow, Locke lets out a deep sigh of profound relief as the dangerous ritual successfully concludes. Feeling the suffocating weight finally vanish, Shannon tearfully praises Locke for pulling off the impossible. Deflecting the high praise, Locke warmly thanks his giant familiar for directly providing the crucial magical knowledge. Staring in profound awe, the guild chief marvels that Locke actually shattered the legendary curse of a founder Magin. Blinking in sheer confusion, Locke demands to know if the chief secretly knew about the horrific Magin origins all along. Titus admits he lacks deep knowledge of the curse, explaining he only heard scattered reports of similar demonic encounters. The chief grimly recounts an ancient rumor claiming the old world was once entirely ruled by a Magin's terrifying summoning magic. Swallowing hard, Locke nervously repeats the terrifying concept of a demonic entity actively wielding advanced summoning magic. The exasperated tamer begs Titus to share such critical information earlier while the chief simply laughs off the extreme danger. Bowing deeply with a heart full of absolute gratitude, Shannon formally thanks Locke and eagerly anticipates their new partnership. Returning her bright and infectious enthusiasm, Locke flashes a warm, highly confident smile at his newest companion. Watching the touching scene naturally unfold, Titus crosses his massive arms and nods in deep, satisfied approval. Shifting gears back to the challenge, the chief loudly orders them to gather the required materials and completely crush Isaac's party. Hearing the dreaded name of his former friend, A serious and heavily focused glint instantly returns to Locke's eyes. Nodding with absolute and unwavering resolve, the beast tamer firmly accepts the guild chief's final, demanding challenge. Turning back to his loyal familiar and his newly freed companion, Locke confidently suggests they begin their immediate quest preparations. The scene magically transitions to a mysterious and beautifully lush landscape nestled safely within the dimensional bracelet. Gazing around the vibrant surroundings, Shannon confusedly wonders aloud where exactly they have just arrived. Locke calmly explains that they are currently standing inside his magical bracelet, which houses a fully functioning mini-garden. Staring wide-eyed at the impossible landscape, Shannon marvels at what an incredibly amazing item the artifact truly is. The young elf looks around in pure awe, softly admitting she never knew such a wonderful world could exist inside a simple accessory. Her wondrous exploration is suddenly interrupted as a swift movement high above catches her keen elven eyes. Noticing her sudden distraction, Locke asks what is wrong right as Shannon spots a creature soaring through the sky. Pointing upward with genuine excitement, Shannon shouts that there is a majestic sky bird flying overhead. Locke casually nods, calmly confirming that the massive avian is simply the monster he befriended earlier at the training grounds. Staring blankly at the young tamer, Shannon hesitantly asks if he even realizes the true, absurd rarity of his new familiar. She urgently explains that sky birds are incredibly elusive creatures, almost never seen by humans due to how high they naturally fly. Comparing the elusive bird to his legendary Fenrir, Shannon emphatically declares that Locke is a completely abnormal person. Sweating nervously at her blunt and highly accurate assessment, Locke internally sighs and awkwardly accepts his new status as a walking anomaly. The giant Fenrir suddenly whimpers loudly, aggressively begging his master to finally feed him. Rubbing his own growling stomach, Locke eagerly agrees to cook them a massive meal since he is also feeling quite hungry. Looking around the empty garden, Locke wonders where the orange ants vanished to since he explicitly asked them to gather animal meat. Shannon casually reveals that the diligent ants built an entire dungeon in the cabin's basement, leaving Locke entirely bewildered. Locke approaches the simple wooden cabin, completely shocked to discover a massive, ominous dungeon entrance dug directly underneath the floorboards. Staring down into the dark, freshly excavated tunnel, the beast tamer mutters in sheer disbelief as he wonders how they managed this so quickly. A tiny, cheerful voice suddenly echoes from the dark depths of the sprawling basement. Locke jumps in surprise as one of the adorable humanoid ant girls pops out of the tunnel and joyfully welcomes her papa home. Shannon stares in absolute confusion, questioning why an orange ant has a humanoid body and why it is affectionately calling Locke its father. Locke frantically denies everything, sweating profusely as Shannon skeptically points out that the little girl looks absolutely nothing like a monstrous insect. Realizing Lucky is silently mocking him with a knowing smirk, Locke furiously screams his familiar's name while the elf assumes he has highly questionable tastes. Waving his hands in a sheer panic, Locke desperately attempts to explain that he just happened to be present exactly when their monster eggs hatched. Giving him a pitying smile, Shannon promises to keep his weird fetishes a secret while Locke furiously yells that she is completely misunderstanding the bizarre situation. The giant wolf giggles mischievously at his master's suffering, prompting another enraged yell from the highly flustered beast tamer. Locke continues to frantically scream that this is a massive misunderstanding while Shannon calmly tries to diffuse his escalating panic. Pouting playfully, Shannon complains that it is completely unfair for Locke and Lucky to have secret conversations without sharing the joke with her. Pausing his frantic defense, Locke asks if she can actually understand the Fenrir, to which Shannon simply shakes her head no. Locke points out that she understood the ant girl perfectly, and Shannon innocently justifies it by claiming the ant is obviously just a human. Completely dumbfounded by her bizarre logic, Locke internally screams as he tries to process how she could possibly mistake an insect monster for a human girl. The little ant girl wearing a tiara cheerfully chimes in, explaining that she possesses a unique magical skill specifically meant for conversing with humans. She proudly puffs out her chest, revealing that she is fundamentally different from regular ants because she was born to lead her family. The tiny queen explains that her royal status grants her the innate ability to negotiate with and directly command entirely different species. She reveals her skill is called interspecies language and casually asks if Shannon would like a copied version of it, leaving Locke entirely baffled. Before anyone can properly react, the ant girl cheerfully announces that the magical skill transfer is already completely finished. The giant Fenrir tests the newly copied skill by speaking directly to the elf, and Shannon gasps in shock as she fully comprehends his deep voice. Shannon happily thanks the proud little ant girl while Locke stares blankly into space, quietly lamenting how absurdly unpredictable his life has become. Watching the girls happily bond, Locke finally realizes that the tiara-wearing ant is a highly special variant, completely explaining why she alone could speak to him. The tiny ant girl eagerly asks if she and her sisters will be given official names. Thinking for a moment, Locke gently asks how the name Potra sounds. Beaming with absolute joy, Potra throws her hands up and cheers about finally receiving a beautiful name. Smiling warmly, the young tamer decides he should probably give the rest of the swarm names as well. The remaining 5 ant girls gather around with bright and highly expectant eyes. Locke suddenly freezes, scratching his head as a heavy wave of awkward hesitation washes over him. Sweating nervously, he bluntly admits that they all look completely identical to his human eyes. The tiny girls tilt their heads in pure confusion, wondering how he cannot clearly see their supposed differences. Giving up on creativity entirely, Locke lazily dubs them Orange A, B, C, D, and E. Heavy tears begin to well up in the deeply disappointed toddler's eyes. Without warning, the tiny swarm erupts into massive cheers of absolute and chaotic delight. Staring blankly at the celebrating toddlers, Locke genuinely wonders if they actually liked those terrible generic names. He promises himself to give them proper names once their individual personalities fully develop over time. Shifting his focus, the beast tamer asks Potra to explain the mysterious underground dungeon they rapidly constructed. The proud little queen gestures to a freezing chamber specifically designed for safely storing raw meat. She skips over to the next area, happily presenting a well-ventilated drying room meant for preserving monster fur. Finally, she reveals a massive stockpile of highly valuable demon rocks they unearthed during the excavation process. Locke stares in sheer awe, completely blown away by their impossible ability to build such an incredible facility so quickly. Shannon smiles warmly and praises Potra's swarm for their remarkably efficient and diligent craftsmanship. The elf casually notes that the impressive underground structure strongly resembles a natural ant nest. Eager to celebrate their massive success, Locke loudly declares that it is finally time to start cooking the fresh meat. The entire group cheers wildly at the exciting prospect of a massive and delicious feast. Mentally preparing for the heavy meal, Locke lists off grills, frying pans, knives, and various essential seasonings. A heavy sigh escapes the tamer's lips as he suddenly remembers they lack every single piece of required cookware. When Shannon asks about the menu, Locke decides on simple fried chicken since they are currently incredibly short on time. He explains the easy recipe, hyping up the dish by mentioning how perfectly it pairs with fresh, crisp cabbage. In a brief flashback, Locke politely asks a local merchant if he has any cabbages available for sale. The apologetic shopkeeper shakes his head, explaining that the vegetable has been completely out of stock lately. Locke hangs his head in sheer defeat, actively mourning the devastating loss of his perfect side dish. Hearing the tragic news, Shannon pouts heavily and laments missing out on the delicious cabbage pairing. A sinister voice suddenly shatters the peaceful atmosphere, mocking the group for foolishly playing around. A menacing figure boldly steps out from the shadows, radiating absolute arrogance and sheer hostility. Locke narrows his eyes with fierce determination as he immediately recognizes Isaac's deeply punchable smirk. Isaac smugly offers to let Locke back into the party if he simply drops to his knees and begs. The tense atmosphere thickens as the two opposing sides forcefully face off in the crowded hall. Shannon steps forward to shield her new master, sharply questioning what the arrogant gladiator wants. Isaac glares down at the tiny elf, aggressively demanding to know who the hell she is. Locke gently touches Shannon's shoulder, calmly instructing her to just leave the pathetic traitors alone. Turning his cold gaze back to Isaac, Locke firmly states that he has absolutely nothing to do with him anymore. Isaac grinds his teeth in deep frustration, muttering under his breath as Locke's blatant rejection stings his massive ego. Refusing to take the hint, the enraged gladiator violently lunges forward to initiate a physical attack. He throws a brutal and highly aggressive punch aimed straight at the unsuspecting beast tamer's face. Shannon intercepts the deadly strike with blinding speed, flawlessly blocking the massive fist with her bare hands. The fierce elf glares daggers at the gladiator, furiously demanding to know exactly what he thinks he is doing. Isaac flinches backward, genuinely startled by the sheer physical power radiating from the tiny girl. Recovering his unearned arrogance, Isaac scoffs and accuses Locke of using underhanded guild tactics since his new partner is clearly just a lowly E-class adventurer. He cruelly taunts Shannon, claiming that working with a useless piece of garbage like Locke means she will never be able to use him properly. Shannon lowers her stance as a highly dangerous aura radiates from her body, coldly questioning his blatant insult. Enraged by the sheer disrespect, the fierce elf aggressively demands that Isaac take his cruel words back immediately. She violently defends her new partner, screaming that Locke is a human being and not just an object to be used. Locke watches her fierce defense in absolute silence, deeply moved by her immediate and unwavering loyalty. Isaac smirks dismissively at the threat, casually comparing the fiery E-class elf to a weak and loudly barking dog. A familiar, highly condescending voice suddenly calls out from behind the gladiator, immediately drawing Locke's attention. Kara steps forward with a judgmental stare, sharply asking if this ragged elf is truly his new teammate. Locke confidently nods his head, officially introducing Shannon as his brand new E-class partner. The resurrected saintess blatantly looks the quiet elf up and down, heavily scrutinizing her overall appearance. Kara's eyes critically scan Shannon's severely worn and incredibly basic adventure gear. The modest elf shifts uncomfortably under the intense, heavily judgmental glare of the elite healer. Kara bluntly insults Shannon's outfit, callously declaring that her cheap clothes are incredibly lame. Feigning absolute superiority, Kara condescendingly advises the elf to pay much more attention to her wardrobe if she intends to travel with Locke. Locke immediately fires back to defend his partner, telling Kara to mind her own business since fancy clothes do absolutely nothing to increase true strength. The spoiled healer visibly flinches, genuinely stung by Locke's immediate and incredibly harsh defense of the ragged elf. Crossing her arms defensively, Kara loudly complains that she never expected Locke to specifically choose a female partner. Locke quickly attempts to clarify the massive misunderstanding, explaining that pairing up with Shannon was entirely the guild's decision rather than his own choice. Stepping out from the back of the group, EMI softly introduces herself and politely apologizes for her teammates' incredibly rude behavior. The highly remorseful mage turns her sorrowful gaze directly toward her betrayed childhood friend. EMI deeply bows her head to genuinely apologize for all their past sins, fully acknowledging that a simple sorry will never be enough to earn his forgiveness. She quietly admits that she has spent countless hours agonizing over how terribly they treated him. Assuming he would quit adventuring entirely, EMI explains that she desperately wanted this final contest to truly gauge her own independent strength. The mage solemnly vows that once this guild challenge is finally over, she will figure out exactly what to do with the rest of her ruined life. Locke listens quietly to her heartfelt confession, respectfully acknowledging her highly sincere resolve. The heavy tension between the former childhood friends finally begins to settle into a profound mutual understanding. The solemn moment is abruptly shattered as a loud, highly aggressive voice demands that they immediately move their butts out of the way. Offering a polite farewell, Locke calmly wishes his former teammates good luck on their journey. Scoffing at the remark, the rival party arrogantly confirms that they will do exactly that before turning away. The tension finally begins to dissipate as the two groups separate. Breaking the silence, Shannon gently calls out to Locke and suggests that they should get moving as well. Turning to his companion, Locke warmly reassures Shannon that everything is completely all right. Steeling his resolve, he acknowledges the high stakes and declares that they simply cannot afford to lose. A moment of quiet realization washes over the group as they contemplate the challenge ahead. Prioritizing their next move, Bork suggests that they head back to base for the meantime to prepare. Suddenly, a loud thud echoes through the area as an unexpected accident occurs. Thick white smoke billows out in every direction, completely obscuring their vision. Sighing at the mess, Locke lightly scolds a flour-covered Lucky for playing with the cooking supplies. Peering through the dense fog, Lucky earnestly protests that he was only trying to help and wasn't playing at all. The dusty cloud triggers a loud, violent sneeze that echoes through the clearing. Unable to contain themselves, the group bursts into uncontrollable laughter at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Soon, the cheerful sound of sizzling oil fills the air as they settle down to cook their meal. Tapping the finished dish, Locke finally announces that the cooking is complete. With a proud flourish, he presents his culinary masterpiece, declaring it to be Locke's Deluxe Edition fried chicken. The group marvels at the golden feast and eagerly takes their first massive bites. A younger member happily praises Papa's delicious cooking while Locke gently reminds them to eat slowly since the food is piping hot. Turning his attention outward, he makes sure to warn Shannon to be careful with the hot meal as well. With her cheeks stuffed full of food, Shannon gleefully agrees that the meal is absolutely delicious. The group falls into a comfortable silence, savoring every single bite of their hard-earned feast. Warm smiles spread across their faces as they continue to enjoy the phenomenal dish. With the meal settling, Locke calls for their attention and prepares to outline their upcoming strategy. He explains that the Fresh Verdure dungeon is normally a multi-day carriage ride away, turning the request into a week-long ordeal. However, he points out that by cutting straight through harsh terrain like forests and swamps, they can reach it in under half a day. Judging by the heavy baggage their rivals were carrying, Locke confidently predicts the other team will be forced to take the standard carriage route. Weighing their massive advantage, he declares they simply cannot lose unless they stumble into serious trouble in the woods. He thoughtfully adds that even if the rival group attempts a shortcut, their journey won't be nearly as smooth as they expect. Realizing his brilliance, Shannon points out that Locke had cleverly deduced all of this just from observing their rivals earlier. Having thoroughly filled their bellies and finalized their winning plan, the group stands ready for action. Exuding confidence, Locke enthusiastically announces their immediate departure. Wasting no time, the party sets off into the wilderness at a blistering pace. Sitting atop the massive beast, Locke politely apologizes to the giant Fenrir for hitching a ride. Brushing off the apology, the majestic Fenrir casually assures him that it is perfectly fine. The group steadily navigates through the dense, unforgiving forest without a moment of hesitation. Scanning the quiet woods, Locke marvels at how the wild monsters refuse to attack, praising the Fenrir's incredibly intimidating presence. They continue their swift advance deeper into the treacherous wilderness. Suddenly, a mysterious, echoing cry cuts through the quiet woods, forcing the group to a sudden halt. Instantly on high alert, they deduce that someone nearby is being violently attacked by a monster. Seeking a momentary retreat, Locke politely instructs Lucky to step back for a second. A sudden, distressed cry echoes through the tense air as the situation rapidly escalates. The frantic noise continues to build, signaling the immediate arrival of an unknown threat. A startled shout rings out as a massive figure violently drops into the clearing. Screaming in pure shock, Shannon stares wide-eyed at the bizarre, hulking intruder suddenly standing before them. Locke quickly analyzes the towering enemy, realizing with a jolt that it isn't a simple stone statue but a fearsome gargoyle. The terrified group recoils as the gargoyle aggressively prepares to lunge forward. Letting out a deafening roar, the monster unleashes a devastating surprise assault upon the party. Shock ripples through the group as they realize the beast is conjuring incredibly powerful wind magic. Boasting with arrogant laughter, the gargoyle mocks their absolute foolishness for daring to challenge its elemental mastery. A massive surge of magical energy begins to violently swirl around the confident creature. Refusing to back down, the party swiftly counters with an overwhelming blast of magical power. All washes over the group as Locke proudly praises Lucky's incredible strength in the face of danger. However, the triumphant mood suddenly falters as the resulting magical energy begins to spiral dangerously out of control. Panic instantly sets in as Locke frantically yells at his companion to halt the rapidly expanding vortex. Desperately waving his arms, Locke warns that unleashing such a massive spell will inevitably obliterate the nearby royal capital of Kront. Looking down in absolute shame, a tearful Lucky softly apologizes for completely losing control of the terrifying spell. Screaming in utter horror, the group realizes that the catastrophic magic can no longer be contained. Gritting his teeth against the chaotic winds, Locke desperately scrambles to formulate a survival plan. Realizing there is zero time to hesitate, Locke throws himself directly into the path of destruction as Shannon screams his name. Gathering every ounce of his remaining energy, the brave tamer rapidly channels a desperate incantation to intercept the blast. A blinding flash of protective magic violently erupts from his firmly outstretched hands. Knowing he cannot fully cancel the attack, Locke brilliantly focuses his power on a single point to safely distribute the devastating shockwave. The two immense magical forces violently collide in midair, creating a deafening blast. A terrifying struggle ensues as Locke physically pushes back against the overwhelming storm. Screaming at the top of his lungs, Locke channels absolutely everything he has into maintaining the fragile barrier. The sheer, crushing pressure of the colliding spells violently threatens to tear the surrounding landscape apart. Struggling under the immense weight of the blast, Locke furiously grits his teeth as his magical defenses begin to crack. Feeling his physical strength rapidly draining, Locke desperately calls upon the very last reserves of his magical power. Roaring with absolute defiance, he fiercely begs his defenses to hold out just a little bit longer. A monumental explosion absolutely shatters the sky as the overwhelming spell finally detonates. Brilliant beams of lingering light violently scatter across the thoroughly devastated clearing. Panting heavily through the thick smoke, a battered Locke weakly wonders if they actually managed to survive the blast in time. Exhausted and dizzy, Lucky sways unsteadily on his feet in the immediate aftermath of his own chaotic spell. Completely drained of all his energy, Locke finally collapses heavily to the ruined ground. A heavy, ringing silence falls over the scorched battlefield as the blinding dust slowly begins to settle. Peeking through her tightly shut eyes, a trembling Shannon slowly opens them to assess the catastrophic damage. Rushing over in a sheer panic, Shannon frantically checks on Locke, who weakly confirms that everyone managed to escape unharmed. Letting out a massive sigh of relief, Shannon drops her weary shoulders and quietly thanks the heavens for their survival. The brief moment of peace shatters instantly as Shannon gasps in sheer horror, pointing directly at Locke's severely injured arm. Assessing his injured arm, Locke notes that a healing potion could easily tend to this level of damage. Tipping the vial back, he quickly downs the restorative liquid in large, echoing gulps. Shannon watches in sheer amazement as the wound heals instantly, while Locke notes that he specially made this powerful potion himself. Tears streaming down his face, a devastated Lucky profusely apologizes to Locke for messing up once again. The small creature trembles in overwhelming guilt over the sheer chaos his uncontrollable spell caused. Gently calling out his companion's name, Locke reaches forward with a comforting and forgiving hand. Startled by the warm gesture, Lucky looks up in surprise as his tamer sincerely thanks him. Smiling softly, Locke assures the crying beast that he truly appreciates the protective thought behind the disastrous spell. Deeply moved by his tamer's boundless compassion, Lucky stares back with pure, tearful adoration. Acknowledging that the creature's magical power is undeniably disaster class, Locke promises they will learn to control it and fight together from now on. Letting out a joyful cry, Lucky tightly embraces his kind tamer in a heartwarming display of pure affection. Bubbling with newfound determination, the tiny magical beast fiercely vows to practice hard and do his absolute best. Shifting his focus back to the immediate aftermath, Locke turns his attention to a sudden, startling sound nearby. A terrified figure cowers in fear before them, prompting Locke to figure out what they should do next with this newly discovered missing child. Shrugging off the absurdity of the situation, Locke remarks that he hardly expects a lecture from a gargoyle. Shifting the focus, he gently questions why the fearsome creature is crying in such a desolate place. Sniffling pitifully, the towering monster simply admits that it is overwhelmed with sadness. The gargoyle tearfully confesses that it was recently fired from the infamous Demon Lord's army. Surprised by the bizarre revelation, Locke muses aloud that even terrifying monsters can face unemployment. Lamenting its weak magic, the gargoyle explains it was crafted from leftover materials and relegated to cleaning the castle for an entire century. After a recent change in military leadership, the new commanders cruelly dismissed the creature for being useless in combat. Wandering aimlessly through the dense woods at a total loss, the disgraced monster eventually stumbled upon a nearby village. Unfortunately, the terrified villagers immediately attacked the creature, forcing it to flee back into the wilderness. Attempting to comfort the beast, Locke reasonably points out that ordinary people generally harbor deep prejudice against demons. Acknowledging the harsh truth, the gargoyle notes that spending 100 years doing nothing but cleaning left it completely unprepared for human interaction. The crushing realization of being an unfinished reject, combined with the pure hatred of humanity, left the creature drowning in sorrow. Trembling with existential dread, the weeping monster questions the very purpose of its miserable existence. Listening patiently to the heartbreaking tale, Locke offers a sympathetic hum of understanding. He strokes his chin in thought, recalling rumors that gargoyles are supposedly the elite troops of the Demon Lord and require immense magical power to forge. Frowning slightly, Locke admits it is incredibly difficult to imagine such a legendary beast being cobbled together from mere scraps. Bringing the conversation back to the present, he asks the lost creature what it plans to do moving forward. Pausing its tears, the gargoyle stares blankly ahead, completely unsure of its next steps in life. Letting out a fond sigh, Locke smiles gently at the helplessly sobbing giant. Without a second thought, the kind-hearted beast tamer warmly invites the gargoyle to join their traveling party. Stunned by the generous offer, the monster stammers in disbelief, asking if they truly want a weak, cleaning-obsessed companion. Brushing off the concern, Locke praises the gargoyle's incredible dedication to cleaning for a century, assuring it that raw combat strength does not matter to him. Overjoyed by the absolute acceptance, the gargoyle bows deeply and enthusiastically begs to join their ranks. A glowing system prompt suddenly materializes in front of Locke, asking if he wishes to befriend the gargoyle. Squinting at the mysterious holographic text, Locke lets out a confused hum of curiosity. His eyes lock onto the bizarre sealed tag attached to his new companion's status window. When questioned about any hidden powers, the flustered gargoyle apologizes, knowing only that it was created by the previous Demon Lord. Dropping the complicated subject for now, Locke nods in quiet acceptance of the lingering mystery. Smiling brightly, Locke officially welcomes Gargoyle-kun to the team, prompting an immensely proud salute from the eager monster. A brilliant light envelops the creature as the system confirms the gargoyle has been transformed into a sacred beast and transferred to Arden. A new notification immediately pops up, offering Locke the chance to expand his magical garden thanks to his growing roster of holy beasts. Analyzing the available options on the floating screen, Locke decides to focus on expanding the main cabin this time around. With a satisfied sigh, he confirms his selection, and the system smoothly chimes to announce the successful expansion. Turning his attention back to their surroundings, Locke recalls the gargoyle mentioning a nearby settlement in the forest. His train of thought derails as a strange, out-of-place sight suddenly catches his keen eye. Kneeling down to inspect the bizarre anomaly, Locke stares in sheer disbelief at a neat row of thriving cabbages. Bewildered by the discovery, he wonders aloud how a perfectly cultivated cabbage patch could possibly exist in the middle of a dense wilderness. Shaking off the confusion, Locke decides it is getting too late to investigate further and announces that the party will camp there for the night. The weary group finally settles down to enjoy a peaceful rest under the quiet, starry night sky. Gazing into the darkness, Locke solemnly realizes that this strange location must be the very same village the gargoyle had spoken of earlier. Scanning the towering mountains ahead, the party continues their journey. Reaching their destination, Locke quietly reads the weathered sign for Chushino village. A strange noise suddenly catches his attention, prompting him to pause and listen closely. Loud, rhythmic snoring echoes through the desolate area as someone sleeps deeply nearby. Stepping closer to the slumbering figure, Shannon gently tries to excuse herself and get their attention. The mysterious villager continues to sleep soundly, completely oblivious to the group's presence. Shaking the man lightly, Shannon offers a cheerful greeting as the sleeping figure finally begins to stir. Leaning in close, she warmly urges the drowsy stranger to wake up. Blinking open his eyes, the bewildered villager immediately assumes he is looking at a beautiful angel. Resigning himself to his supposed fate, the man mutters that it must finally be his time to pass on. Pouting his lips for a dramatic kiss, he boldly declares he has no regrets as long as this cute girl takes him to the afterlife. Disgusted by the sudden advance, Shannon shrieks and violently smacks the delusional man away. Snapping completely awake, the terrified villager scrambles backward and frantically accuses the group of being bandits. Locke calmly clarifies that they are simply adventurers heading toward the nearby caves who heard about the settlement. The man's panic instantly subsides as he processes their true identities with wide-eyed wonder. Thrilled by their arrival, the villager enthusiastically urges them to go meet the village chief immediately for advice. Confused by the abrupt shift in tone, the party cautiously makes their way into the heart of the settlement. Locke mutters to himself, genuinely puzzled as to what kind of advice this struggling village could possibly need. Quiet whispers immediately ripple through the gathering crowd as the battered locals cautiously observe the newcomers. Scanning the emaciated villagers, Locke silently notes the grim reality of their starvation despite the region's lack of historical famines. An elderly man soon steps forward, warmly expressing his deep gratitude for the travelers' timely arrival. Bowing politely with a soft rustle of his robes, the elder introduces himself as Onigami, the village chief. Locke respectfully returns the greeting, introducing himself, Shannon, and the massive holy beast Lucky to the village leader. Glancing sideways at the man from earlier, Locke dryly remarks on his sudden and complete recovery. The proud villager stubbornly boasts that he easily neutralized a stone statue, claiming his supreme skills kept him alert even while dreaming. An older villager fiercely snaps back, mocking the man's failing eyesight by clarifying the statue was actually moving. Outraged by the insult, the boisterous man angrily bickers with the elder, completely ignoring their important guests. Interrupting the petty squabble, Locke forcefully steers the conversation back to the villager's urgent request for help. Instantly deflating, the embarrassed villager bows his head and sheepishly apologizes for getting carried away. Clearing his throat to restore order, Chief Onigami prepares to explain the grave situation. The chief reveals that about a year ago, a menacing horde of goblins relocated to the nearby Green Garden Swamp. He solemnly explains that the vicious monsters ruthlessly raided their already struggling fields, stealing whatever little food they had left. Lowering his eyes in sorrow, Onigami admits that a brave group of young men tried to fight back, only to be brutally defeated. Desperation practically dripping from his voice, the elderly chief humbly begs the capable adventurers for their assistance. Narrowing his eyes, Locke thoughtfully repeats the name of the familiar monstrous threat. He mentally notes that goblins possess dangerous cunning, making them an incredibly nasty threat once their numbers swell. Onigami laments that both the state and the guild ignored their pleas because the impoverished village could not afford the mandatory request fees. Processing the grim reality of the situation, Locke quietly acknowledges the chief's tragic explanation. Despite his empathy, Locke internally struggles with the harsh truth that he cannot sustain his own livelihood strictly through unpaid charity work. He firmly rationalizes that simply handing them a free rescue will not solve the root problem, as the villagers must eventually learn to survive and protect themselves moving forward. A tense silence falls over the village square as Locke considers their desperate plea. Breaking the quiet, Locke calmly announces that he has a proposal. He asks the chief to show him a local map and point out the exact location of the goblin horde. Unrolling the worn parchment, the chief eagerly presents the map to the travelers. Tracing the routes with his finger, Locke silently absorbs the geographical layout before nodding in understanding. He outlines a bold strategy to handle the monsters, leaving the chief gasping in sheer disbelief at the possibility of salvation. Adding to the good news, Locke assures the starving villagers that the thriving cabbage patch they saw earlier will sustain them for now. Overwhelmed with immense relief, the wary locals cheer and express their deepest gratitude. However, Locke firmly warns them that relying on handouts will only trap them in an endless cycle of starvation. To prevent future tragedies, the young beast tamer offers to personally help develop their struggling village. In exchange for his transformative services, he boldly requests a 20% cut of their future revenue once they become profitable. Sweating nervously, the chief admits that such a massive percentage is not something he can approve alone. Locke sighs quietly, slightly bothered by the hesitation but understanding their poverty-stricken reality. Adjusting his terms, Locke graciously lowers his demand to 10%, provided the entire village cooperates with his ongoing tasks. He assures them this cut will only apply to pure profit, carefully calculated after all labor and material costs are subtracted. Sweetening the deal, Locke promises to thin out the goblin threat and secure their food supply regardless of the villagers' direct combat assistance. A wave of hushed murmurs instantly ripples through the gathered crowd as they weigh the unprecedented offer. Whispers of hope and skepticism clash as the villagers debate their future. Observing them, Locke mentally pinpoints the villagers' core issue, noting their terrible geographical position blocking major traffic. He assesses that their lack of specialized exports and poorly maintained fields have utterly crippled their ability to earn foreign currency. Though he could easily do the work for free, Locke firmly believes the villagers must develop their own resolve to survive. Bowing respectfully, the chief requests a brief moment to properly consult with his people, a delay Locke easily accepts. Stepping away, Shannon curiously asks Locke what he expects the outcome to be. Confident in his logic, Locke notes that the village stands to benefit immensely and doubts they would ever refuse. He calmly asks to be notified when a consensus is reached, deciding to prepare his magical garden in the meantime. Sometime later, the chief returns with a heavy sigh and apologizes for keeping them waiting. He confesses that opinions remain sharply divided, as many villagers simply lack the confidence to improve their own lives. Seeking absolute clarity, the chief nervously verifies if Locke is truly willing to accept compensation entirely contingent on their success. Locke confirms with unshakable confidence, reiterating his promise to annihilate the goblins and secure their food if they agree to cooperate. He firmly guarantees that the non-combatant villagers will not face any physical danger during the operation. Hearing this ironclad assurance, the surrounding locals begin murmuring that they will never find a better deal. Suddenly, an angry voice cuts through the crowd, bluntly declaring that the offer is completely unbelievable. A bruised and battered young man hobbles forward, fiercely arguing that Locke's suspiciously generous terms must be a trap. Furious at the disrespect, the chief steps forward and harshly scolds the young man, calling him Warren. Clenching his teeth through visible agony, Warren bitterly claims he could easily slaughter the goblins himself if not for his crippled leg. The young man curses his own helpless state, tears of pure frustration brimming in his eyes. Locke silently studies the aggressive youth, instantly deducing that Warren is one of the brave locals injured in the previous goblin raid. Without uttering a word of judgment, Locke reaches into his bag and rustles through his supplies. Stepping toward the defensive young man, the beast tamer holds out a small, glowing vial. Locke casually offers Warren his uniquely arranged healing potion, ready to prove his absolute sincerity. Furiously rejecting the offer, Warren stubbornly declares that he will never drink the mysterious liquid. Unfazed by the hostility, Locke calmly suggests letting Shannon drink it first to definitively prove its safety. Thrilled by the prospect, Shannon eagerly volunteers to taste Locke's specially made concoction. With her heart pounding in sheer anticipation, she magically transforms into her human shape with a soft puff. Grabbing the glass vial, she immediately tips it back and takes a massive gulp. A radiant aura of light bursts around her as she screams in delight over the absolutely delicious flavor. She happily notes that unlike normally sour potions, This soothing brew instantly makes her entire body feel incredibly light. Watching her ecstatic reaction, Lucky bounds over and enthusiastically begs his tamer for a taste. Smiling warmly at his eager companion, Locke happily agrees to share the magical drink. Erupting into a brilliant glow, Lucky roars out in pure culinary bliss at the phenomenal taste. The massive beast joyfully bounces around the clearing, praising the remarkably refreshing and incredibly soothing effects. Locke observes his companion's energetic reactions with a quiet, highly satisfied smirk. Turning his attention back to his skeptic, Locke gently urges Warren to finally try the proven potion for himself. Scoffing that the others are merely acting, Warren reluctantly snatches the vial and violently chugs it. He is instantly struck by a heavenly shockwave of flavor, screaming out in utter deliciousness. Staring at the empty bottle in sheer disbelief, he marvels that it completely lacks the dank, rotten stench of typical potions. Savoring the lingering aftertaste, he realizes the vibrant liquid tastes exactly like freshly squeezed apple juice. He dramatically compares the flawlessly balanced sweet and sour profile to the nostalgic, refreshing memory of his first love. Suddenly, a powerful surge of restorative magical energy courses rapidly through his broken body. Warren completely panics in pure joy as he realizes his excruciating pain has vanished and he can finally move his legs again. Falling helplessly to his knees, he tearfully praises the impossible medical miracle he just experienced firsthand. Capitalizing on the absolute awe, Locke promises to freely heal the rest of the injured villagers if they formally agree to assist his current quest. Desperate to save his suffering people, Warren lunges forward to grip Locke's hands and fiercely begs for the life-saving treatments. Introducing himself as the chief's assistant, Warren formally apologizes for his earlier doubts and aggressively pledges their total cooperation. Witnessing the miraculous physical recovery firsthand, the surrounding villagers finally drop their heavy skepticism and murmurs of doubt. Chief Onigami watches the heartwarming scene unfold, nodding with a deeply relieved and gentle smile. Stepping forward with newfound authority, the chief addresses the crowd and firmly asks if anyone still dares to oppose the alliance. The gathered locals immediately murmur their unanimous agreement, their weathered faces glowing with bright, undeniable hope. Smirking confidently at his total diplomatic victory, Locke officially declares their mutually beneficial deal sealed. As Shannon cheers wildly for a celebratory meal, a grim reminder looms that they only have 6 days left to complete the official guild request. Taking a cautious bite, a villager begins to chew the mysterious food. The flavor rapidly processes on his tongue, widening his eyes in pure shock. Erupting with sudden joy, he screams that the meal is absolutely delicious. Another villager marvels at the incredible taste, admitting he previously thought cabbages were only good for horse feed. Smiling warmly, Locke explains that today's menu features cabbage soup, though the vegetable is equally delicious raw or stir-fried. He reveals that he secretly mixed a little recovery potion into the dish, instantly restoring the health of the sickly villagers. Shifting his focus to the upcoming tasks, Locke gently calls out to Shannon and asks for her assistance. He firmly instructs her to take orange ants A and B to protect the vulnerable villagers while they collect building materials. Surprised by the heavy responsibility, Shannon nervously asks if he is truly sure about leaving such an important task to her. Locke reassures her with absolute confidence, stating she is more than capable of handling the local monsters without much trouble. He playfully adds that her tiny orange companions are surprisingly self-sufficient in a fight. Bursting with newfound determination, Shannon happily accepts the mission and fiercely promises to do her absolute best. Outlining the grand strategy, Locke explains that building a direct road to Kronto will attract traveling merchants and permanently solve their supply shortages. Pausing his explanation, the beast tamer notes that they have one crucial step to complete before construction can start. A sudden, brilliant flash of magical light spectacularly engulfs the weary elders of the village. Gasping in sheer bewilderment, an old man marvels as his frail body suddenly feels incredibly light and powerful. Locke calmly explains he cast a temporary strengthening magic on them, ensuring they can move around much more easily during the project. Flexing their magically renewed muscles, the ecstatic elders cheerfully declare they feel like they are back in their physical prime. Sweating nervously at their vigorous movements, Locke frantically warns them not to go too rough lest they accidentally break their brittle bones. Watching in total awe, Shannon enthusiastically praises Locke's incredible ability to cast group strengthening magic so flawlessly. Locke humbly brushes off the praise, promising to teach Shannon the spell later since she can easily master it with a little practice. Stealing his resolve, the young tamer pivots his attention directly toward the massive labor project ahead. Thrusting his fist into the air, he loudly commands his team to begin building the new road. the monstrous familiars immediately spring into action, violently smashing boulders and clearing the rugged terrain. Moving with terrifying efficiency, Gargoyle-kun rapidly sweeps away the heavy stone debris to flatten the path. The massive ant familiars effortlessly haul enormous chunks of earth across the busy construction zone. After an intense period of hyper-efficient labor, Locke finally calls for everyone to stop and take a well-deserved break. Panting lightly, the group pauses to admire the incredible progress they have achieved in record time. Praising Potra and Gargoyle-kun for finishing the stone pavement, Locke optimistically predicts the entire road might be completed by tomorrow. He gratefully credits Lucky's magic for handling the core construction, planning to aggressively peddle their goods once the path is fully cleared. Taking a quiet moment to observe his resting companions, a deeply affectionate smile crosses his face. Overwhelmed with immense gratitude, he silently reflects that his loyal familiars are far more than he could ever ask for. Later that evening, a peaceful darkness settles over the newly expanded monster garden. Inside the cozy cabin, Locke diligently scribbles out the next day's plans under the warm glow of a desk lantern. Sneaking up quietly behind him, Shannon softly asks why he is still awake working so late. Glancing up from his scattered notes, Locke calmly acknowledges her sudden presence. He explains he is simply finalizing tomorrow's strategy, thanking her for checking in but gently urging her to get some sleep. Acknowledging her incredibly hard work today, he warmly insists that she desperately needs a good night's rest. Shaking her head stubbornly, Shannon fiercely declares she cannot possibly sleep while her master continues to toil away. Deeply flustered by the overly formal title, Locke sheepishly begs her to stop calling him master. Locke gently reassures his companion, clearly stating that he doesn't consider her his slave at all. A quiet moment of understanding passes between them as his deeply comforting words finally sink in. Gazing at him with pure admiration, she softly calls him a truly kind and gentle person. Blushing deeply, she emotionally declares how incredibly happy she is to have met him. Locke smiles warmly at her heartfelt confession, clearly touched by her overwhelming sincerity. Returning the exact same sentiment, he sincerely thanks her and admits he is just as happy their paths crossed. The two share a tender, heartwarming silence as their undeniable bond deepens in the quiet cabin. Shifting gears to business, Locke plans to have the villagers harvest cabbages tomorrow before selling the goods at the capital. Knowing there is a massive cabbage shortage in the city, he confidently predicts their stock will sell out rapidly. Glancing thoughtfully away, he clarifies he definitely hasn't forgotten their official guild quest amidst the village chores. Brimming with determination, he confidently asserts they will win while noting that the method of their victory is equally vital. His thoughts briefly drift to his past, wondering how his former comrade Titus would handle this exact situation. Exhaustion finally overtakes Shannon as she drifts off into a deep, peaceful sleep. Tossing slightly, she murmurs Locke's name in her dreams while unconsciously praising his amazing abilities. Locke quietly cleans up their living space while she slumbers softly in the background. Looking down at his sleeping friend, Locke whispers a gentle thank you for all of her hard work. Stepping outside into the cool night air, the young tamer gazes out across the dark wilderness. A shadowy figure approaches from behind, casually noting that Locke is still wide awake at this late hour. Getting straight to business, the newcomer asks what specific prey they are hunting tonight. Locke reveals they are hunting rainbow dragonflies, explaining the swift insects are much easier to catch under the cover of darkness. Pausing slightly, the mysterious companion questions what they should do about the lingering goblin threat. Locke calmly assures him the goblins won't dare attack as long as they remain fiercely guarded inside the village. He pragmatically adds that even if they ignore the horde, other ambitious adventurers will eventually arrive to subjugate the monsters. The companion tilts his head slightly, silently processing Locke's laid-back but highly calculated strategy. Shrugging off his minor concerns, the figure simply agrees to trust Locke's reliable judgment. With their nocturnal plan completely finalized, Locke gestures forward and signals for them to move out. The two silently vanish into the rustling brush, officially embarking on their midnight hunt. Deep in the shadowy wilderness, a tense silence violently blankets the moonlit terrain. The hunting party steadily navigates the rugged landscape in search of their incredibly elusive targets. Their hyper-focused search continues as they expertly track the glowing creatures through the dark woods. Time passes swiftly as the long night finally begins to fade into a gentle, illuminating dawn. Back at the cabin, the rhythmic clanging of pots and a simmering fire happily announce the start of a brand new day. Waking up from his rest, Locke rubs his tired eyes and groggily notes that it is already bright outside. The cheerful humming and bustling sounds coming directly from the kitchen steadily draw his attention. Assuming it is Shannon hard at work, Locke quietly prepares to go out and greet her. A warm smile crosses his face as he deeply appreciates her waking up so early to lovingly cook for them. Stepping into the kitchen area, he casually offers his thanks and asks if she needs any help with the breakfast preparations. A booming, monstrous voice cheerfully greets Locke, politely asking him to wait just a couple of minutes for the food to finish. Locke's eyes widen in absolute horror as the bizarre reality of the domestic scene instantly registers. Staring at the massive, apron-wearing gargoyle happily cooking at the stove, Locke hysterically screams that this is entirely wrong. Startled awake, Locke finds a massive, shadowy figure leaning over him to ask if he just had a nightmare. Locke quickly reassures Gargoyle-kun that he is completely fine while casually asking if there is anything he can help with. The towering monster proudly declares that he used to prepare all the meals at the Demon Lord's castle, confidently telling Locke to leave the cooking entirely to him. Impressed by his new companion's unexpected culinary background, Locke smiles warmly and praises the gargoyle's impressive skills. Walking outside into the crisp morning air, Locke pleasantly greets Shannon as she approaches with her wooden training sword. Bowing her head deeply, a flustered Shannon immediately apologizes for accidentally falling asleep the previous night. Locke warmly smiles and gently pats her head, assuring her that she has absolutely nothing to worry about. Noticing her tightly gripped wooden sword, Locke casually asks if she is heading out early to practice her swordsmanship. Shannon enthusiastically confirms she is going for some slashing practice, explaining that Gargoyle-kun completely took over her usual breakfast duties. Watching the massive, fearsome beast cheerfully cooking in a cute apron, Locke's sweat drops and admits that the bizarre sight still feels incredibly off. Shifting her focus back to her tamer, Shannon worriedly asks if Locke is exhausted from his secret late-night activities. She pointedly mentions that he went out entirely on his own last night to hunt for the elusive rainbow dragonflies. Surprised that she actually knew, Locke wonders aloud if she was asleep while clarifying that Lucky accompanied him on the dark hunt. Puffing out her cheeks in pure frustration, Shannon aggressively insists that she simply wanted to be useful and help him out on the mission. Touched by her earnest dedication, Locke sincerely thanks her and promises that they will catch the dragonflies together next time. Leaning in close with wide, hopeful eyes, Shannon holds up her pinky finger and asks him to formally promise her. Smiling softly at her endearing gesture, Locke happily intertwines his pinky with hers to seal their earnest deal. Their tender moment is abruptly interrupted as Gargoyle-kun cheerfully bellows that breakfast is finally ready. By the afternoon of the second day, Shannon enthusiastically confirms their solid plan to sell the cabbages in the market before delivering the dragonfly wings to the guild. Locke agrees with the strategy, stating he wants to scout the current market price for cabbages as the grateful villagers wish them a safe journey. Riding in a fast-moving carriage down the newly cleared road, Locke confidently notes they made excellent time and can easily sell their goods today. Looking toward a brighter future, he mentally formulates a grand plan to revitalize the deserted farmland with cabbage crops while teaching the locals how to hunt dragonflies to permanently solve their food shortages. Starting the day with high spirits, the group eagerly vows to do their absolute best. Rapid movement fills the air as someone aggressively practices their swings. Spotting an unfamiliar creature, Locke warmly questions when a friendly little chick arrived in the mini garden. Correcting him immediately, the young girl affectionately calls him Papa and firmly states that it is not a normal chick. Shock washes over Locke as he realizes the tiny bird is actually their majestic skybird. Utterly bewildered, he points out that the skybird used to be significantly larger than this tiny form. Shannon explains that while sorting through monster materials, they stumbled upon a strange and rare item. She reveals that the skybird somehow managed to eat the glowing item and instantly transformed into its current pint-sized state. Processing the bizarre explanation, Locke mutters in quiet resignation at the absurd turn of events. He immediately begins pondering if there is any possible way to reverse the magical transformation. Unbothered by its condition, the tiny skybird happily tweets and shines with innocent energy. Deciding to let it go for now, Locke shrugs and admits that the situation is ultimately fine. He logically concludes that since the bird's life isn't in any danger, it will eventually revert to its normal size. The group's cheerful mood suddenly shifts as a gloomy atmosphere descends upon the area. Wrinkling his nose, Locke begins aggressively sniffing the surrounding air in sheer confusion. Tracking the mysterious scent, he wonders aloud what could possibly be causing such a terrible stench. Sniffing closer to the source, Locke finally zeroes in on the exact origin of the foul odor. Pointing an accusing finger, he firmly declares that Lucky is the undeniable source of the terrible smell. Playing innocent, the massive beast awkwardly avoids eye contact and claims he can't smell a thing. Narrowing his eyes suspiciously, Locke bluntly demands to know exactly when Lucky last took a bath. Sweating nervously, the giant Fenrir hesitates before weakly guessing that he bathed just yesterday. Instantly catching the lie, Locke points out that they were together all day yesterday and no bath ever happened. Trapped by the ironclad logic, Lucky desperately backpedals and suggests it might have been the day before yesterday. Staring down his fiercely unhygienic companion, Locke calls out his name in a dangerous and warning tone. Panicking entirely, the massive beast begins to sweat as he realizes he cannot escape the impending scrub. Barking defensively, Lucky stubbornly insists that he properly licks himself clean and is perfectly fine without water. Sighing in total exasperation, Locke throws his hands up and mutters that they have absolutely no other choice. Thrusting his hand forward, the tamer officially declares the commencement of an all-out operation to capture and bathe Lucky. The familiars instantly rally to the cause, cheering excitedly as they accept the hilarious new mission. Gargoyle Kuan chuckles darkly, finding the sudden and high-stakes game of tag incredibly interesting. Refusing to go down without a fight, Lucky confidently warns them that catching a Fenrir won't be easy as he violently leaps away. Responding instantly, Locke channels a brilliant burst of magical energy across the entire hunting party. Blinding light washes over the eager familiars as the powerful buff fully activates. Locke firmly announces that he has cast temporary support magic on everyone except Lucky to massively boost their strength and speed. Feeling the sudden surge of overwhelming power, Shannon and the familiars happily thank their brilliant tamer. Laughing arrogantly, the fleeing Fenrir boasts that mere support magic cannot bridge the massive gap between their natural abilities. Stepping up to the massive challenge, Potra fiercely declares that she will be the first one to strike. A dramatic clash of expectations hangs heavy in the air as the Orange and Queen prepares to face down the legendary Fenrir. Exploding forward with blinding speed, Potra rapidly initiates the high-speed pursuit. Glancing back with a highly smug grin, Lucky openly mocks her naive attempt to catch him all on her own. Panting heavily, Potra struggles to catch her breath after initiating the grueling assault. Scoffing at her efforts, Lucky confidently reminds the exhausted ant that her attacks alone will never be enough to take him down. Refusing to surrender, Potra suddenly issues a loud, commanding battle cry to everyone hiding nearby. Responding instantly to her signal, a swarm of massive orange ants violently drops from the sky. Looking up in sheer bewilderment, the giant Fenrir realizes entirely too late that he has walked directly into a coordinated ambush. One of the massive ants swoops down rapidly, initiating a fierce and highly calculated tactical strike. The swarm brutally grapples the legendary beast, utilizing their combined weight to violently crash him into the ground. Groaning in sheer frustration, Lucky struggles helplessly against the overwhelming number of heavy insectoid attackers pinning him down. Cheering wildly at their flawless teamwork, Shannon and Potra celebrate their monumental victory over the massive beast. Smiling warmly, Locke enthusiastically praises Potra for brilliantly faking a solo attack to completely shatter Lucky's guard. Seizing the perfect opportunity, Locke steps forward and firmly orders his trapped familiar to behave and finally get washed. Snorting arrogantly, Lucky flatly refuses the command and begins to forcefully channel his immense magical aura. A devastating shockwave of pure magical energy violently erupts outward from the pinned beast. Screaming in terror, the entire swarm of orange ants is ruthlessly blasted away by the sheer concussive force. Shaking off the dust, Lucky boastfully admits their ambush was clever but ultimately lacked the raw magical power required to hold him down. Weeping over her sudden and humiliating defeat, Potra wails loudly about the Fenrir's terrifying, unfair strength. Analyzing the failed capture attempt, Locke quietly murmurs in understanding as he recalibrates his strategy. Smashing his stone fists together, Gargoyle steps up to the front line and boldly declares himself as the next challenger. A dramatic standoff instantly forms between the proud sacred beast and the former demon lord elite relegated to doing chores. Glaring down at the towering stone monster, Lucky mockingly questions if the gargoyle seriously believes he can secure a win. Smirking confidently, Gargoyle relishes the fact that he is being so severely underestimated by his furry opponent. He fiercely boasts that his century of combat knowledge paired with Locke's potent support magic completely overshadows his natural physical weakness. Lunging forward with explosive force, the stone giant screams that Lucky will deeply regret looking down on him. Roaring a thunderous battle cry, Gargoyle launches a devastating, all-or-nothing frontal assault against the massive wolf. With a single, humiliatingly casual slap, Lucky instantly swats the screaming gargoyle away to secure another effortless victory. Brushing off the pathetic attempt, the utterly unbothered Fenrir arrogantly demands to know who dares challenge him next. Stepping quietly into the clearing, Shannon respectfully requests permission to test her own skills in a brutal spar against him. The tension violently spikes as the blessed elf steps up to face down the terrifying dog-like monstrosity. Intrigued by her sudden bravery, Lucky highly encourages the fierce elf to come at him with absolutely everything she has. Unsheathing her gleaming blade with a sharp metallic ring, Shannon firmly acknowledges his dangerous invitation. Explosively launching herself off the ground, she initiates a terrifyingly fast and highly aggressive lethal strike. Effortlessly dodging her initial rush, Lucky laughs arrogantly and mocks that she will never even manage to graze his fur at this pathetic speed. Scoffing under her breath, Shannon narrows her eyes and drastically shifts her combat stance mid-air. Unleashing a blinding flurry of rapid-fire slashes, she violently attempts to overwhelm his incredible evasion. Dancing gracefully around the deadly barrage, Lucky smugly notes her skills are decent but ultimately too sloppy to ever land a solid hit. Glaring with absolute murderous intent, Shannon fiercely retorts that she is perfectly aware of her own combat shortcomings. Suddenly vanishing from his line of sight, she executes a flawless, impossibly sharp maneuver to instantly close the remaining distance. Shock violently ripples across Lucky's face as he realizes her striking accuracy has inexplicably skyrocketed in a fraction of a second. A devastating impact echoes through the clearing as she brutally bypasses his ironclad defenses. Utterly stunned by the lightning-fast retaliation, the paralyzed Fenrir barely has time to wonder exactly when she pulled off the impossible maneuver. A heavy, lingering tension blankets the clearing following the intense skirmish. Stepping forward with total authority, Locke firmly orders his massive familiar to be a good boy and finally get in the bath. The giant beast freezes in place, clearly anticipating an incoming trap. Suddenly, a blindingly fast blur of motion violently cuts through the air. Shannon seamlessly appears behind him with her blade pressed securely against his neck, coldly warning him that he will lose his head if he twitches. Trapped in her lethal hold, the legendary Fenrir sweats profusely as he realizes he has been completely outmaneuvered. Dropping his proud, aggressive stance, a thoroughly defeated Lucky sighs heavily and officially surrenders to his captors. Locke smiles warmly at his companion, praising her flawless execution and noting that her daily training is clearly paying off. Blushing deeply with immense pride, the fierce elf happily thanks her tamer for the high praise. Shifting his immediate focus back to the captive beast, Locke cracks his knuckles in deep anticipation. With a highly determined glint in his eye, he dramatically declares that it is finally time for the main course. A hilarious, high-stakes standoff officially begins between the playful Fenrir and the relentless tamer who absolutely demands a bath. Shedding his casual demeanor, Lucky violently channels his energy and roars for Locke to bring his full strength. Locke aggressively braces himself as raw magical power heavily sparks between the two fierce combatants. Just before the monumental clash, a sudden, bizarre anomaly forces both of them to halt their attacks. Pausing mid-stance, a highly confused Lucky sniffs the air as an incredibly sweet fragrance drifts across the battlefield. The giant wolf's eyes snap wide open in sheer shock as the mysterious source of the aroma rapidly approaches. Fluttering happily above the tense warriors, the tiny skybird cheerfully chirps while emitting the bizarre scent. Staring up at the miniature avian in total bewilderment, Locke instantly recognizes his transformed familiar. Hit by the overwhelming magical fragrance, Lucky's massive body begins to sway unsteadily as his consciousness rapidly fades. Succumbing entirely to the potent airborne spell, the legendary beast completely collapses into a deep, heavy slumber. Inspecting the immediate area, Locke realizes the tiny bird must have secretly consumed a powerful sleeping flower to produce such a devastating knockout effect. Cheering wildly in absolute victory, Locke happily thanks the little avian for effortlessly subduing their overwhelmingly slippery target. Wasting zero time, the enthusiastic tamer quickly rallies his entire team to furiously scrub the sleeping monster together. Meanwhile, far away near the foreboding New Leaf dungeon, a completely different party trudges forward in utter misery. Riding inside a cramped wooden carriage, a highly agitated Isaac aggressively screams about the agonizingly long travel time. The worn wheels of their transport violently rattle and bounce against the rough, unforgiving dirt path. Exhausted by his endless whining, an annoyed teammate brutally commands the angry gladiator to shut his mouth. Insulted by the sharp reprimand, Isaac forcefully grits his teeth in pure, unadulterated fury. Violently cursing Locke's name, the enraged warrior fiercely vows to make his former companion bitterly regret his supposed betrayal. Snapping back harshly, EMI demands complete silence while brutally reminding Isaac that they were the ones who actually betrayed Locke first. The cold, undeniable truth violently strikes the gladiator, temporarily leaving him stunned in the moving carriage. Refusing to accept reality, he arrogantly dismisses his former teammate as nothing more than a pathetic, useless luggage carrier. Banging his heavy fist in absolute frustration, Isaac wildly boasts that his frontline combat skills alone elevated them to their prestigious S-rank status. However, a highly traumatic memory forcefully echoes in his mind, reminding him that a superior official explicitly downgraded their true combat value to mere C rank. Clenching his fists until his knuckles completely turn white, Isaac furiously declares that he will never accept such a humiliating demotion. Driven by pure, blinding spite, he aggressively screams out a desperate vow to win and forcefully prove his worth to everyone. Sitting directly opposite to his explosive temper tantrum, Kara lets out a heavy, utterly exhausted sigh. Completely unbothered by his heroic rant, she bluntly informs the fracturing party that she absolutely refuses to help collect the dangerous Orengo eggs. Adding to the rapidly mounting despair, EMI sheepishly apologizes while admitting she is entirely incapable of hunting the elusive rainbow dragonflies. Discussing their ongoing mission, Kara sharply reminds the group that they don't need to gather everything since hunting wyverns is their primary goal. Glaring at her teammate, Kara finally voices her lingering frustration and bluntly demands to know why he is acting so completely full of himself. Scoffing aggressively, Isaac immediately fires back that he absolutely refuses to take that kind of criticism from her. Kara furiously lists his terrible leadership qualities, criticizing him for blindly accepting vague requests and dragging them into the party without any prior discussion. Making her stance crystal clear, she firmly declares that she and EMI are only helping out of necessity and will permanently leave the party once the mission ends. Unfazed by the massive threat of their departure, Isaac coldly tells her to do whatever she wants. Asserting his total dominance over the fractured group, he strictly commands that he will be the sole person giving orders for the remainder of the quest. A heavy, awkward silence fills the violently rattling carriage as the tense team endures the rest of their highly uncomfortable journey. The worn transport finally grinds to a halt as the driver formally announces that they have safely reached their destination. Stepping out of the carriage, Isaac casually flips a small coin to the driver and arrogantly tells him to keep the change. Inspecting the incredibly meager payment, the frustrated driver immediately protests that the single coin isn't nearly enough to cover the fare. The disgruntled driver forcefully argues that he went out of his way to bring them dangerously close to the dungeon and demands proper compensation for his valuable time. Seething with pure anger, Isaac violently slams a larger payment into the man's hands and snarls a rhetorical question to shut him up. Cursing bitterly under his breath as the carriage happily rattles away, the gladiator deeply resents the sudden and humiliating extortion. Clenching his heavy fists in absolute fury, Isaac screams into the void that everyone around him is treating him like a complete fool. Forcing himself to manually calm down, he bitterly dismisses the mounting insults and forcefully refocuses his recently shattered pride. Looming ominously before the fractured party, the massive, wind-swept entrance to the New Leaf dungeon silently waits to swallow them whole. With only 4 days remaining until the strict guild deadline, Isaac aggressively orders his reluctant teammates to march forward. The deeply troubled adventurers tread heavily into the dark, foreboding cavern to face whatever monstrous dangers lie waiting ahead. Meanwhile, in a vastly happier place, Locke and his loyal familiars spend a joyful, stress-free moment completely showering Lucky with affectionate pets. Isaac pushes through the thick foliage, firmly ordering his team that they are only aiming for the wyverns deep inside the dungeon. The heavy underbrush continues to rustle loudly as the party advances deeper into the ominous cavern. Glancing back at his silent teammates, he strictly instructs them that they will only bother collecting the other required items on their way back if they actually have time. Suddenly, a screeching Orengo drops from the dark canopy to violently ambush the passing adventurers. Reacting with lethal speed, Isaac brutally bisects the hostile monster in a single, devastating swing. Annoyed by his party's lingering silence, he clicks his tongue and aggressively demands that they at least give him a proper response. Pausing his confident march, a sudden, unsettling realization forcefully disrupts his arrogant momentum. Looking around the suspiciously quiet environment, he mutters to himself that the current situation is actually incredibly weird. He realizes with a deep frown that the usually abundant rainbow dragonflies and green frogs are completely nowhere to be seen. Slicing through another screeching Orengo, he bitterly notes that while the birds are present, their precious eggs are entirely missing. Absolute frustration boils over as he violently questions how on earth they are supposed to collect the contest items if the dungeon is completely barren. A sudden, sharp movement in the peripheral shadows instantly snaps him out of his furious rant. Paranoia deeply sets in as he angrily theorizes that the incompetent guild must have posted the request without bothering to verify the dungeon's true state. Scowling fiercely at the empty cavern, he happily concludes that if his theory is true, then the lack of items is completely the guild's fault. Smiling with twisted vindication, he loudly vows to aggressively pursue this administrative error the moment they safely return to town. Before he can celebrate his logic, a heavy rustle from the nearby bushes violently forces him into a tense, defensive stance. A grotesque, grinning monster steps directly out of the darkness, issuing a chilling growl as it locks its sights on the party. Isaac stares at the vile creature in sheer disbelief, instantly recognizing the terrifying threat as a goblin. Unleashing a furious horizontal slash, he brutally cuts down the screaming monster while raging at its unexpected presence. Cursing the irresponsible guild personnel, he bitterly complains that absolutely no one warned them about a deadly goblin infestation. The surrounding foliage begins to violently shake as multiple unseen threats rapidly converge on their compromised position. A massive, heavily armored goblin knight suddenly drops into the clearing with a terrifying, high-pitched squeak. Gritting his teeth against the mounting pressure, Isaac realizes with pure horror that even high-leveled goblin variants are openly appearing. Surrounded by the relentless rustling of the advancing horde, he correctly deduces that this entire dungeon zone has been fully converted into a goblin nest. He violently stares down the imposing goblin knight, sweating heavily as the terrifying reality of the high-leveled threat finally sets in. The massive monster ruthlessly swings its heavy blade, instantly forcing the gladiator into a desperate, bone-rattling block. Despair violently grips his mind as he completely comprehends that the dungeon is utterly overrun by the malicious horde. A terrifying swarm of lesser goblins emerges from the shadows, squeaking and raising their crude weapons to completely surround the isolated party. Isaac furiously locks blades with the towering knight, violently struggling to hold his ground against its overwhelming physical might. The crushing, relentless weight of the monster's brutal assault begins to slowly overpower the desperate gladiator. A haunting memory suddenly echoes in his mind, brutally reminding him that without Locke's divine protection, his party is completely worthless C-rank trash. Agonizing physical strain visibly contorts his face as the goblin's heavy weapon inches dangerously closer to slicing his neck. Screaming in pure, unadulterated defiance, he violently rejects the mental insult and desperately attempts to heave the massive blade away. Gritting his teeth until they nearly shatter, he furiously declares that there is absolutely no way he will ever lose to such pathetic small fry. Suddenly, Mi chants a fiery incantation from the backline and launches a devastating fire spear directly at the monstrous knight. The blazing magical projectile ruthlessly impales the beast, resulting in a massive, fiery explosion that instantly obliterates the heavy threat. Lowering her glowing staff, Mi calmly checks on Isaac and asks if he is okay after the terrifyingly close call. Sweating profusely but utterly refusing to abandon his fragile ego, Isaac stubbornly claims he could have easily defeated the monster entirely by himself. Unimpressed by his arrogant boasting, Mi coldly points out that he seemed to be violently struggling through a relatively tough battle. Before he can formulate an angry retort, another ominous rustle from the pitch-black darkness sharply signals that their nightmare is far from over. A weapon clicks as a character shifts focus back to the surrounding goblin threat. Cursing under his breath, Isaac aggressively engages the remaining monsters with pure frustration. Heedless of his heavy exhaustion, he continues to violently slash his way through the enemy ranks. Panting heavily, Kara cautiously asks if the bloody battle has finally ended. Wiping away his sweat, Isaac confidently confirms that the Goblin Knight was their leader and the area should now be completely secure. A soft, restorative magical glow suddenly envelops the battered warriors. The soothing magic rapidly washes over the team, completely erasing their wounds and burning exhaustion. Fully recovered, Isaac arrogantly orders the team to hunt down the wyverns so they can finally return to the guild. Still shaken from the terrifying ambush, the girls reluctantly agree to push forward. The fractured party treks deeper into the dark, treacherous depths of the rocky cavern. They soon spot a large flock of screeching wyverns perched ominously on the distant stalagmites. Observing the massive swarm, Mi nervously notes that they are heavily outnumbered by the winged beasts. Formulating a quick plan, Isaac instructs Mi to pierce the wyvern's wings with magic while he charges in to draw their attention. Pointing his blade forward, he decides they should first target two isolated wyverns near the edge of the group. Gripping her magical staff tightly, Mi confirms her understanding of the aggressive strategy. Exploding from cover, Isaac recklessly charges toward the massive beasts to intentionally provoke them. Enraged by the sudden intrusion, the nearest wyvern unleashes a deafening, hostile roar. The winged monstrosity immediately lunges forward, violently attempting to tear the gladiator apart. Evading the deadly strike, Isaac violently shouts for his mage to execute her ranged attack. Channeling her fiery mana, Yamai fiercely launches a blazing fire arrow straight into the dark sky. The blazing projectile ruthlessly pierces the creature's wing, forcing it to scream in agony as its flight is abruptly cancelled. The crippled beast plummets from the air and crashes heavily onto the unforgiving stone floor. Seizing the perfect tactical opening, Isaac violently drives his weapon downward for the lethal kill. His heavy blade brutally severs the monster's life force in a massive, devastating strike. The slain wyvern completely collapses, hitting the ground with a dull, lifeless thud. Smirking triumphantly at his easy kill, Isaac confidently orders the team to move on to their next target. Without warning, the deafening flap of wings is violently followed by a terrified scream from EMI. A third, entirely unseen wyvern violently ambushes the backline, catching the arrogant gladiator completely off guard. The massive beast viciously strikes out, sending Kara tumbling as she shrieks in absolute terror. Panicking entirely, EMI desperately dashes toward her injured friend to quickly assess the terrifying damage. Clutching her freshly bleeding wound, Kara groans in immense physical agony. Furious and terrified, EMI screams at Isaac for failing to protect the sidelines, bitterly reminding him that Locke always managed to keep them completely safe. Enraged by the humiliating comparison, Isaac furiously deflects the blame by screaming that he had no idea another monster was hiding nearby. He coldly dismisses their vulnerable state, aggressively shouting that a designated escort like Kara should easily be capable of defending herself. Utterly disgusted by his pathetic excuses, EMI spits back that his toxic reasoning is completely ridiculous. Refusing to tolerate his lethal incompetence any longer, Kara forcefully grabs EMI and declares they will absolutely die if they stay with this idiot. Panic quickly bleeds into his voice as Isaac desperately screams for them to shut up and not abandon him. Staring at him with pure, unadulterated contempt, Kara firmly states that she can no longer tag along with his suicidal leadership. Turning their backs on the arrogant gladiator, the two girls quickly retreat toward the dungeon entrance to save their own lives. Left entirely alone in the treacherous darkness, a deeply terrified Isaac pathetically screams Kara's name into the empty void. Fleeing into the shadows, Kara desperately urges EMI to abandon their broken party and switch to Locke's side where things will definitely be better. Clenching his fist in the suffocating darkness, Isaac bitterly realizes that his teammates have completely abandoned him too. A heavy, terrifying silence completely swallows the gladiator as the crushing weight of absolute isolation shatters his fragile ego. Haunting voices ruthlessly echo in his mind, endlessly praising Locke's brilliant leadership while mocking his own pathetic failures. The agonizing memories continue to aggressively spiral as phantom critics violently express their utter disappointment in his abilities. Shadows physically warp around the broken warrior as the sheer volume of humiliating comparisons pushes his fractured psyche to the absolute breaking point. Locke's name aggressively repeats in his head like a maddening curse, amplifying his furious realization that absolutely everyone favors his rival. Driven completely mad by overwhelming resentment, a twisted and terrifyingly dark resolve finally settles into his glowing eyes. Embracing his pure spite, Isaac violently vows that if he cannot succeed, he will forcefully ensure that everyone fails the entire quest. Drawing upon his absolute darkest emotions, the enraged gladiator channels a massive, volatile surge of devastating energy into his trembling weapon. Screaming Locke's name with unadulterated hatred, Isaac furiously declares that he will never let his hated rival secure a victory. The terrifying buildup of wildly unstable magical power instantly alerts the surrounding area to the catastrophic situation rapidly unfolding. Unleashing his ultimate destructive strike, the deranged warrior violently screams out the name of his catastrophic Grand Cross technique. A blinding shockwave of pure, devastating energy violently erupts from his weapon and rips mercilessly through the solid dungeon floor. The catastrophic blast instantly expands outward, utterly annihilating the surrounding cavern structures in a deafening roar of absolute destruction. Massive pillars of jagged stone violently shatter as thick, choking dust completely engulfs the entire ruined battlefield. Miles away from the violent epicenter, a colossal pillar of black smoke ominously rises far above the distant tree line. A thunderous boom violently shakes the distant horizon, instantly catching the sharp attention of Locke and his peaceful village team. Staring wide-eyed at the terrifying explosion, an anxious companion fearfully points out the massive disturbance to their vigilant tamer. Narrowing his eyes at the rising ash, Locke grimly confirms that the catastrophic blast definitely originated from Isaac's doomed party. Wasting absolutely zero time, Locke firmly asks Shannon to accompany him to the blast zone, prompting her immediate and enthusiastic agreement. Taking total control of the sudden crisis, Locke commands the rest of his loyal familiars to diligently continue their critical village work. Turning to his legendary mount, Locke places his absolute trust in Lucky, who confidently barks his immediate readiness for the rescue mission. The rescue team aggressively surges forward, riding the massive Fenrir at blinding speed straight toward the terrifying column of smoke. Arriving directly at the devastated dungeon entrance, Locke notes the immense, choking smoke violently billowing out from the ruined cavern. Peering through the dense, toxic fog, Locke immediately spots a heavily battered figure violently coughing amidst the absolute wreckage. Stumbling weakly through the suffocating debris, the broken gladiator continues to violently hack up the thick, swirling ash. Hearing the sudden approach, Isaac slowly forces his bloodshot eyes upward to glare directly at his incoming rival. Standing tall above the kneeling ruins, Locke coldly calls out the disgraced warrior's name with absolute, unwavering authority. Spitting blood from his bruised lips, Isaac maliciously sneers that it serves Locke right since all the wyverns and quest materials have been obliterated. Laughing like a total maniac, the deranged gladiator violently boasts that absolutely everything required for the guild quest has been reduced to dust. Coughing through a twisted smile, Isaac aggressively gloats that Locke's party is now completely incapable of finishing the vital competition. Staring down in pure, unadulterated disgust, Locke softly admits he never imagined his former teammate would stoop to such pathetic sabotage. Panicking over the ruined quest, Shannon frantically suggests they immediately return to the royal capital to simply purchase the required materials. She aggressively argues that while buying external materials might be slightly unfair, securing a total victory is vastly more important than playing by the rules. Firmly rejecting the easy way out, Locke calmly orders them to investigate the rubble first since there might still be surviving wyverns trapped inside. Scoffing at Locke's naive optimism, Isaac aggressively tells them to search all they want as he turns his back to shamelessly retreat. Limping cowardly away from the massive disaster, the disgraced gladiator maliciously sneers that he looks forward to their inevitable next encounter. Locke remains perfectly silent, glaring daggers directly into the back of his pathetic, retreating former comrade. Ignoring the fleeing traitor completely, Locke fiercely steps forward into the suffocating smoke to brave the terrifying depths of the ruined dungeon. Stepping into the shadowed depths, Locke silently surveyed the ruined dungeon floor. Glancing at the massive corpse, Locke deduced that the monstrous creature was a goblin knight. He confidently stated that taking down the formidable boss meant the village was finally safe. Processing the surrounding destruction, Locke murmured in quiet understanding as he surveyed the aftermath. A sudden realization forced him to look much closer at the scattered remnants of the devastating blast. Thick, choking smoke continued to billow violently from the completely shattered stone walls. Locke grimly noted that absolutely everything in the immediate vicinity had completely disintegrated into dust. Acknowledging the sheer explosive force, Locke mused that Isaac actually possessed high magic power and was vastly better suited as a magic user. Shannon sadly pointed out that the tattered scales and claws were entirely destroyed and completely useless for their guild delivery. Resigning himself to the catastrophic loss, Locke sighed heavily and suggested they simply head back to base. Suddenly, a cheerful voice echoed through the dark ruins as a highly unexpected discovery was made. Bursting with pride, Potra happily presented her grand find to the completely bewildered group. Staring in absolute shock, Locke realized the pristine wyvern eggs had miraculously survived the blast entirely unharmed behind some heavy rocks. Drooling slightly, Shannon innocently wondered aloud if the incredibly rare monster eggs were yummy. Cheering in absolute triumph, Locke instructed his team to carefully transport the precious cargo straight back to their mini-garden. Returning to the village later, the locals cheered wildly upon hearing that the terrifying goblins were completely defeated. Shannon thoughtfully asked if they still needed to hunt the lingering goblins hiding deep within the swamp of the New Leaf. Smiling warmly, Locke reassured his anxious companion that handling the current threat was completely fine. He smoothly explained that their old map used an outdated name, meaning the swamp was actually the exact same location as the dungeon they just violently cleared. Biding their time while Isaac's team struggled, Locke spent the next day eagerly teaching the villagers how to grow cabbage and capture rainbow dragonflies. When the final day of their departure officially arrived, the group gathered near the newly constructed village perimeter. Staring up in absolute awe, a villager completely marveled at the massive, fortress-like gate now physically protecting their home. Shannon cheered wildly, confidently declaring that the heavily fortified walls would easily repel any future monster attacks. Stepping forward with profound respect, the elderly village chief gently called out to Locke. Bowing his head deeply, the grateful man offered his most sincere and heartfelt thanks to the heroic tamer. He firmly promised that the entire village would strictly follow Locke's teachings to further develop and aggressively prosper. A young villager chimed in with a bright smile, extending a massive thank you to Potra and the rest of the hard-working familiars. Laughing uproariously, the chief proudly declared they would permanently rename their home to Chushino Cabbage Village to properly honor their brand-new specialty crop. Waving affectionately, the deeply grateful locals warmly begged the legendary adventurers to come visit them again soon. The sturdy carriage rattled smoothly down the dirt path as they officially left the revitalized settlement far behind. Staring out toward the open horizon, Locke's expression hardened with absolute, unwavering determination. He mentally prepared himself, fully knowing that the final confrontation with his treacherous former party was all that remained. Seen off by their joyful new friends, Locke aggressively commanded his team to head straight for the royal capital Kronto. Navigating through the bustling, noisy market, Locke searches for his specific destination. A familiar voice suddenly cuts through the heavy crowd, eagerly calling him over. Locke spots his hard-working ally at a food stall and warmly calls out Warren's name. Approaching the busy merchant, Locke eagerly asks how the local sales have been going. Warren happily reports that the cabbages are selling like hotcakes exactly as predicted, crediting their success to handing out tasty samples of cabbage rolls and soup. Gesturing toward the busy street, Warren points out an additional factor driving their incredible profits. He excitedly explains that enthusiastic customers are more than willing to buy their new specialty crop at the fully requested price. Grateful for the massive earnings, Warren happily hands Locke his promised share of the impressive profits. Pleased with the amazing results, Locke instructs the villager to use the remaining funds to purchase a demon cow for the village's ongoing development. Bowing in deep gratitude, Warren sincerely thanks the tamer and declares that the village owes everything to him. With the funds secured and the village thriving, Locke confidently notes that all of his necessary preparations are finally complete. Turning his gaze toward a massive building, he prepares to handle the very last item on his urgent agenda. He steps directly in front of the Towering Adventurers Guild to officially finalize the high-stakes competition. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, Locke steps confidently into the bustling guild hall. A deeply arrogant voice instantly calls out a casual greeting to the newly arrived tamer. Lounging against the counter with a highly smug grin, Isaac openly mocks Locke for arriving so late to their final showdown. Locke remains perfectly silent, glaring coldly at his treacherous former teammate. A heavy, suffocating tension violently fills the guild hall as the two bitter rivals finally lock eyes. Breaking the silence, the gladiator sneers that he honestly assumed Locke ran away after completely failing to gather the required competition materials. Unfazed by the pathetic taunt, Locke calmly replies that he would never abandon a direct challenge. Chuckling darkly, Isaac violently mocks the tamer for supposedly showing up entirely empty-handed just to secure a humiliating loss. Ignoring the aggressive insults, Locke firmly demands that Isaac submit his collected materials so they can finally settle this dispute. Scoffing at Locke's unwavering confidence, the gladiator mutters that his rival is desperately pretending to be tough. Stepping in to officially judge the match, the guild receptionist announces that she will now carefully inspect the delivered goods. Brimming with absolute arrogance, Isaac steps back to relentlessly gloat over his supposed impending victory. He aggressively commands Locke to drop to his knees and completely apologize for ever daring to challenge him. Staring right through the arrogant warrior, Locke coldly informs him that an apology will absolutely never happen. The receptionist formally announces that Isaac's Grayla party successfully delivered the dragonfly wings, orango eggs, and emeralds. Shifting her attention back to her official ledger, she prepares to make the final, devastating ruling. To everyone's absolute shock, the guild official loudly declares Locke as the undisputed winner of the high-stakes match. Isaac violently jolts backward, screaming in pure disbelief as his entire arrogant reality shatters. The receptionist calmly explains that Locke had already delivered a massive, game-winning haul of wyvern materials, wings, eggs, and emeralds beforehand. Panicking entirely, Isaac aggressively argues that Locke reached the dungeon long after his party, making the massive early delivery completely impossible. Lunging forward in unadulterated fury, Isaac violently grabs Locke's collar and accuses him of using dirty tricks with the corrupt guild. Letting out a deeply exhausted sigh, Locke stares blankly into the raging gladiator's desperate, bloodshot eyes. With a swift and brutal slap, Locke violently knocks the gladiator's hand away and firmly denies the pathetic accusation. Turning the tables entirely, Locke coldly suggests that Isaac should have hunted the materials himself instead of secretly buying them from a local store. Sweating profusely, Isaac desperately stammers that he personally defeated the monsters and violently denies the damning allegation. Locke absolutely destroys his rival's pathetic lie by pointing out that the delivered materials clearly bear the official seal of Tsushino Village. Struck completely speechless by the undeniable evidence of his own cheating, the disgraced gladiator freezes in absolute terror. Staring down his former party, Locke reveals he predicted their failure to gather the necessary materials after bumping into them at the dungeon entrance. Recalling the encounter, Isaac remembers how Shannon's staged words tricked them into returning to the royal capital to buy supplies. Exposing their flawed logic, Locke explains they assumed he lacked the items and tried to sabotage him by buying the entire city's supply. Smiling triumphantly, Locke reveals they already had plenty of materials, so he simply had the store owner sell his own excess stock to Isaac at an inflated price. Mocking his former comrade, Locke states that Isaac wouldn't have wasted so much money if he hadn't been completely blinded by greed. Furious and confused, Isaac angrily demands to know how Locke managed to reach the dungeon before them. Tension thickens in the air as Isaac glares desperately at the beast tamer, waiting for an answer. Unfazed by the outburst, Locke calmly asks if his former teammates actually bothered to study the map carefully. Pointing out their ignorance, he explains there is a much faster, albeit far more dangerous, straight-line route from the royal capital to the Fresh Verdure dungeon. Grinding his teeth in absolute frustration, Isaac struggles to process his own massive strategic failure. Breaking her silence, Kara calmly admits that she actually knew about the hazardous shortcut all along. Whirling around in shock, EMI furiously demands to know why the Saintess kept such crucial information hidden. Calling the magic user an idiot, Kara bluntly questions why they would ever purposely drag themselves through a deadly forest. Panic rising in her voice, EMI screams that winning this match is the only way they can maintain their prestigious S-rank status. Gesturing desperately toward Locke, EMI tries to make Kara understand the terrifying gravity of their situation. Driven to the edge, EMI shrieks at Kara, demanding to know if she even cares about beating their former teammate. Letting out a long, heavy sigh, Kara stares blankly at her hysterical companion. Completely destroying the party's morale, Kara points out that EMI is literally the only person left who still cares about winning. Utterly stunned by the betrayal, EMI freezes as the devastating realization completely washes over her. Silence falls over the crumbling S-rank party as their unified front officially shatters into pieces. Humiliated and defeated, the group stands paralyzed under the crushing weight of their own incompetence. Trembling with uncontrollable rage, Isaac grinds his teeth hard enough to crack them. Rubbing salt in the wound, Locke casually thanks the gladiator for conveniently taking care of the goblin threat. Explaining the reality of the quest, he notes that Tsushino Village desperately needed help but lacked the funds to hire the guild or the country. Connecting the dots, Locke deduces the guild purposely assigned this specific request to quietly aid the impoverished villagers. Flashing a knowing smile, the beast tamer revels in the absolute perfection of his plan. Detailing his flawless strategy, Locke reveals he sent Shannon to harvest wyvern claws and scales near their nests on the very first day. Delivering the final blow, Locke admits he completely manipulated Isaac's party into doing all the heavy lifting with the goblins. Realizing he was played like an absolute fool, a trembling Isaac curses Locke for using him. Losing the last shred of his composure, the gladiator erupts into an agonizing, profanity-laced scream. Cutting through the chaos, a booming, authoritative voice commands them to stop immediately. Stepping firmly into the clearing, the imposing figure of the guildmaster arrives to halt the confrontation. Acknowledging the authority figure, Locke respectfully greets Titus as he takes control of the scene. Wasting no time, Titus announces that Kid has fully confessed to everything, including his corrupt collusion with Isaac. Glaring sternly at the disgraced gladiator, Titus firmly declares that this pathetic charade is finally over. Locking eyes with the ruined adventurer, the guild master calls out Isaac by name to seal his fate. Sweating profusely, Isaac shrinks back in terror as his entire world instantly collapses around him. Stripped of his pride and his rank, the former leader stares at the ground in absolute defeat. Gasping for air, Isaac mutters a final, breathless curse as his grand ambitions completely disintegrate. The scene fades on the definitive victory of the beast tamer, leaving his treacherous former friends broken in the dust. Following the intense confrontation, the tense matter was finally settled completely. Immediately after the dust settled, Isaac and his disgraced party were ruthlessly interrogated by the authorities. The guilty adventurers sat in grim silence before being handed their harsh, inescapable punishments. Acknowledging that EMI and Kara only abandoned their teammate because a terrifying Fenrir threatened their lives, the guild officially downgraded them to rank C. Following the complete dismissal of their S-ranked party, Kara and EMI desperately asked Locke to form a new team with them. Looking at his former comrades' shocked faces, Locke politely but firmly declined their desperate offer. Sometime later, the two girls chose to believe in each other and formed a brand new party together. Meanwhile, an intense investigation into Kid's past crimes began, resulting in a prison sentence that might still increase. Isaac barely avoided becoming a slave, but he was ruthlessly forced to work in a mine for half a year and restart his career at Ranky. Standing alone with his thoughts, Locke silently reflected on his own future path. Breaking the quiet moment, a companion gently approached and asked the tamer what he was thinking about. Brushing off the deep concern, Locke casually mentioned that he was just thinking about his childhood friends. A quiet moment of reflection stretched peacefully between the two companions. Locke continued to gaze thoughtfully into the distance as he processed his swirling emotions. Sighing softly, he admitted the painful truth that despite growing up entirely together, they truly knew absolutely nothing about each other. Staring into the distance, Locke acknowledged that there was a massive amount of personal reflection he needed to do. He quietly reasoned that if things like that happened to his childhood friends, getting along with his monstrous familiars would be even harder. The peaceful silence of the wilderness surrounded the thoughtful tamer as he gathered his resolve. Rustling the nearby leaves as he shifted his stance, Locke firmly decided to fully accept his past failures. Staring ahead with burning determination, he swore to believe in his new friends and use his immense power entirely for their sake. Listening intently to the heartfelt vow, his companion murmured a soft sound of absolute understanding. Looking directly at the giant Fenrir, Locke warmly smiled and declared that he would be completely under Lucky's care. The legendary beast stared back with profound, unwavering loyalty shining in his wild eyes. Barking a confident agreement, Lucky happily told Locke to just leave absolutely everything to him. A heartwarming sense of peace finally washed over the newly solidified duo. The tranquil moment continued as the pair silently reaffirmed their unbreakable bond. Suddenly, Shannon's cheerful voice echoed across the field as she brightly announced that their meal was finally ready. Thrilled by the promise of fresh cabbage rolls, Locke happily shouted that he was coming, realizing that they had successfully settled at least one massive problem. A strange, ominous shape silently floated in the dark skies far above their peaceful sanctuary. Gazing at the heavens, Locke remained completely ignorant of the fact that he would soon be involved in a terrifying future matter. Unbeknownst to the happy tamer, that catastrophic matter would violently concern the entire royal capital. Deafening screams fill the royal capital as terrifying ogres unexpectedly rampage through the city streets. A massive ogre violently smashes its colossal fist into the ground to cause a devastating impact. A battered victim slumps completely lifeless to the ruined pavement. Panicking entirely, an adventurer realizes that the relentless ogres will quickly obliterate the entire capital if left unchecked. A towering ogre unleashes a blood-curdling roar that fiercely echoes across the chaotic battlefield. Desperate for survival, one adventurer nervously suggests they only need to hold their ground until the official knights finally arrive. Angrily rebuking the coward, another warrior quickly points out that the knights will simply steal all their hard-earned achievements. While they argue, a massive ogre suddenly lunges menacingly toward their highly distracted position. The terrified adventurers freeze in absolute horror as the towering beast ruthlessly closes the distance. The monstrous creature violently winds up a devastating punch meant to crush them straight into the dirt. Suddenly, a blinding blur of motion violently intercepts the lethal attack just before it lands. Overjoyed by the miraculous rescue, an adventurer happily screams Locke's name as the tamer makes his dramatic entrance. Landing smoothly, Locke calmly apologizes for his delay and explains that some minor errands held him up. Immensely relieved, the battered adventurers beg him to fight hard and immediately leave the rest of the grueling battle to him. Flashing a highly confident smile, Locke firmly promises to handle the terrifying situation completely. Emboldened by his sudden arrival, the rallied adventurers boldly declare that it is finally time to counterattack. A furious ogre wildly charges through the thick dust, determined to crush the newly inspired resistance. Preparing to intercept, a brave mage swiftly raises her staff to channel a devastating defensive spell. EMI unleashes a blazing flame spear that brutally pierces the charging monster's thick hide. Maintaining her combat stance, she quickly warns Locke not to lower his guard amidst the violent chaos. Smiling warmly at his former teammate, Locke sincerely thanks EMI for the timely magical cover. Turning back to his own squad, Locke firmly asks Potra to take over the battlefield command while she eagerly accepts. Puffing out her chest, the Ant Queen proudly boasts that tactical leadership is her absolute forte. She rapidly divides the squad into highly efficient teams, assigning Gargoyle to Group E while ordering Shannon to fight directly alongside her. Channeling a brilliant surge of energy, Locke aggressively casts a powerful spell across his entire squad. He announces that he just applied auxiliary magic to massively boost their base power, triggering ecstatic cheers from his loyal familiars. Thrilled by the overwhelming magical surge, the entire squad violently launches into a highly coordinated offensive. Moving with blinding speed, Shannon expertly swishes her blade and unleashes a devastating, sweeping slash. Massive explosions and brutal slashes rip mercilessly through the ogre ranks as the familiars absolutely dominate the field. Another deafening blast completely obliterates an ogre with terrifying, overwhelming force. A cornered ogre snarls fiercely, desperately attempting to hold its ground against the relentless onslaught. A singular, devastating strike violently crushes the towering monster straight into the shattered pavement. The heavily battered beast groans in pure agony as its massive body completely collapses in defeat. Scoffing at the effortless victory, Lucky arrogantly complains that taking them down in one blow is incredibly boring and barely counts as a warm-up. Locke gently chides his giant wolf, noting that rank A ogres only seem weak because Lucky's natural strength is completely absurd. Scanning the broader battlefield, Locke proudly notes that Potra is flawlessly managing the skirmish while effectively coordinating with the local adventurers. He enthusiastically praises the Ant Queen's natural leadership skills, acknowledging that she and Shannon make a terrifyingly efficient combat duo. Nearby, a terrified civilian screams in absolute horror as a deadly threat rapidly approaches. An ogre stomps heavily toward the defenseless victim, aggressively raising its massive weapon for the brutal kill. Reacting with lightning speed, an adventurer violently blasts the monster backward with a rapid-fire magic wind bullet. The fierce battle against the monstrous ogres rages on as the familiars continue their relentless assault. Gargoyle screams in utter frustration, realizing his heavy physical attacks aren't working against the massive beast at all. Watching the intense struggle, Locke suddenly remembers that Gargoyle's true immense power is still completely sealed and cannot be unlocked alone. Seizing the critical moment, Locke swiftly commands Lucky to rush over and provide immediate combat support for their struggling stone companion. A deafening thump violently shakes the ground as the massive ogre is brutally slammed into the cracked pavement. The surrounding adventurers erupt into victorious cheers as they successfully bring down the very last ogre in the ruined plaza. Immense relief washes over the battered warriors as they gratefully praise Locke's party for stepping in to save their lives. Catching his breath, an exhausted adventurer notes that 10 ogres appearing inside the royal capital simultaneously is an absolutely unheard of disaster. Deep unease settles over the survivors as they nervously wonder what sinister force could have possibly caused such a terrifying raid. A warm, soothing light suddenly bathes the injured fighters as a powerful healing spell washes away their gruesome wounds. Completely rejuvenated, the highly grateful adventurers excitedly thank the kind saintess for her miraculous medical intervention. Kara beams brightly, flashing a radiant and angelic smile as she gracefully accepts their heartfelt appreciation. Shattering the holy illusion entirely, she aggressively demands they buy her brand new clothes to prove their supposed gratitude. Her former teammates sweat drop at her shameless extortion while she coldly reminds the crowd that she never forgets a medical debt. The heavy, rhythmic thundering of armored horse hooves violently interrupts the battlefield's brief moment of peace. An intimidating squadron of heavily armed Imperial Knights abruptly charges directly into the center of the ruined plaza. Marcus, captain of the 101 Imperial Knights, arrogantly thanks the exhausted adventurers for their minor cooperation in the so-called exploration. The bewildered adventurers repeat the word in sheer disbelief, deeply insulted by his incredibly dismissive phrasing. Marcus coldly announces that his knights will be immediately confiscating all the valuable ogre corpses for further official inspection. Bitter curses ripple through the tired crowd as the captain ruthlessly declares that he will accept absolutely no complaints regarding the seizure. The arrogant knights immediately fan out, completely ignoring the adventurers as they secure the massive monster carcasses. Tensions violently escalate as the exhausted adventurers glare absolute daggers at the royal forces blatantly stealing their hard-earned loot. Furious at the blatant robbery, a high-ranking guild official violently bursts into the plaza to demand an immediate explanation from Marcus. The enraged official aggressively accuses the knights of shamelessly stealing the exact monsters that the adventurers just risked their lives to kill. Dismissing the righteous anger, Marcus smugly repeats that the unprecedented ogre invasion strictly requires a full, unhindered imperial investigation. The smug captain condescendingly reminds the raging adventurers that they will eventually receive a standard payout for their minor assistance. Outraged by the insultingly low compensation, the guild official screams that the officially offered amount is completely unacceptable. Marcus coldly retorts that this is a royal operation rather than a normal market trade, making the meager monetary compensation legally binding. Grabbing the knight's armor in pure fury, the official violently points out that the imperial forces only showed up after the adventurers had already risked their lives. Glaring down with absolute menace, Marcus rests his heavy hand on his sword and dangerously asks if the official is trying to pick a fight with a royal knight. The furious official scoffs in sheer disbelief, completely refusing to back down from the heavily armed captain's lethal threat. A sharp, echoing clap violently cuts through the tense air as another figure confidently steps in to forcefully de-escalate the explosive situation. Locke steps directly between the arguing men, firmly declaring that he and the vice-captain will be taking over the hostile negotiations. Snapped completely out of his blind rage, the guild official sheepishly apologizes for letting his quick temper get the better of him. Marcus crosses his heavy arms and lets out a deeply annoyed hum, silently judging the tamer's sudden and bold interruption. The tense, potentially lethal standoff slowly dissipates as Locke masterfully steers the volatile conversation away from absolute bloodshed. Watching from the bruised sidelines, an exhausted adventurer bitterly mutters about how completely awful the Imperial Knight's behavior truly was. Another fighter grimly agrees, fiercely warning that if this blatant oppression continues, every single adventurer will completely abandon the country. They solemnly reflect on the undeniable fact that adventurers act as a crucial line of national defense by raiding dungeons and hunting deadly monsters. Acknowledging that their collected dungeon artifacts directly increase the nation's strength and heavily reduce civilian casualties, the fighters bitterly realize the knight's arrogance threatens everyone's future. Slamming his fist in sheer frustration, Titrus furiously shouts that the stupid bastard failed to understand a single thing and that there were hidden reasons for his massive outburst. Startled by the sudden eruption of rage, Locke silently notes that it is incredibly rare to see the usually composed guild official get so deeply emotional. Calming down slightly, Titrus bitterly admits that he and Marcus have always shared an absolutely rotten, highly antagonistic relationship. Pushing his personal grievances aside, the official shifts his focus entirely back to business and firmly tells Locke that he has an urgent request for him. Titrus explains that highly valuable combustible stones are being frequently stolen across the royal capital, but a complete lack of eyewitnesses has severely crippled the investigation. Leaning forward with absolute trust, the official formally asks Locke to personally take over and thoroughly reinvestigate the baffling string of thefts. Crossing his arms in quiet contemplation, Locke absorbs the heavy responsibility of taking on a formal imperial investigation. Assuring the tamer of his absolute faith, Titrus promises guaranteed payment for his efforts alongside a massive bonus if he manages to successfully apprehend the elusive perpetrator. Nodding his head in firm agreement, Locke confidently accepts the highly challenging assignment and vows to uncover the hidden truth. A loud, highly embarrassing rumble suddenly echoes through the quiet room as someone's stomach violently demands immediate food. Blushing fiercely out of pure embarrassment, Shannon tightly grips her stomach and sheepishly apologizes for aggressively interrupting the serious meeting. Stepping out into the bustling city streets, the hungry group eagerly settles down to feast on some fresh, savory street food. Chewing enthusiastically, Potra beams brightly up at Locke and happily praises the incredibly delicious meat skewer. Locke warmly explains that the cheap, melt-in-your-mouth street food is actually a famous royal capital specialty known as skewered Kronto wild boar. Lowering her head in lingering shame, Shannon sincerely apologizes for rudely interrupting his highly important guild meeting earlier. Smiling gently at his distressed companion, Locke waves off her apology and reassuringly admits that he was getting incredibly hungry as well. Deeply moved by his boundless kindness and absolute understanding, Shannon blushes and softly thanks him. Wiping his mouth with a highly satisfied sigh, Locke announces that it is finally time to get moving now that they have thoroughly filled their empty bellies. Leading his loyal squad through the busy capital, the tamer stops confidently in front of a heavily stocked weaponry store. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, the group steps into the dimly lit shop completely filled with gleaming armor and deadly blades. The burly shop owner immediately recognizes his regular customer, enthusiastically greeting Locke and asking if he needs a brand new fitting. Offering a polite and respectful nod, Locke cheerfully wishes Matteo a good afternoon. Leaning heavily against the wooden counter, the blacksmith mentions hearing all the wild rumors regarding Locke's treacherous former party. Chuckling darkly, Matteo notes that those arrogant fools constantly belittled Locke's invaluable support magic and fully deserved to finally taste their own bitter medicine. Unfazed by the brutal gossip, Locke simply asks the skilled merchant if he knows anything about his legendary Divine Guardian equipment. Proudly declaring his vast expertise as a weapon shop owner, Mateo laughs and bluntly reveals that Locke's old gear was never actually S-class equipment in the first place. Shifting the conversation back to profitable business, the curious blacksmith asks what exactly brings the famous tamer into his shop today. Gesturing proudly toward his loyal familiars, Locke firmly states that he is looking to purchase highly suitable combat equipment for his young team. The burly shop owner's eyes widen in absolute astonishment as he finally takes a much closer look at the bizarre group of monsters. Marveling at the little girl's royal crown, Mateo instantly recognizes her as an incredibly rare orange ant queen before pointing out the towering veteran gargoyle. Shaking his head in pure disbelief at the terrifyingly powerful squad, Mateo mutters that Locke continues to be completely and wonderfully atypical. Generously waving his massive hand across the heavily stocked shop, the blacksmith invites them to try on absolutely anything they want as Locke gratefully thanks him. Chaos instantly erupts in the store as the eager familiars excitedly swing heavy blades and violently test out various lethal weapons. Posing proudly with their newly selected gear, the fully armed squad brightly announces that everyone has finally made their ultimate decision. Scanning their chosen weapons, Locke arches an eyebrow and cautiously asks if Shannon and Gargoyle are truly satisfied with their current selections. Shannon firmly insists she prefers the absolute familiarity of her current blade, while Gargoyle smoothly explains that his bare hands are perfectly fine since magic remains his primary attack. Turning his full attention to the tiny ant queen, Locke curiously asks if Potra is definitively settling on a magical staff instead of a melee weapon. Gripping the staff tightly, Potra flashes a radiant smile and proudly declares that she wants to learn magic so she can heroically help people just like her papa. Deeply touched by her absolute innocence, Locke internally questions if the tiny monster is actually capable of wielding complex spells. Staring up with blazing, unshakable determination, the little ant queen fiercely clutches her new magical staff as she mentally prepares for her brand new path. Locke encourages the eager little ant, noting that she possesses real magic power and can absolutely try training with them. Bursting with pure excitement, Potra enthusiastically agrees to the brand new magical challenge. Observing her natural leadership, Locke realizes that auxiliary magic will perfectly complement her commanding skills, prompting warm praise from Shannon. Stepping toward the exit, Locke officially wraps up his purchases and respectfully thanks the blacksmith for his generous assistance. The heavy shop door swings open with a cheerful chime as a new group of customers steps inside. Brushing past the tamer's group, one of the imposing newcomers offers a highly casual, dismissive apology. Glancing around the packed store, the arrogant stranger loudly complains that the weapon shop is entirely too crowded today. A sudden, violent jolt of shock violently interrupts the peaceful atmosphere as an unexpected strike lands. The tiny ant queen is brutally kicked aside, tumbling violently across the wooden floor before slumping heavily into a heap. Frantically rushing to her side, a deeply panicked Shannon drops to her knees and desperately checks if Potra is severely injured. Glaring down in absolute disgust, the cruel newcomer sneers that the monsters are a pathetic eyesore and questions why they are even allowed inside. Boiling with sudden rage, Locke fiercely confronts the arrogant attacker and aggressively demands to know why he launched such a vicious, unprovoked assault. The heavily armed stranger coldly looks down on the group, harshly warning the mere beast tamer not to bring women and filthy monsters into his presence.